Even the gods and goddesses of Olympus needed a day off. Sometimes they needed time away from the constant bickering and never-ending controversies of their family. On one such day, Wisdom and Moon found themselves discovering a hidden gem within the city that never slept, and meeting a familiar blonde knucklehead with a penchant for the color orange. Olympus goodness, it's the same every year, Hester muttered, weaving her way through the line of gods and goddesses that lined the streets of Olympus, queuing outside the temple of Zeus like they did the same time every year. Immortals major and minor, and even some of the nymphs and satyr that looked after Olympus were in attendance. Each was looking for a minute with the king while he was in a good mood. She spotted Artemis and Athena near the front, while near the back was Apollo and Ares, the pair likely having arrived late and didn't appear happy by it if their grumbling was any indication. She wasn't sure why the daughters of Zeus were queuing up when her brother tended to give them everything they needed and wanted regardless. Excuse me, coming through, Lady Hester. No cutting in line, Miss Hester. There's a line. Can she do that? Beats me. She gave everyone her signature warm smile. I'm sorry everyone, but I need to speak with my brother. It won't take long. Some of the other gods appeared pouty, causing her to shake her head. For deities that could live forever, they were sure impatient. Aunt Hester, I think this is the first time I've ever seen you take advantage of father after his night with Hera. The voice came from Athena, as Hester came to a stop at the doors of her brother's temple, sparing a glance as Athena tilted her head in her direction, gazing at her with those stern grey eyes of hers. Do you have something you wish for from father? The goddess of wisdom looked perplexed. She'd never known her aunt to ask for anything. Unlike the rest of their family, Hester enjoyed the simple things and wasn't one for extravagance. She didn't need the fine jewelry, or a giant temple. She too comforts and warmth over grandeur. It simply wasn't in her nature. The goddess of the hearth shook her head, and a small smile appeared on her face as she gently pulled the doors open. No, nothing for me. I've just come to visit my little brother, that's all. Don't worry, I won't keep him too long. She meant to go inside, but stopped and turned back towards her niece. What are you asking for this year, Athena? Athena straightened her back. Many of the world museums are in desperate need of refurbishment. Some go as far as needing renovations, but the mortals in charge are being difficult. I'm merely going to check with father to see if I can go down and hurry things along. Athena crossed her arms. Maybe ask for an additional museum, or maybe a library to be built in a location of my choosing later on. I'm sure you have a list made up for possible locations. Of course, without lists, nothing would get done. Something's never changed, Hester thought, before wishing her niece good luck. I hope you get what you're after. Behind Athena, Hester offered Artemis a wave. The goddess of the moon offered one in return before she disappeared through the doors. She heard some groans as she entered, but could only laugh as the doors closed behind her. Trekking inside, she unsurprisingly found her brother situating himself on his veranda that looked out across Olympus and down on the mortals' world. The temple of Zeus was one of the two structures built on the highest point of the fabled mountain, the other being the throne room which took up the left-hand side. The king of the gods was still dressed in his sleepwear, a dark blue robe covering his body, while a mug of coffee sat in his right hand. A range of breakfast food spread across the table, with a copy of the New York Times newspaper off to the side. To her surprise, he wasn't alone, and sat in front of him was the queen herself. Bathed in the light of the morning, it was no wonder why Hera was recognized as the most beautiful goddess on Olympus before Aphrodite arrived on the scene. She appeared to favor her original form, with her long black licorice-like hair swaying down freely down her back, untied from any braid she often styled it in. A smile was on her face that matched her husband, with small crumbs dotted across the top of her mouth with a half-eaten pastry in hand. Her dark brown eyes shimmed with happiness and amusement. She and youngest daughter were near copies of each other, but there was a regality in Hera's form that Hebe couldn't mimic. Beneath the table, her feet were bare with a golden ankle wrapped around her ankle. She couldn't help notice her foot brushing against her husband's leg. I didn't think Hera would be here. Normally, she retires to her temple after her night with Zeus, though it appeared that didn't seem to be the case. It didn't hinder her plans. She and Naruto had been planning today for a time and needed to see it through. Hera's presence wasn't going to stop her. Stepping onto the veranda and approaching the table where the happy couple sat, it took but a moment before both sensed her presence and turned their heads in her direction. Sister, Zeus's voice reached her first. The large god pushed himself out of the chair, a beaming smile on his face as he quickly crossed the veranda and scooped her up in a hug. His beard tickled the top of her head, and she found herself kept there for a few moments, before finally getting settled back on her feet. This is a nice surprise. Come, Join us for a late breakfast. Zeus is right. This is a nice surprise and a welcome one at that, Hera replied, putting her pastry to the side and dusting off her hands. To what do we owe the pleasure on this fine morning? Hester settled on the chair between them. It seemed Zeus wasn't the only one in a good mood. Her sister looked happier than she'd been in months. Perhaps their yearly ritual of Zeus taking her virginity was the final action needed to repair their marriage, however temporary it may be, until something else came along to infuriate the pair. Hopefully, today's meeting wouldn't be that event. Oh, nothing. I wanted to see if Zeus was free today, and if he had time to come into the city with me. Maybe get a spot of lunch. By the look on the god of the sky's face, that appeared to be something he wanted to hear. His broad smile got broader, and his electric blue eyes, the ones Thalia's inherited, glowed brighter in delight. That sounds like a terrific idea. I can't remember the last time we went into the city for a meal. Certainly not this decade. He looked across the table and back to his wife. Would you like to join us, my love? For a brief moment, worry filled Hester's heart. She hadn't counted on Hera attending the meeting with her, and if she did, then it would likely spell disaster. Thalia would be there, and since she had been at the center of her sister's ire over the past couple of months, she didn't think Hera would be able to keep herself in check. If she lashed out, not only would Zeus's anger also begin to burn, but Naruto would step in as well. It would be a mess, and not one that could clean up with a simple motion of someone's hand. Luckily for her, that worry was naught, as Hera shook her head. I'm afraid I already have pre-existing plans with Hebe and Elethia. There may be some other time. There's this little place in the city that's been all the rage amongst the gods of late. Maybe we could try it sometime soon. Strangely enough, that's where I was hoping to take Zeus today. Her sister visibly deflated, sticking her perfect lips out in a pout. How unfortunate, Hera muttered, now looking genuinely disappointed. Well, never mind. You'll have to tell me what it's like when you return, my love, and we can plan a trip ourselves, of course. I would love nothing more, my queen. Standing up from her chair, she walked to the other side of the table, and planted a soft kiss on her husband's lips, a hand gently brushing against his cheek. Last night was, I know. We haven't had an evening like that in some years. Let's hope we have many more nights like that in the future, she whispered back. The two were acting so lovey-dovey that Hester started to feel out of place, and tried to look anywhere but the happy couple. She didn't need to hear any details on their night together and gently hummed to herself as she waited for them to finish. Eventually Hera parted from her husband. I need to go and get ready. I meet with the girls in an hour. Enjoy your day together. Perhaps try and bring me back something sweet for dinner tonight. Am I not sweet enough for you, my beautiful wife? Zeus replied, a look in his eye that Hester didn't like. If she hadn't arrived when she did, the pair would have likely started using the table for something else. We'd be happy to, sister. With that, the goddess of marriage disappeared in a golden shimmer, leaving the king and his elder sister alone together. Nio won't be joining them. The twin of Ares hadn't visited Olympus in a long time. Many of their family hadn't seen Nio in decades, maybe even centuries. The only person who had any contact with the goddess of war was Hebe. Hera had tried on different occasions to coax it out from her daughter, but with no success. No doubt she would likely try again today. The relationship between Nio and her parents was tender at best. Still no luck on that front. Zeus sighed, and crossed his arms. That girl. She was never an easy one. She was never really the same after being denied a position on the Olympian Council. She remembered that day. Zeus chose Athena over Nio and gave her the seat instead of Nio, a seat which he had promised to Nio for a long time. She could still remember the hurt expression on her niece's face, worsening when Hera, who initially supported Nio, sided with Zeus on the decision. Athena was the better fit for the position. There was no denying that. As the goddess who resided over wisdom, strategy and warfare, the Olympian Council was the best fit for her. Afterwards, they all agreed they didn't need another deity of war, and Nio grew bitter and angry as a result. The little girl that would fawn for attention from her mother and father was arguably one of the most bloodthirsty deities on Olympus, perhaps even more so than Ares, and that was a frightening thought. Zeus didn't say anything. He merely turned his head and looked out across the world that was open to him. He didn't say it aloud, but he missed his daughter. Don't forget you have a long queue of people outside your temple waiting to ask you for things. All the god of the sky did was grumble beneath his breath. He was well aware of the other immortals of his pantheon, as well as the nymphs and dryads used the morning after his night with Hera to take advantage of his good mood. Whether they knew it or not, he caught on to their shenanigans centuries ago, but being the benevolent deity he knew himself to be, he went with it and acted in a manner that wouldn't give himself away. Oh, joy. Who's first? She gave him a look. Who do you think? He sighed. Which one is it this time? A museum? Or a library? Hester laughed. I think she might be aiming for both, along with some renovations. Maybe I should have given her divinity over greed too, and gluttony to Artemis. I imagine she's out there too. She's second in line. Of course she is. Letting out a small huff, Zeus quickly drank the rest of his coffee and stood up from his seat. With a click of his fingers, his robe transformed and was soon standing in his usual blue pinstriped suit with thunder dancing across the fabric. All right, let's get this over with, and then we'll head down to the mortal world. He visibly deflated a little, and walked a little slower back inside his temple, trying to look upbeat and happy. Wish me luck. Good luck, Zeus. Underworld, why are you telling me weeks later? The low and baritone voice of the ruler of the dead asked, his dark and obsidian-like eyes glancing down at his daughter from his throne. Did you not think this was information you should have shared then, instead of now, suddenly finding the marble tiles of her father's temple more desirable than ever before? The goddess of ghosts avoided eye contact, not wishing to see the coldness that was radiating from them. Why did she have to be so indecisive? She sat on the information about Naruto Uzumaki for well over a month, going back and forth whether to inform the ruler of the dead or not, before finally making her mind up earlier that morning. It wasn't something I thought I would ever discover. I wasn't sure how to approach the subject. It's not every day one comes across a man from the Golden Age that's found a way to defy time, she reasoned, though, by the look on her father's face, an expression of sheer neutrality. He wasn't buying it. The very fact that you came across such a person should have sent warning bells off in that head of yours. Were you planning on hiding this from me? No, Melano replied, stomping one foot on the marble as I said. I didn't know how to bring this to you. I didn't know how you'd react. A clap ran through the room, the sound coming from the Hades' two hands. Well, now you know. He glared down at her. If you had told me right off the bat when we first visited his place of work together, then perhaps my reaction would have been different. Hades wasn't sure how he would have reacted if Melano had brought this information to him weeks ago, but at least he wouldn't have been feeling angry at his daughter for keeping such information to herself for over a month. You've told me everything you know. You haven't left out any details. That's everything I found out, Melano confirmed, finally raising her face and looking him square in the eye. His relatives live in the oldest part of Elysium, as I said. They, she started, though fumbled over her wording as she tried to find the right words. The way they describe him. What about it? Well, he doesn't come across as a bad person. They had nothing but good things to say about him. Her hands twiddled together in front of her. He's very loved. I can't deny it wasn't sweet to see and hear. Hades leaned back in his throne, letting out a small scoff, before rubbing his head forehead with his pale hand. A man of the Golden Age living beneath our very noses for centuries. No, millennia. One wouldn't think it was possible. Despite his birth coinciding with the final decades of that age, Hades never met anyone alive from that generation. He was too busy residing in the stomach of his father and waging war with him. There had been talk amongst his siblings to try and go down to the mortal world and observe them. The mortals of the old age had abilities and gifts those of today could only dream of possessing. Everything they learned and knew about them came from their mother, the Titan, Rhea. Unlike the other Titans, she had watched them in idle curiosity and fascination from above. How is he still alive, after all this time? I don't know, nor do his loved ones in Elysium. They are as confused as us how he still lives. He should have died in the Great Shift. No one from the Golden Generation could have survived the destruction that the Earth Mother wrought upon the world. All he and his siblings could do was watch from atop Olympus as the world beneath them churned and twisted the world into something new. Landscapes changed, and oceans took new shapes around them. The once mighty supercontinent broke into the ones they knew today. The very thought of a single person surviving such an upheaval of the planet was ludicrous to acknowledge, and yet one did. He served his family hot drinks and delicious delicacies, while making idle chit-chat with them, never revealing what he was. He wasn't sure how to feel with this revelation. The man seemed nice enough, and his wife hadn't caught on to anything negative about the man. Persephone was a good judge of character, much like his elder sister in that regard. However, the fact he and Persephone hadn't caught on to the man's emotional ties to those in the underworld, and Melano had, showed him how complacent he'd become. That piece of knowledge didn't sit right with him. Clicking his tongue, Hades stood from his throne and descended the steps. With a flick of his wrist, his attire changed. Gone was his dark robes, replaced with the usual outfit he wore when visiting the mortal world. He needed answers, and he wasn't going to sit around and wait for someone to bring them to him. Sometimes, the only thing to do was to go and get them yourself. Hopefully, none of his family on Olympus would be visiting the fox's den today, though he planned on shrouding his divine signature, so no one stopped by for a visit at the same time. Change your attire, and follow me, father, Melano replied, watching as Hades moved past her and falling in line a few steps behind him. Where are you going? I mean, where are we going? We're going to the human world, and we're going to pay the fox's den a visit. Melano said nothing but did release a small gulp, her eyes remaining on the frosty back of the Lord of the Underworld. West Village. I can't remember the last time I visited West Village. Admittedly, not much has changed, though I do get a sense of nostalgia fall over me, Zeus proclaimed, walking side by side with his elder sister and glancing all around him. I wonder if that Chinese takeout place I used to like is still there. I remember I used to order from there nearly every day. I remember, Hester replied. They must have looked like quite the sight with Zeus's enormous height and frame and Hester's petiteness. Hester barely came up Zeus's chest. I also remember Hera banning you from going there ever again, because your temple and your clothes were beginning to smell exactly like the said restaurant. Oh, yeah. Instead of teleporting into the West Village, the pair had settled for traveling the old-fashioned way, jing down the lift of the Empire State Building, and walking through the streets like a pair of regular mortals. The guard stationed at the elevator that stopped anyone using the Olympian transportation system to Olympus looked ready to have a heart attack at the sight of the king. Clearly, Zeus didn't use this passage very often, though Hester was a regular during her walks around the city. They walked for a good 40 minutes, taking the long route purposefully to chat as brother and sister. Zeus, being who he was, didn't get as much free time as one would think, while Hester had been notably absent due to her new commitments. Hester, being who she was one of the few gods Zeus could drop all walls with and speak honestly and truthfully and would confide about his problems for hours. She was his shrink in a funny way, and a shoulder to lean on when the stresses of being king became too much. Their love, unlike that he had for Hera, and once upon a time, Demeter, was strictly that of siblings, nothing more and nothing less. She believed her brother needed that female presence in his life, more so than her other brothers. So, I know what Athena asked for this year, but what about Artemis? A soft grunt came from Zeus. She wants an upgrade on her chariot, but Hephaestus is, in her words, being a stupid head and telling her no, so she wants you to convince him to do it for her. More like ordering him to do it for her. Hester let out a soft laugh. You give in too easily to those girls. Have you ever said no to them? Zeus went to speak, but despite his mouth being open, no words came out. I thought not. I think you need to be a little tougher with them if you want my opinion. You're certainly tougher on the boys. The god of the sky gave his sister a dry look. His sons were, for the lack of a better term, idiots. Where they got it from he had no idea. It certainly wasn't from him. It must have been from their mothers. His daughter didn't give him a tenth of the problems his sons would find themselves in. Stop staring at the beautiful mortal, Zeus, Hester told him, annoyance laced in her voice. Across the street, a tall and attractive blonde woman proudly displaying her rather sizable assets in a low-cut top had caught her brother's full attention. What made it worse was the pair appeared to be silently communicating to each other with a series of winks and smiles. She could see the woman giggle into her hand, and a grin wove its way onto Zeus's face before a quick clap on the back of the head brought him out of it. Hester gave him a look, and the king had the good decency of gulping at the ire in her eyes. And you wonder why Hera has to keep such a close eye on you, but she started it. He motioned over to the woman across the street, who appeared to be losing interest quickly now that Zeus's attention was no longer on her. I was just, oh, I know what you were just, Hester replied, grabbing his sleeve and tugging him away and towards their destination at a quicker rate. I'm not being blamed for you forgetting your vows again because I didn't keep a closer eye on you. Hera's rage had already encompassed Olympus once this year, and that's already one too many. Do you really want to poke that bear again? No, Zeus shook his head, took one last look at the blonde woman before ignoring her existence and continuing forward. How much longer until we get there? Not long. It's just up this way. I hope this place is as good as everyone's been making it out to be. Athena and Artemis, in particular, have really been hamming this place up. It's not that far. A couple of minutes, and we'll be there. When a couple of minutes passed, Zeus couldn't help but stare at the brightly colored outside of the fox's den, and couldn't help compare it to that golden monstrosity Apollo called a temple. Orange was a bold choice, especially considering it was the brightest shade of anything for blocks. Hera would have a heart attack the moment her eyes rested on this place. This is the place Athena and Artemis have been talking non-stop over. Zeus asked, pointing up at the building with an incredulous look. It's like a giant Satsuma. Everyone has different tastes, I suppose. Hester shrugged and reasoned. Truthfully, she thought the outside of the fox's den was a little too bold even for her. But she knew how much her friend loved the color. Shall we go in, hum? Let's. The brother and sister pair closed the gap and were soon just a couple of meters from the front door. Hester couldn't deny. Her heart felt like it was beating like a set of drums against her chest. She and Naruto had been preparing for this moment. But now that it was here, Hester could only hope Zeus's mind was open to what he was going to learn. It would either end up great or end up very bad. She didn't feel like there was going to be any middle ground today. Just as she was about to reach for the door, Zeus's voice broke the silence, and Hester couldn't help but note the coldness laced in it. Turning her head, she felt her stomach drop, and her veins feel like ice was injected into them. Of all days, why did he have to appear? Hades. Hester couldn't stop her voice from sounding like a squeak. The god of the underworld looked across from his sister, a few meters between them with a surprised look on his face. Sister? His voice was as cold and smooth as always. This is a surprise. Yes, it is. I didn't think I'd see you until next winter solstice. Hester looked behind her brother and noticed the younger goddess standing a couple of feet behind her brother. Melano, is that you? Her grandniece was a rare visitor on the surface world. She couldn't remember the last time she'd seen the younger immortal, and how rare it was to see her in her normal form, instead of that ghastly ghostly appearance she tended to favor. Good afternoon, Aunt Hester, Melano replied. Her face was a mask of insecurities. Her dark eyes looked between the three older deities and gulped at how imposing the two sons appeared while squaring off with each other. Times like this, she wished Persephone was here to wrap her arm around her and tell her everything was going to be okay. It was no secret that the eldest and youngest sons of the Titan King did not get on, but if the stormy look on Zeus's face and the look of cold indifference on her father's was any indication, the two were not pleased to see one another. Come here, my dear. Hester noticed Melano's worry and ushered her over. She put an arm around her shoulders, bringing her closer to keep her calm. It did little to soothe her own. It was times like these she wished Poseidon was here. Though he had a temper like his brothers, the middle son was far more mellow in comparison. He wasn't the type to openly antagonize Zeus and Hades unless provoked first. It took a lot to rile the god of the seas up. Brother, Hades started, glancing at Zeus like the king of the gods was a bug that needed to be stepped on. Seeing his youngest brother was not on his agenda of things to do. What are you doing here, Hades? Zeus's voice felt like booming thunder from far away. Haven't you got the underworld to keep an eye on? Or are you beginning to slacken your duties? The same feelings were running rampant through Zeus as well and felt his good mood begin to fade. Seeing his elder brother once a year was already too much. You'd know all about slacking, wouldn't you? Hades looked over his brother's shoulder. What? No, Hera, did our sister finally let you off the leash again after your most recent affair? I'm surprised she'd let you out of her sight. Be silent, Hades. Do not speak of things you have no part in. Did I strike a nerve? Thunder boomed overhead, and very quickly the clear skies began to darken as thunder clouds started forming across the city. If that wasn't enough, the ground beneath them shook with nearby shadows visibly darkening. Finding her courage, Hester let out a guttural cough, drawing their attention. Stop it, both of you, she snapped at them. I know you two don't get along, but there are a time and a place, and this isn't it. Cut it out before you accidentally raise New York to the ground. Jingle all halted their actions and turned towards the now open door of the fox's den, a bell ringing in their ears. Sticking his head through the door, the blonde head of Naruto Uzumaki looked around at the small group forming in front of his stall. His blue eyes widened when he saw Hades, his thoughts running rampant in his head, before releasing a sigh. He looked between the two brothers, then at Melano, and then to Hester. I take it things haven't gone to plan. Hester snorted. It was a sound the two brothers didn't hear from their sister often. That's putting it mildly. He ran a hand through his hair. Can't do much about it, I guess. He looked back at Hades. By your expression, I'm guessing this isn't a social visit, correct? By your expression and by the fact you appear to know my sister. Hades glanced at his elder sister. You know who I am, don't you? Naruto nodded. I do. I've known since your first visit with your wife. I didn't feel it was my place to reveal such knowledge. The god of the underworld grunted back and merely stared back at him. Above them, thunder boomed, and all eyes fell on the god of the sky. Zeus had waited patiently, waiting for someone to explain what was going on. However, being out of the loop began to grind on his pride, and glared at Hester. What is going on? He demanded. Don't glare at her, you idiot, Hades hissed. She's not at fault here, no one is at fault here, but I think this conversation might be better had inside. We're drawing some unwanted attention, Naruto reasoned, and pointed out all mortals stood out on the streets looking frightened by the crazy weather, and the minor earthquake ripping through the city. Some were hanging on to street lamps as they tried to keep their balance, while others started taking shelter as lightning cracked across the sky. Come on, let's go inside. He put a hand on Hester's shoulder. Are you okay? I'm fine. I just didn't expect Hades of all people to appear today, you and me both, he joked before both disappeared inside, leaving a gawking Zeus and Hades. The reason their expressions looked so bewildered was simple. Neither had ever seen Hester allow a man who wasn't one of her brothers or her nephews touch her. Come on, I've got a peppermint tea brewing for you. You're a lifesaver. I've been known to do that from time to time. What in the world? Zeus muttered to himself. Seeing his beloved elder sister acting cozy with a male was irking him something fierce. Beside him, he noticed Hades begin to move, and motioned for Melano to follow. Hades, the elder son, didn't bother looking back at his brother as he opened the door and followed the pair inside. What? I'm not going to stand out here all day, Hades replied, before disappearing inside. It's nice to see you again, Lord Grandfather. Melano gave a quick bow before hurrying after her father. The god of the sky could do little else but follow after them, rampant with questions filling his head. Hester clearly knew the blonde man and suspected he must have been the one his daughters spoke so highly of. He looks like a one of Apollo's spawn, he thought to himself, just as many others had done before him. Shaking his head, he let out a loud huff. I should have stayed in bed with Hera. Now there was an idea he could get behind. He didn't get very far inside and almost ran into the back of Hades. Hades, what he started to say, but went silent as his eyes trailed to the spot Hades and Mino were staring at. Sitting on a table in the back with coloring books and crayons scattered across the table was none other than his daughter, Thalia. Thalia, he croaked out, surprise lacing his voice. The little girl looked up, hearing someone say her name, and looked over at the group. Before anyone else could say anything, she hopped off her seat and the three gods watched as she ran behind Hester and clung to her top. The goddess could only let out a low laugh and patted the top of Thalia's dark curls. No need to be shy, sweetie. Her little face peeked out from behind Hester, and Zeus could feel his daughter's eyes linger on him before hiding away again. Hester, what is the meaning of this? His daughter wasn't supposed to be here. She was supposed to be in California with her mother. If Hera found out she'd been brought to New York again, he was worried his dear wife would do something rash and unforgivable. Not to mention, the gods were not to have any contact with their demigods. The rule was in place for a reason. Granted, Artemis had a past due to the nature of her duties, as did Dionysus, who was currently helping Chiron in looking after the camp, but no one else should have been. In a lower voice he asked, why is she here? Instead of answering him right away, Hester took a seat and gently cupped Thalia's face. Why don't you head on to the back with Mr. Naruto, and have a little nap? I can tell you're getting tired, young lady. A pout grew on Thalia's face, but couldn't stop the yawn from breaking out. But I'm not tired, of course. You're not, she smiled. That's what happens when you stay up too late with Mr. Naruto to watch a movie past your bedtime. Go on now. Mr. Naruto has a blanket and pillow for you in his office. Okay, was all Thalia said before, giving the new people in the den one last glance. Like before, her gaze lingered on Zeus for a moment, before quickly disappearing through the door that led to the kitchen in Naruto's office. Hester's smile widened as her niece disappeared, and turned back to look at her family. I think she knows there's something about you that's familiar. They do say children can get a sense of when a parent or someone with a strong connection to them is near. What is she doing here? Zeus asked again. Outside, lightning cracked across the sky. He wanted answers. What kind of game was Hester trying to play? The goddess held a hand up. I know you're angry and confused, but all will be explained shortly, Hester replied, and motioned for everyone to take a seat. Naruto will be out shortly with food and drinks for us. She looked at Hades and Melano. He'll whip something up for the two of you as well. Hades grunted, and Melano nodded. I'm still confused to why you're both here, but regardless, it is nice to see you both. I didn't anticipate the two of you being here, but you're here now. Everyone in the room took a seat around the table. The brothers each took a seat on Hester's side, though opposite one another. Uneasily, Melano took the chair on the other side, stuck between the glaring brothers. This is highly uncomfortable, she thought. She could practically feel the animosity between the pair. Please, stop glaring at each other and calm down. I know this isn't what anyone expected to happen, But please act civil, Hester told them, before adding, I'll be disappointed if you both start trouble. Both grunted, with Hades leaning back in his chair. I'll be civil as long as he is. His hands rested on the table. I would never dream of upsetting you, Hester. The goddess smiled. Thank you, Hades. She then turned to look at her youngest sibling Zeus. Can I expect the same? Zeus didn't say anything right away. He merely kept glaring at his elder brother, unease feeling him. Whatever reason Hester had for bringing him here for had also gained the interest of the god of the underworld. He didn't know if he was going to like what it was, though his gaze flickered between Hades and the door Talia walked through. What was she doing here? Why wasn't she in California with her mother? For the sake of our sister, I will be civil. However, knowing my daughter is here, I can't help feel threatened with the feeling that our brother may try something against her, Zeus replied. Hester sighed, and a look of defeat appeared on her face. She didn't need to look at Hades to know what expression was now on his face from the way the shadows darkened across the room. Zeus always had to get the last word in. I think you're getting confused with yourself, Thunder Thighs. I'm not the one who goes around blasting children and their mothers out of existence. Hester and Melano could hear the venom in his Hades' voice. Melano was aware of the incident that Hades was referring to, and could see the rage building in her usually composed father. Or have you already forgotten? Your children are dangerous, and yours are worse. I'm thankful Persephone at least doesn't take after you, unlike the rest of your brood. Go hide in your dark holes in the ground. Hades, go back to Olympus and hide behind Hera's skirt. Both of you stop it. Hester called for them to cease their bickering, but started dreading the worst when Zeus pushed himself to his feet. Hades wasn't far behind, both breathing heavily. Her words weren't getting through to them. Gods, how stubborn and hard-headed could they be? They were near this hostile to one another at the winter solstice, but then again, she had the other gods to rein them in. Hera would keep Zeus under control, while Persephone, though not a member of the council, would stand by her husband and do the same. Meanwhile, Poseidon would keep an eye on the two, and step between them if called for it. It rarely happened, but there was a small handful of incidents when it did. Would anything go as planned today? My children were innocent. They did nothing wrong, Hades said in a low tone, his dark eyes getting dark by the second. You punished them and their mother for no reason, but your paranoia. There is a prophecy looming over us. I took the incentive, Zeus said back, and threw his hands in the air. They went straight to your realm. What does it matter? What matters is that they didn't even get a chance at life. You took it from them. The two gods started walking around the table, and towards each other. By some miracle, Zeus didn't have his master bolt on hand, nor did Hades have his helm of domination. She wasn't worried about the pair of them getting hurt. They had scuffled in the past, but this time they were in the lower world, and not Olympus. If they fought, New York might never be the same again, and many lives would be lost. Before any more words were said, or a fist could be thrown, a small breeze blew past Hester's ear. Between Zeus and Hades, another person appeared and threw their arms out to the side, hands pushing against the elder god's chest with enough force that the window shook from the impact. To Hester and Melano's surprise, both Zeus and Hades got sent sailing through the air. Both impacted the walls behind them and fell to the ground. Both were in a daze over what just happened. I'm only going to say this once. Where they once stood, both the god of the underworld and the sky found the blonde owner, his arms stretched out and palms glowing with gold energy. He looked annoyed, looking back and forth between the pair before they heard him say, in the future when Hester tells you to stop, you stop. Cause if you make her cry, I'll make you pay for it. He then brought one fist into his palm, and gave both a glare. You better believe it. Well, this is uncomfortable, Melano muttered beneath her breath, staring at the forms of her father and her grandfather as they steadily picked themselves up. At first, the surprise of what just happened was all over their faces. One moment they were in each other's faces, a fight potentially about to break out between the two brothers. Before they knew it, a flash of gold took over their sense of vision and felt a hand push them away with such force that neither had time to prepare for it. The pair remained with their eyes locked on Naruto, even after he threatened to beat them to a pulp if they made Hester cry. Not many would dare say those words to either of them, let alone both. He must have had balls made of celestial bronze. Flashes of rage would dance across the features of the god of the underworld, and god of the sky. To Naruto's credit, he didn't back down, nor did he hide away. He stood there, unflinching in front of Hester. It was almost as if he was protecting her from what might, or could happen. You would dare? Both gods asked. They glared at one another for copying the other. Yes, I would, Naruto replied, not backing down from the pair as the sky outside darkened, and the shadows in the room thickened. if you two want to fight, do it somewhere else. You don't come here and start tearing everything down. Not to mention, I won't let you upset Hester. Not on my watch. Beside him, Hester let out a sigh and left her chair to stand beside Naruto, who placed a hand on her shoulder. The goddess of ghosts couldn't help but notice the irked looks on Hades and Zeus's face from the action. It was certainly surprising to see Hester allow another man to touch her in such form. Are you two done? Everyone noticed the steel in Hester's voice, and Melano could already tell by the rise in temperature in the room that her divine power was leaking out more than usual. The older goddess's eyes lit up into two tiny fireballs, glancing between her younger siblings as if they'd stolen cookies from a jar that said "do not touch." The pair of you can't make anything simple, can you? Today is not about fighting, nor airing out your dirty laundry with each other. Both gods straightened their jackets, with Zeus fixing his tie and Hades his collar before walking back towards them. Both brothers had their eyes focused on Naruto, who merely glanced back at them in calm. The blonde felt annoyed, though didn't try to convey it too much. He was telling the truth though when he promised to make them sorry if they made Hester cry. He could tolerate a lot of things, but seeing his dear and cherished friend upset because her idiot brothers were having a hissy fit with each other was not one of them. If they wanted to start a fight, Naruto promised to be the one that finished it. They were lucky all he did was knock them to the other side of the room. Maybe what it took was sending them on a one-way trip to opposite ends of the city. Now there was an idea. You need to explain yourself, Hester, Zeus told her. His voice was quiet, but the seriousness of his words was evident for all to hear. Who is this man? Better yet, why is he here with my daughter, of whom I still want to understand why she is in New York in the first place? Electricity crackled around Zeus's hands. Watching quietly, Melano gulped at the action, wishing to be anywhere else but here. Or perhaps I should ask, what is he? No mortal should have the power to do what he just did. The goddess took a deep breath. Everything will be made clear, Hester replied. But first you must promise me that there will be no more outbursts or fighting. I did not bring you here to start a fight. She turned to Hades, who'd remained silent throughout the exchange. I want the same from you, Hades. A tsk sound came out from the god, of which Hester heard. Excuse me, do you have something you wish to say to me, Hades? In a rare act of defiance, Hester marched up to Hades and looked up at him, caring little for the height difference. Hades, despite his infamy, had the decency to look worried. Hades glanced down at her, then to Naruto, then to Zeus, before resting back on Hester. No, I have nothing else to say. I will behave. His expression morphed back into a mask of composure, internally scolding himself for letting Zeus's words get to him. Don't act so rash, you fool. Thank you, brother, Hester said to him, before turning back to their younger brother. Zeus, for the love I have for you, sister, I will agree, but I want answers. His steely gaze said it all. His love for Hester was pushing his pride and anger away, though for how long, anyone could guess. All it would take was a flick of a wrist, and everything nearby would become a war zone. And you'll get them, that I can promise you. She looked back over to Naruto. Could you finish the drinks and snacks? Naruto the blonde nodded. Of course, I'll be back in a few minutes. He gave one last look to the pair of gods watching him, before slipping back to the kitchen, mumbling something beneath his breath. Just so you both know, if you try anything like this again, I'm willing to take extreme measures to bring you both to heel. She showed off a bracelet sitting comfortably on her wrist, with a jewel sitting in the middle. To the horror of both Zeus and Hades, they watched the jewel glow purple. I will call her if necessary in an instant. Both Zeus and Hades appeared to settle down at the threat, though threw one last glare their way. Afterwards, the two returned to their seats in silence, trying to look anywhere but at each other. Feeling the situation had been diffused, for the time being, Hester sighed and returned to her seat. Okay, Hester, next time, start with that threat. If she followed through with it, she was sure neither god would dare pipe up. Being the eldest of 6 siblings could be such a pain sometimes. Maybe she needed a vacation. Some isolated beach somewhere would be nice, and some of those drinks with the little umbrellas. They sat in silence for the better part of 5 minutes, which felt like the longest and most awkward 5 minutes of Melano's life. I wonder if Cerberus would jump out of a hole in the ground, swallow me, and then take me back down with him. Anything's better than the tension around this table. How did Hester stand it? Then again, Hester had to place peacekeeper every time members of their family came into conflict. Looking at her from the corner of her eye, the goddess remained composed. A smile rested on her face, though she noted how her eyes were still resembling 2 fireballs. Zeus and Hades, Zeus and Hera, Artemis and Aphrodite, Ares and Hephaestus, Hades and Demeter, they were the most dysfunctional family in the world, and that named a few of the quarrels. People wondered why she kept to herself in the underworld. Anything was better than being stuck in this mess. I'm starting to think I should have left all this alone. What felt like the longest 5 minutes in the world. All 4 deities heard the door swing open and watched as the blonde owner appeared with a tray in hand. Naruto could sense the tension in the room, but pushed it aside and wore his usual smile, appearing next to Hester. Sorry to keep you waiting, Tia. 1 peppermint tea, thank you. Naruto. Next came Melano. If I remember rightly, it was a coffee with 2 sugars and cream. He lowered the drink down on the table, with Melano quickly cupping it between her hands. She gave him a small nod. That's right. Thank you, she said quietly. She watched him move to her father next, and inwardly applauded him for appearing so calm. And for Mr. Underhill, Naruto said, staring at Hades and hearing the annoyance laced in his hum as he used his alias name. Hester appeared amused, though Zeus let out a snort, which drew the ire of Hades, who sent him a quick glare. 1 amaretto coffee, thank you. 2 words were all Hades said, before falling back into silence. Finally, for Mr. King himself, Zeus, 2 pairs of blue eyes looked at one another. Hester informed me before today was you like to drink, so I hope this is to your taste. He lowered the final mug onto the table, and a strong scent of spiced pumpkin went across his sense of smell. The king of Olympus couldn't deny it smelled good. Despite his inner pride feeling wounded from the man's earlier shot on him, he pushed it down as deep as he could as he remembered his promise to Hester. Like Hades, he gave a quick thanks before taking the mug into one hand and bringing it up to his lips. He wasn't sure what to expect, but he couldn't deny the second the drink touched his lips, his eyes marginally widened. It was good, very good. Some cafes tended to make the pumpkin spice too weak, or too strong. Here, it was a perfect balance. He didn't feel the need to scrunch up his face. I'll give that to him. He knows how to make a good drink. It's a good thing I made a lot of these now that there's more of us than thought. Naruto told everyone and lowered a large plate of baked delicacies into the middle of the table. Everyone, including Zeus and Hades, leaned over to get a good look. Zeus in particular, zeroed in on the lemon slices that sat to one sat. Next to them, were slices of angel cake and rolls of Battenberg. Each one looked as good as the last. It's almost like someone told him how much I enjoy lemon slices, he thought, and looked at his smiling sister from the corner of his eye. Hester always did know how to butter him up, and keep him happy. Some movement came from the side and noticed Naruto pulling over a chair and took the spot next to Hester. A frown wove its way onto his face, as well as Hades. Neither appeared to like the idea of another male sitting so close to their elder sister. So, you guys have questions? Naruto replied calmly, looking at everyone sitting around the table. I'll fill in as many blanks as I can. It took no longer than a second before Hades managed to beat his brother and daughter to the punch. How are you alive? Your kind were wiped out years ago during the Great Shift. No one could have survived, to the point and blunt. Hades wasn't leaving any room for backtracking. Though irritated he didn't get the first question, Zeus remained silent, wishing for an answer too, while stuffing his face with the lemon cake. That's good, yeah. I figured that might be your first question, Naruto replied, scratching the back of his head, and chuckling. Honestly, I'm not sure myself how I survived it, though I suspect gear likely played a part in that too. The hairs on the arms of the deities stood on end at hearing the Earth Mother's names. Even Hester, who knew the story, never got over the feeling. Gear? Zeus stopped himself from grabbing another lemon slice. What does our grandmother have to do with you? The blonde shinobi stared back at Zeus, a seriousness in his eyes that stood firmer than the ones he showed earlier. She has everything to do with me. He reached over to the table next to them and grabbed a knife from the top. Everyone watched as he slowly dragged the edge across his palm, showing no pain at the metal tore the skin apart. Afterwards, he placed it back on the table and held his palm up for everyone to see. What they saw wasn't blood, but instead, the golden nature of the gods. Immortality. Naruto Uzumaki was immortal. You're immortal, Zeus stated as a fact, rather than a question. Are you telling us Gaia made you immortal? I am. Zeus's nostrils flared. Immortality was a precious privilege. It was a power all Olympians had but rarely used. To make someone who was immortal, the god had to willingly part with a small piece of their divine power, hence why it was a rarity on Olympus. Indeed, the last person made immortal by the gods was millennia ago. It simply wasn't something that happened anymore. Zeus was king, and Gaia had no right to create another. Her actions had enough consequences on Olympus. They didn't need to add one more to the mix. Why? Why would she give you that gift? To his, Hades, and Milono's surprise, the blonde scoffed and leaned back in his chair. It's not a gift, it's a curse. I didn't choose for eternal life. She gave it to me forcefully. His voice was bitter. She doesn't care for what others want, only her own ideals and desires. You still haven't told us what you are, Zeus asked, digging further into the mystery that was presenting itself. He got an answer, though it wasn't from Naruto. He's a golden man, Lord Grandfather, Melano said quietly, drawing the attention of everyone else. Zeus's eyebrows shot straight up, looking back and forth between his granddaughter and Naruto, a shinobi of the old era that predates the Olympians and Olympus, the ones that were given life by Mother Earth. She didn't want to say the primordial's name. Names had power, and she didn't want to draw any attention to herself. An array of emotions wept over Zeus's face, though his eyes went wide as he looked at Naruto. Of course, he was aware of the golden generation, but to think that one was still alive after so many millennia was unthinkable. He tried to put words together, but nothing was coming out of his mouth. His mind was rampant with thoughts, some negative, and fewer positive. You shouldn't exist, Zeus told Naruto point blank. The time of the Golden Men died before the end of the Titan War, and you should have gone down with it, and I agree with that statement. And yet Gia chose to lump me with immortality whether I wanted it or not, Naruto replied. He felt a hand fall onto his wrist and gave Hester a smile at her attempt to comfort him. You said Gia gave you immortality by force, and it's something you didn't want, Melano asked, seemingly growing in confidence as the talk around the table became less about Zeus and Hades fighting, and more about the mysterious blonde. Can you tell us how your circumstances came to be? The blonde shinobi turned to look at Hester, who merely smiled at him back and rubbed her thumb against his skin. It was her way of telling him she was here for him, and he was grateful she was. He sighed. To understand my circumstances, you have to go back years before the great shift happened, he told them, pushing his memory as far back as he could, back to when the Titans ruled. Unlike the people of today, my people wielded a power called chakra, a combination of physical energy and spiritual, that when blended, could allow us to perform feats that few could imagine. To prove his point, he put his two hands together, and everyone watched as bluish energy encompassed his body in a flicker of light. Instead of being warriors, we were known as shinobi or ninja, different than the ones today in the East, though not without similarities. Throughout a large portion of our time walking the earth, the clans of different families warred against each other for land, power, wealth, the usual cliché thing, until eventually, they came together and started forming villages. When this happened, the Titans took notice. Zeus and Hades, and even Hester straightened in their seats. How so? Understand, I wasn't born yet, so everything I know was handed down to me later in life, Naruto explained, but through history, the Titans kept an eye on us. When my village, Konohagakure, or the village hidden in the leaves came to fruition, Kronos sent his two strongest warriors to investigate, and put a stop to it, Hyperion and Atlas. Zeus growled out the names of the two Titans. The two Titans had been a thorn in the Olympians' side throughout the war between the two factions. Atlas, the Titan of endurance and strength, developed a rivalry of sorts with him. He always sought out the youngest son of Kronos when entering the battlefield, and the pair had some mighty battles throughout it. Hyperion was equally as formidable, and the closest in sadistic tendencies to the Olympian's father. Yeah, those two. Naruto scratched the back of his head, moving his neck from side to side, feeling some kinks building up. What I do know, is they were defeated and sent running by the founders of the Leaf Village, who stopped their advancement. Hashirama Senju and Madara Uchiha. The names meant little to Zeus and Hades. However, they took note that two men of the Golden Age were able to defeat a pair of all-powerful titans like Hyperion and Atlas. On a good day, they would hard-press the likes of themselves and their brother and sisters. They could likely take down some of the younger Olympians, and the rest of the minor gods a part of their pantheon. Atlas was second only to Kronos, with Hyperion not far behind. How can mortals have power equivalent to the likes of titans? The very idea of it is unthinkable, Zeus said aloud. It didn't seem possible in his mind. Mortals could grow, but surely they couldn't get to that height of power. Madara Uchiha and Hashirama Senju were recognized as two of the strongest to exist. Their lineage makes their chakra and bodies stronger. That whole business is another story in itself, so I'll leave that for another time, Naruto told them, before continuing. The stuff with Kaguya and the sage could wait for another day. Either way, afterwards Hashirama recognized the threat these entities could possess, and thus made sure that every Hokage that came after him knew of their existence. He didn't want the rest of the world to know. To avoid a panic, Hester nodded in agreement. Smart. I don't think any mortal would want to know that a group of all-powerful immortals are out there, and could try and destroy their homes in a moment's notice. It was why the pantheons of the world, including Olympus, didn't come out to humanity. The minds of most mortals wouldn't be able to handle such information, and panic would spread through the world. It would cause more harm than good. Then what? Melano asked, urging him to continue. Hades remained silent, listening intently to Naruto's words. Life continued after the encounter. Villages across the elemental nations, the name we gave the supercontinent, came to be. Konoha was built in the land of fire and became known as the strongest of the 5 major villages. The leader of the leaf was known as the Hokage. In this case, that was Hashirama Senju. For decades, we were in and out of a war with each village vying for supremacy over the other. By the time of the 4th Shinobi War, the 5 major hidden villages finally put aside their differences to fight a common enemy. Afterwards, we all decided it was time to let old grudges lie. He smiled, thinking back days the 5 Kages got together to keep the peace. Many years after the war ended, it was my time to lead the Leaf Village. Hades leaned forward, finally speaking after remaining silent since the start. You were one of these, Hokage. Naruto grinned, and patted his chest. I sure was. I was known as the 7th Hokage. My teacher, Kakashi-sensei, was the 6th Hokage, and my dad was the 4th. He laughed and rubbed the back of his head. I guess you could say I was bound to get it eventually. That's all well and good, everyone heard, and turned to look at Zeus, who had his arms crossed over his chest. But you have yet to explain where the Earth Mother comes into all this. I know, I'm getting there, the blonde reasoned, putting his hands up. Patience is a virtue, brother. There is no need to rush, Hester added, giving her brother a knowing look. I think he's getting to the main part of the story. She already knew the story, having learned it all from him millennia ago, but had been some time since she heard it from the shinobi's mouth. Grabbing a lemon slice, and breaking off a piece to put in her mouth, she motioned for Naruto to continue. Her brother could only grunt, but remained silent as Naruto continued. It was during my 5th year as Hokage when it happened. I remember meeting her to this day. The image of a dark-haired woman appeared in his mind. I was training when I first saw her. I was there for about an hour when the next thing I know, I hear a woman crying. There shouldn't have been anyone else on the training field, and I would have sensed someone approaching. She just appeared. I walk a little ways off into the trees a small ways away from the field, and there I find a woman in dark robes sitting under a large tree. She's crouched down with her knees tucked against her chest, with her hands covering her face. I've never seen her before in my life. Reaching over the table, Naruto picked up a slice of angel cake, breaking a piece off and threw it in his mouth. So, I go over talk to her, and we start talking. It takes a few minutes cause she's in such a state, but eventually she opens up and tells me she's having problems with her family. They're fighting with each other, and she doesn't know what to do. He looked over at Zeus, and then to Hades. I should point out, I have no idea who she is, or what she is. She hid her energy to appear like a mortal. Immortals, such as ourselves, are known to do that when we traverse through the mortal world, Hades said, with the other deities each nodding in agreement. Though we typically keep a sliver of our power active in the chance something happens, mortals around us would begin to be affected by the aura our power gives off. Though Gaia is different in that retrospect, Zeus added, she is a primordial entity. Her power is next to impossible to read. It's like a sea with no bottom. Her literal body is the very ground we walk on. She's always connected to it. If she chooses to walk the amongst mortals, she can switch the connection off like a light switch in a mortal home, and vice versa. She can hide even from us. Then what happened? Melano asked. Pieces of the puzzle were finally falling into place. I gave her an ear, and we talked. We spoke for hours underneath that tree. I help her how best I can, and we begin to trading information and stories. I assumed she was from the Leaf Village, a civilian. I can't sense any hint of negative feelings coming from her. He looked back at everyone. That's something I can do. I can sense the negative feelings coming off someone. Useful, very useful. Afterwards we went our separate ways, and I didn't think much of it. As far as I saw it, I helped someone out, he explained, picturing the memory in his mind. A week later, she reappears. This time, waiting for me at the edge of the training field. This continues for 2 months. 2 months, yeah, the blonde nodded. Every time, we talk about all kinds of things. Our families, our goals in life. Konoha, we don't leave any stone unturned. In a way, I think we became friends. At least, that's what I believed. His fist clenched against the table, throwing another piece of angel cake in his mouth. I tell my wife, Hinata, about her, and she thinks she must feel lonely with all the chaos going on. I tell her all about our conversations when I come home. She tells me I should invite her over for dinner one evening, let her be around a loving family. The novelty of his words wasn't lost on anyone. The next time I saw her, that when everything changed, everyone around the table straightened their backs, paying attention very closely. It started like any other day. The sun was out without a cloud in the sky. There was a gentle breeze grazing against your skin. You couldn't have asked for a better day. He remembered that day like the back of his hand. It didn't matter how quickly the years passed. That day would forever remain fresh in his memory. I made my way to my usual training field, knowing I likely wouldn't get anything done. As expected, there she was, the same dark robe with her dark hair running down her back. This time though, something was different with her eyes. She looked determined, almost stone-faced. I asked her if everything was okay, and that's when it happened. She spilt the beans on who she was, on everything. He took a long drawn-out breath. I'd never been in the presence of a goddess before. At least, not a real one anyway. His foot tapped beneath the table against the floor. Gaia, she told me her name was, and that she was the mother to all, the creator of humanity, the mother to the Titans, the first true god. She explained the family drama was her children were in a war with their children, her grandchildren, and that they were trying to take over and lay claim to the world, the Titanomachy. The children of the Titan King looked at one another with Hades speaking up. This means Gaia was truly awake during it all. I always thought she was in a state of slumber during our war with the Titans. When the shift happened, I believed it was her creating a new landscape for a new era. A clean slate. Hester nodded. That's what we all believed. Sadly, that was not the case. Naruto shook his head. It wasn't. What did she want from you? Zeus asked, his blue eyes staring intently into Naruto. Why would the Earth Mother go to all that trouble? The god of the sky has remained quiet for the most part as he listened to the story. Questions formed in his mind. She wanted me to enter the war under the banner of children, and fight off the invaders that sought to take their home from them. 3 sets of eyes widened at the declaration, while Hester merely nodded sadly to his side. She wanted me to come to fight for the Titans and help destroy the Olympian gods. The hairs on the blonde's arms stood on end, a feeling of static in the air as he looked over at Zeus. The king of Olympus didn't appear to like that piece of information. And you said no, right? Melano questioned. A piece of lemon cake dangled from the side of her mouth. The blonde gave a half smile. Well, I'll put it this way. You guys won, didn't you? And the Titans are the ones locked away. This time, Hades asked the question. Then why did you say no? Why would I bring my people, who have fought 4 wars up to that point, into a war they have no place in? Naruto reasoned. The 4th Shinobi War had been terrible, but it was the event that ultimately led to the 5 great villages uniting as one and putting aside their differences, dragging the shinobi world into another war, this time against literal gods and monsters, would have spelt the death of thousands, if not more. The cycle of peace they'd create would be in tatters, and it would fall to him as the one who destroyed it. So I told her no, and inadvertently sealed the fate of my people. There was a heavy air around the table, and the blonde felt Hester's knee beneath the table gently nudge against his own. She knew they were getting to the climax of the story, and wanted her friend to know she was still there with him. The gesture wasn't lost on Naruto and smiled his thanks. That's when Gaia showed me who she really was. It was like she'd worn a mask, and my answer caused her to throw that mask away and show her true colors and intent. Turns out, he looked at Hades and Zeus. Mother Earth doesn't enjoy being told no. Zeus snorted. I could have told you that. Where do you think all thunder breath over there gets it from? Hades added, earning a growl and a glare from his younger sibling. Boys, you've been doing so well. Hester sighed, massaging her forehead. Please don't ruin it. Hades let out a low hum, but apologized. Sorry, Hester. He looked back at Zeus and found the god of the sky gently itching the side of his eye, his middle finger clearly on display. The elder narrowed his eyes back, but didn't react. After that, it felt like a cold chill ran up my spine, and the ground beneath me began to shift. Naruto could picture himself on that training field, the Earth Mother standing just feet from him. I remember this look on her face. It was this mixture of anger, sadness, and resolve. She started shouting at me how ungrateful we were, and that my rejection of her plea cemented that it was a mistake to create us all those years ago. If we wouldn't help the one that made us, then we would be shown how easy it would be to wipe the world clean. The Great Shift, the 4 deities all said. The Great Shift, he confirmed. It was like the whole world was getting turned upside down. as if we were in a snow globe being shaken around from side to side. I told her to stop what she was doing, and put my hands on her shoulders, only to watch as her body crumbled into dirt and leaves. The screaming came next. Buildings across Konoha started to give way as the tremors got stronger. The blonde's expression turned pained. I could feel my wife and my children in our home. I could feel their fear. No one around the table said anything, letting Naruto come to the end of his story. The next thing I knew, I felt weightless. The ground beneath me swallowed me up, and all I remember is falling to infinite darkness. I used every drop of power I had to push myself back to the surface, but every time I thought I saw a needle of light above me, I felt myself being crushed beneath the endless weight of her body, pushing me back down further. I'm not sure how long I was crawling through dirt, but it felt like days, maybe weeks. He could still feel the walls of dirt and soil pushing against him on all sides. I begged to die, and I guess Gia heard me and had different plans for me. Instead, I felt a surge of power like nothing I'd ever felt cocoon around me. Before I knew what was happening, my body got pushed out of the earth, as if reborn from the dirt. Naruto released a sigh. I saw the devastation with my own 2 eyes. In the no time at all my people were gone. My wife, my friends, the people I swore to protect, all gone without a trace. I am the last of my kind, and I've wandered the world for millennia, seen all the ages and come out the other side all the same. He put his hands together. That's my story. Along the way, I met Hester. He gently nudged his friend with his elbow, making the dark-haired goddess smile. That's a lot of information to take in. Both Zeus and Hades massaged their foreheads. Melano, to her credit, took it in her stride, munching away on the final lemon slice. She'd managed to grab it before the god of the sky could lay claim to it. She was going to need a refill of her drink too. Luckily for her, she wasn't the only one, and Naruto was quick to notice. Looks like you guys are out of drinks. Do you all want a refill while you digest everything I told you? I need to check on Talia too. Hades and Hester both nodded their thanks, though Zeus frowned as he watched his cup taken away. We still need to discuss my daughter after this, of course. The moment Naruto disappeared, the 4 gods began to discuss, quickly being led by Zeus. I don't like it, Hades snorted. There's a shocker. The god of the underworld would be more surprised if Zeus winked at the blonde and gave him a thumbs up. However, he couldn't deny he was a little unsettled at everything they just learned, though, I can't say I'm happy about it too. If he's been alive for as long as he's telling us, why didn't he reveal himself to sooner? That's what I'm saying. For once, the pair were in agreement with each other. Naruto's presence was unsettling at best. He was strong. Not just anyone could separate them the way he did by forcing them away from one another. Many of the other Olympians would dare get between them, other than Poseidon, or possibly Hera. Zeus's electric blue eyes stared over at his sister. You two appear friendly with each other. You've known one another for a long time, Hester nodded. A very long time. We met 10 years after the Titanomachy ended, and we've been friends ever since. Outside of our family, my strongest relationship is with Naruto, and the 2 of you are just friends. Hester's eyes narrowed. What are you insinuating? Her eyes lit up like fireballs once more. She didn't like what Zeus was trying to imply. Gulping at Hester's obvious annoyance from the question, Zeus steeled his nerves. It's as I said, your friendship has never evolved past that of friends. The fire in Hester's eyes grew brighter. Don't get angry. It's a fair question. My relationship with Naruto is that of friendship. Do I love him? Yes, I do. But it's strictly platonic, and vice versa. Naruto knows of my vow to never take a husband, to never sire children, and has always been respectful of that decision. She gave her brothers a pointed look. I don't need the 2 of you telling me who I can and can't spend my time with. Both nodded. Are we clear, Crystal sister? You vouch for him then. You can vouch that he does not intend to harm Olympus. She rolled her eyes, before voicing to Zeus, if he wanted to harm Olympus, he would have done it millennia ago. The idea that the blonde would wage war with the Olympians was laughable. He didn't care about such things, and he didn't hold the pride or pettiness to do so. He disliked war in all forms. He stayed under the radar because he wanted to. Not all of us like being the center of attention. The king of Olympus grunted but conceded her to her point. Besides, look how many of our family have visited this place, and spoken so highly of him. Apollo, Hermes, Aphrodite, Persephone. She gestured to Hades, our brother, Hebe, Triton, and we can't forget Athena and Artemis. It all started with her 2 nieces. Even Hera mentioned she wanted to visit at some point. Melano, once again remaining silent, felt the need to add, his family in Elysium also speak of him in the highest regard. Maybe a little biased, but it's worth noting, why you saw my family. Melino nearly jumped out of her seat at Naruto's voice. Turning around, she looked up at the blonde only to find the most vulnerable expression she'd seen on the man. Hope and the need to know more shone in his eyes. She nodded her head. I did. Who did you see? Melino recounted who she met. Your wife, Hinata, and your 2 children. The blonde looked ready to crumble then and there, threatening to drop the tray balanced in his hands. Your parents were there too, your sensei and godfather, along with the giant-chested Hokage woman with blonde hair. A heartfelt chuckle escaped his mouth. Grandma Tsunade, big-chested woman Zeus and Hades asked simultaneously. The goddess of ghosts nodded, and made a motion across her chest, bigger than Lady Demeter. Both gods looked surprised, given their sister was known to have the largest bust on Olympus, and enjoyed reminding people of that fact. Giant bazookas. I'm telling you. Zeus and Hades looked intrigued and turned to Naruto for confirmation, who merely shrugged back. Yeah, I don't think I've ever seen someone bigger in this day and age. Naturally anyway, the bust of the 5th Hokage was typically a topic forced on him by Jiraiya, who familiarized himself with every part of Tsunade's body, despite never having been with said woman. You don't say, Zeus replied, suddenly having the urge to make a trip down to the underworld. Even Hades, who loved Persephone more than anything, couldn't help but wonder if Melino's words were true. A cough brought them out of their thoughts, finding Hester giving both of them an irritated expression, and tapping one of her index fingers on the table. I'm sure Hera and Persephone would be pleased to know the 2 of you have taken a vested interest in another woman's breasts. The pair had the good decency to shake their heads. That won't be necessary, sister, Hades said back. What Hera doesn't know won't hurt her. She didn't appear convinced but would let the matter slide for now. Turning back to Naruto, Hester asked, Talia still napping? The blonde nodded. Yeah, she's out like a light. Cute little snores and all. The shinobi turned to face Zeus. I guess you'd like to know how Talia ended up with us now, Yes, I would. The king insisted. Why is she in New York? And where is her mother? California, I'd imagine, Hester replied, before the pair took it, in turn, to explain the story to Zeus, and how Talia ended up with Naruto. To Zeus's credit, he didn't interrupt. He sat and listened to their tale, taking in the information with his daughter's face pictured in his mind. She appeared nervous around him when he entered the fox's den, but then again, she was only 4. Children at that age were typically shy around new people, and Talia was no exception. The last time he'd seen Talia was little more than a year ago. Despite what the other gods said about him, he did care for his children and their mortal mothers and tried to watch out for them whenever necessary and possible. Namely to ensure Hera didn't try anything once she learned of their existence. Though justified in her anger, she could be capriciously cruel to his demigod children and their mortal parent. If she wanted to aim her hate at someone, he'd prefer she took it out on him. His child was innocent when it came to the mechanics of their creation. As he listened, he was unaware of his right hand holding his mug with a clenched fist. His knuckles steadily turned bone white as his annoyance grew. Damn it, Beryl, what were you thinking? When she walked out, I contacted Hester, and we came up with a plan to inform you of what happened the day after your renewed vow to your wife, Naruto told him, with his hands were clasped together on the table. Hester told me it was the best option given the good mood you'd be in. Zeus groaned and gave his sister a look. Hester merely smiled back. Must stay awake, Zeus told himself, leaning against the back of his throne as he half listened to Athena. Said goddess was on her feet, dressed in a traditional Greek chiton that was once all the fashion back in ancient times, a long scroll in her hands that reached all the way to the floor. He loves his daughter, but she tended to take charge during solstice meetings and took it upon herself to air her grievances and list every tiny detail that was rattling around in her endless mind. The first couple of times it was cute, but now, millennia later, it was little more than exhausting to hear. Hence why he often left Athena's speech to last. Blue eyes drifting away from the goddess of wisdom, the whole room looked to be in the same state to himself, though some hid it better than others. Apollo and Hermes's posture was similar to his own, though at some point they sank further into their thrones with their legs spread out in front of them and shoulders dropping to the height of the armrests. Hermes even had the nerve to let out a yawn, briefly making his elder sister stop mid-sentence and direct a glare his way before continuing. Since she didn't summon her spear, he had to imagine she was close to finishing. His other sons weren't much better than the pair. Dionysus was already asleep and had been for some time, maybe an hour. But that was nothing new. The youngest of his Olympian brood couldn't go an hour into the solstice meetings before falling asleep, which was why he had him as one of the first to speak on current affairs related to him. The god of wine was dressed still in his camp attire and clearly looked unhappy with the situation. Not that Zeus cared, his son had brought it upon himself. If he wanted someone to blame, all he needed to do was look in the mirror. Near to Dionysus was Hephaestus, who now and again would look Athena's way to appear like he was paying attention. In reality, the god of the forge was tinkering away with some device, trying to hide it from his sister. Rubbing his face, his son was none the wiser to the oil smears across his face, flecks of metal glittering in his long and shaggy beard. Then again, maybe he did know but didn't care. The latter was most likely the case, though. He would sneak glances at the goddess of love, who sat further down the line of thrones, and surprisingly, Aphrodite was paying no attention to Athena's speech, though, unlike her ex-husband, she didn't try to hide it. Sporting long blonde hair that ran down her back like a golden waterfall, the goddess of love decided it was a good time to paint her toenails. A small tube of hot pink nail polish sat perfectly on the edge of the armrest, her petite feet resting on the edge of her throne. A rare look of concentration was on her face as she ran the brush over the nails, giving Athena a deadpan expression when she felt the younger goddess's eyes on her. She even brushed off the glare Artemis was sending her way. Speaking of his daughter, Artemis was one of the few in the room who remained upright and appeared to be paying attention to her sister's speech. Like her sister, Artemis was dressed in a chiton like the old days, though silver instead of white. Her bow rested on the side of her throne along with her quiver of arrows at the ready. Sitting in her hand was a small knife, which she spun between her fingers. The glare she was sending towards the goddess of love and the look of defiance she got back made her toy with the weapon dangerously. Those two truly are each other's worst enemies, Zeus thought. He'd all but forbade them from getting in a fight with one another during the solstices. Despite Artemis being the superior fighter, Aphrodite was scrappy. She wasn't against using underhanded tactics to get the better of the moon goddess. The last time the pair got into a serious physical altercation, they broke San Francisco. The two were on thin ice for over a decade and weren't allowed back to the city ever. The rest of the gods in the throne room of Olympus weren't much better. Ares was staring up at the ceiling while one of his many knives, toying with it in his meaty hands. His eldest son and the god of war was as uninterested in the meeting as always. If the atmosphere was calm, he'd be the one to instigate a battle just for the hell of it. On more than one occasion walked in to find Ares trapping one of his brothers in a headlock or full Nelson. Everyone knew it was Ares teaching Aphrodite holds to put Artemis in on the occasions they fought. He couldn't stop himself from shaking his head. Of all his children, Ares was the one that disappointed him the most. He and Hera spoiled their firstborn. What a mistake that had been. If they'd been firmer with him, maybe he would have turned out different. The last two of the Olympian pantheon, Hera and Demeter, sat beside one another, making idle chat as they waited for the meeting to end. Unlike his wife, whose dark hair tied into a neat braid down one side of her body, Demeter wore her long golden hair unimpeded. It flowed like a golden waterfall with straw and wheat woven in certain places. Her chiton, while conservative, was a light green color, showing enough skin to leave most men fawning over her. Demeter looks very beautiful today, he thought to himself, until quickly shaking those thoughts out of his head a moment later. He and Demeter had a long history with one another, given Persephone was their firstborn child to both of them. For the most part, they were on good terms, but now and again, when autumn and winter set in and Persephone set off for the underworld, things got chilly between them. The king always felt it was best to give his older sister her space during those months, letting her fawn over her other immortal children as a distraction from her favorite. Speaking of his siblings, a yawn came from his right and spared a glance at his elder brother, the god of the sea. Like the rest of the gods, Poseidon had one hand resting against his face as he willed himself to stay awake. As always, he was wearing those ridiculous Hawaiian shirts he loved, along with a pair of flip-flops. The contrast in style between them couldn't be more different. Everything Zeus wore was stylish and smart and spoke volumes on where he was on the leadership hierarchy. Poseidon, meanwhile, looked like a beach bum who forgot to shave and spent his day fishing at the harbor. "Stop staring at me," Poseidon's voice muttered. Zeus noticed the sea-green eyes of his brother looking at him from the corner. "Stop yawning. Athena won't be much longer. Tell that to the rest of your brood. Most of the room looks half asleep already," Zeus grumbled, but couldn't fault his brother's words. Sitting upon his throne and straightening his back, the god of the sky let out a mighty clap as he brought his two hands together. For a split second, the room flashed with light as lightning danced across the sky around Olympus, and thunder boomed in their eardrums. The effect it had was instant. Apollo and Hermes both jumped in their thrones. Dionysus slid off his throne in surprise. Hera and Demeter's chat came to an end, Ares dropped his knife, nearly landing and piercing through his thigh. Hephaestus dropped his doohickey and grumbled to himself. Aphrodite missed her foot completely, smearing pink nail polish across her skin. Even Athena and Artemis were caught by surprise, with Athena fumbling her notes in her hands and Artemis' bow clattering to the ground. The only one who wasn't surprised was Poseidon, who merely rolled his eyes and sank further into his throne. Need I remind you all? This is the summer solstice. I expect you all to pay attention when a member of this council is speaking. He narrowed his eyes predominantly over his children and Aphrodite, all of whom had the decency to gulp and make themselves look presentable. He turned and looked at Athena, who nodded to her. Continue with your report, Athena. A small smile wove onto Athena's face. Thank you, father. However, I have just finished. The papers in her hands disappeared in a flash of golden light, teleporting back to her temple. Falling back on her throne, she smoothed down the front of her chiton and crossed her sandal-clad ankles over each other. She turned and glared at her brothers. Having tried to ignore their lack of respect moments earlier, your attention spans need work. Falling asleep in the middle of a council meeting is deplorable. You say that like you haven't done it, Hermes muttered, earning another glare from his older sister. I haven't. The god of the sun looked to his sister. You never get on Uncle P's case. He's just as bad. Don't drag me into this, Apollo, Poseidon scolded. The last thing the elder god wanted was getting dragged into his niece and nephew's war of words. Athena could grate on his nerves daily if he hadn't grown a tolerance to her barbed tongue. Ignoring her when she got high and mighty was the best option for his eternal sanity. Athena turned to her uncle, her grey eyes shining. I don't get on his case, Apollo, because I know a lost cause when I see one. Tilting his head in her direction, the god of the sea leveled his niece with a glare. She could be as annoying as his brother. Worse even, once she got going, centuries ago, he would snipe back at her, and the two would have fallen into another pointless argument. Now, he settled for scratching his eye with his middle finger, in full view for Athena to see. Watching her face scrunch up in annoyance was enough to make him half grin before turning away. All Zeus could do was sigh. I guess that's it for another year, Hera announced, standing up from her throne and rubbing her shoulders. Let's call it a day. I'm good with that. Same. Finally, I thought that was never going to end. One by one, his family got up from their thrones and began making their way towards the large set of golden doors. They formed small groups, with Athena and Artemis pairing together, while Hera and Demeter did the same. Aphrodite was whisking Ares away, whispering something in his ears that made the god of war grin like a maniac. Hephaestus trailed behind them, annoyance on his face, while Dionysus slinked away, knowing full well his destination was back to Camp Halfblood. The only one who didn't move was Poseidon, who looked at him with a raised eyebrow. You've got that look on your face. What more is there? Again, the god of the sky let out a loud sigh. Moments later, he clapped his hand again to gain their attention, lightning dancing across the sky with the sound of thunder booming into their ears. The action was enough for everyone to freeze their advancements and turn back to their king. We're not finished yet, Zeus announced, giving them all a poignant look. Take your seats. A loud groan came from his sons, with Hermes voicing his annoyance. Come on, Dad, is it really that important? Can't it wait? No, it can't. But surely Hermes didn't get to finish as lightning raced across the sky again and fell silent under Zeus's intense gaze. One by one, the Olympians on their feet dragged themselves back to their thrones, some of them flopping down with clear annoyance on their face. What's this all about, Zeus? He heard Hera ask as his wife returned to her throne next to him. A delicate eyebrow was raised, with her intense brown eyes looking into his blue ones. You did not mention anything about another announcement this morning at breakfast. The summer solstice was an all-afternoon affair. You'll understand why in a moment, he thought, before beginning to speak. It has come to my attention that in recent months, many of you have been frequenting a small cafe in the West Village, known as the Fox's Den. Everyone in the room who's visited the establishment perked up, notably Athena and Artemis. Their curiosity instantly intensified, wondering what in the world their favorite spot in the city had to do with their meeting. What about it? Apollo asked, looking confused. Are we all going there after this meeting? Cause? I'd be cool with that. Same here, Hermes pipped up, as did a few of the others in the room. No, Apollo, we are not going to the Fox's Den after the summer solstice meeting. In fact, none of you will be returning to that place ever again, he announced, and watched as over half of the eyes in the room suddenly widened. As of today, the Fox's Den in the West Village of New York City is off limits to Olympus. The room went silent for a brief of moments before a group of them jumped from their thrones in disbelief. What? You can't do that. That's not fair. My D&D group were planning another game day in 2 weeks. Where am I supposed to stop for coffee in the early hours of mornings on my delivery runs? How am I supposed to wrap these legs around that hunky body of his? Zeus groaned and tried to ignore the voice of Aphrodite, who was describing all the things she planned to do to the blonde. The goddess of love was none the wiser to the annoyed expression of Rez's face, or the rolling of the eyes coming from her former husband. Apollo and Hermes were yammering on endlessly, but when he looked at Artemis, he found the goddess of the moon was seething. Her face was flushing gold as the itch rushed to her head from how angry she was. He knew she would be angry, but he'd never felt his youngest Olympian daughter glare at him with such anger before. The only one who wasn't speaking was Athena. Her grey eyes were speaking enough by the way she was gazing at him. Gods, this is troublesome. Husband, this is a most peculiar decree. Weren't we meant to visit this place next week? Hera asked, confusion written all over her face. The goddess of marriage had been looking forward to visiting the little cafe there since word of mouth started reaching her ears. She finally found room in her busy schedule to make a lunch date for the two of them. Persephone and I were planning on going tomorrow. You've dashed our plans, Demeter chimed in. My little flower was looking forward to visiting. What am I supposed to tell her now? Not that I'm bothered by the announcement, Poseidon started, but is there a particular reason? It's a bit strange to bar us from going to a cafe. Granted, his brother could make the oddest laws and forbid them from doing some of the weirdest things, but this was a little strange even for him. The god of the sky grumbled, my daughter, Thalia, has fallen under his care. Until she is ready to attend Camp Halfblood, she will remain with him. Therefore, I'm barring this pantheon from having any communication with either of them. Silence quickly fell through the throne room, and unconsciously, all the eyes in the room drifted to the queen. Whatever expression she held a moment ago instantly vanished. A look so frosty and cold the oceans would have become a frozen wasteland was evident to everyone. Even Poseidon had the good decency to know it wasn't a good idea to poke the bear when she was angry. Father, you can't be serious, Artemis yelled, breaking the silence and continuing to glare at her father. Your demigods are powerful. A demigod with such a potent scent with a mortal with no training. Monsters will come for them constantly. It's a death sentence. I have to agree with Artemis. Athena finally spoke. To place young Thalia with Naruto Uzumaki is foolish, not to mention dangerous for both of the individuals. They're more at risk than ever before. It would make more sense to send Thalia straight to the camp. Hermes frowned. 4 is a little young, don't you think? There have been younger. It's a sad truth, but sometimes it's for the best. In this case, Thalia should go to the camp. Chiron would watch over her, as would Dionysus. Athena turned and looked at her youngest Olympian brother, who again slipped asleep, losing interest in the conversation at hand. Well, maybe just Chiron. This matter is not up for discussion, Zeus declared, standing up from his throne and looking out across the room. If it makes you feel any better, no, I have charged Hester with keeping an eye on them both. She is well acquainted with the owner and kind enough to watch over them. Our sister is acquainted with a mortal man, Poseidon asked, looking confused. He wasn't aware his sister had friends outside of their family circle. Yes, they have been well. Zeus scrunched up his face. Friends, for many millennia apparently. Artemis and Athena looked ready to retort, but the words died in their mouth as Zeus's words sunk in. Similar looks wove onto the faces of the rest of the council. Millennia? What? Aphrodite asked, wondering if Zeus misspoke. The king smoothed down his jacket and tie. What do you mean they've known each other for millennia? He's what, 25, 30 at a push? She looked over at Athena and Artemis for confirmation, but the two goddesses were frowning too. They didn't know either. The topic of his age surprisingly never came up in their conversations. They always assumed he was no older than 30, given his appearance. Hermes and Apollo were shrugging too. They had no idea. Zeus ran a hand through his beard as he looked at the stumped expressions of his children. Naruto Uzumaki is not mortal. He's a relic from before Olympus, the last golden man left in existence. He's immortal, he announced and watched the looks of disbelief run across the faces of his family. Even Hera momentarily dropped her frosty expression, glancing at her husband in wonder as she took in the information. His most intelligent child looked as if her brain was about to go into overload. You can't be serious, Poseidon replied, his tone of voice more serious. A golden man? Surely you jest. I'm not. Hester was with me, and she confirmed everything he told us was true. Hades was there too, as was Melano. Why were they there? Apparently, Melano discovered information about him before that day and informed her father. They turned up when we did. So they were part of the conversation, Zeus revealed, calling out back to the conversation. Hades was unsettled by the revelation as I was, and commissioned Melano to watch over him as Hester does, so that's why he was there, Hera muttered, not forgetting about the little insult her older brother threw her way that afternoon. Grumbling to herself, she was still trying to think of a way to get back at the walking corpse she called a sibling. The gloomy idiot ruined her day. There was also the fact that Zeus's illegitimate spawn was now living in New York for the foreseeable future. At least, with the girl in California, she was far from Olympus. Now, she was on their doorstep. It was less than ideal. Hold on, let's rewind, Artemis announced, still trying to absorb the information and process it accordingly, though appeared to handle it better than her older sister. Are you telling me Naruto isn't a mortal who makes delicious baked goods? Everyone gave her a flat expression. But an immortal who comes from an era that predates us? Yes, that's right. And Aunt Hester has known about it all along. Again, yes. According to Hester, the two are. Zeus looked pained to say the next word, besties. Poseidon didn't look pleased by the news either, a frown settling in on his face. The following noise to come out from his daughter was a growl, fists tight at her side. A moment later, she scrunched her face up, and spun around and started marching out of the throne room, picking up her bow sitting next to her throne. Each step was very dramatic, like a child who didn't like being told off. Artemis, where are you going? To beat up that jerk, and tie my bow around his damn neck. Zeus rolled his eyes at his daughter's declaration. Return to your throne, Artemis. It took a minute of coaxing, but the moon goddess returned to her seat, her expression locked into one of anger. The image of his daughter wrapping her bow around the blonde's neck was very appealing. Everyone appeared to be trying to find words, but so many of them couldn't find the right ones. It was a rather big bombshell to drop. The only one who hadn't spoken was Athena, whose thoughts must have been a jumbled mess in that head of hers. Are you all right, Athena? Artemis was the one who spoke and leaned over her throne to tap on her shoulder sister's arm. The goddess of wisdom didn't react. Instead, she just continued to stare at the floor, worrying her father and amusing other members of the family. I think you broke her, Dad, Apollo joked as a camera flash went off across the throne room. The god of war grinned before handing over a camera to the love goddess. Dight, I've never seen her look speechless before. I want to savor the moment she turned and winked at Ares. Thanks, honey. You get a special treat later. One of her hands reached up and patted his cheek. Looking pleased with himself, the god of war's eyes lit up into tiny balls of fire, similar to those of his aunt's. Anytime, babe, swooshed. Ow. Aphrodite held her hand between her knees, tiny droplets of golden ichor spilling onto the floor alongside the destroyed camera. A hiss escaped her lips, feeling the cut now running across the side of her hand. She glared over at the goddess who fired the arrow. What was the fur? Leave her alone. I won't let you make a fool out of Athena. Can't you see she's trying to collect her thoughts? Artemis defended. That's exactly why I wanted a photo. I want to remember that expression of hers. Do you want me to rearrange your face? Cause I'll happily oblige. Zeus ran a hand over his face as the two troublesome deities got into another one of their arguments. Granted, he wouldn't fault Artemis for stepping in to defend her clearly dazed sister, but he didn't need them getting into another fight. Speaking of Athena, it was tough to imagine what was happening in her mind. He was well aware of how much she loved going to that little cafe. Her smile was present more often after returning from a trip there. Whether he wanted to admit it or not, Athena had developed a soft spot for the immortal who owned it, as did Artemis. Betrayal was likely on her mind, having been duped by the man all this time about his true origins. He heard Poseidon shuffle around on his throne, turning to look at his brother. Are you sure leaving your daughter with someone like that is a good idea? He asked quietly. I don't know much about the race of men created by our grandmother, but I know they were stronger than all the other generations. Not really, but I trust our sister's judgment. Zeus didn't like it, but Hester had convinced him the best place for Thalia was with Naruto. He's strong. Strong enough to keep Hades and me from coming to blows. I don't know the full extent of his powers, and I don't know if I want to know. I have a feeling he might be a thorn in our side. What form that will take, only time will tell. Do you really think your children are going to listen? The idea of Zeus's children following the new decree was laughable. Each one of them inherited his stubbornness and pig-headedness. A snort broke from Zeus. What do you think? I have no doubt they will find a way to go back there. Hopefully, Thalia will have a couple of years of normalcy before that happens. I trust something will divert their attention for a while. Hopefully, some normalcy for once will befall Olympus. The god of the sea felt his brother was being optimistic. There's no such thing as normal when it comes to this family. preaching to the choir there. Brother, Zeus reiterated before a commotion broke out in front of him. Artemis, get off, Aphrodite, our bodies are not supposed to bend that way. 6 months later, thank you, and have a Merry Christmas, Naruto said as he watched a pair of customers exit the Fox's Den and return to the cold New York streets. It was safe to say December had thus far been his busiest month as he approached the first anniversary of opening his cafe. There was something about the holiday of Christmas that made people crave warmth and delicious baked goods. Dressed in a festive Christmas jumper and wearing a Santa hat that covered most of his blonde hair, he'd freely admit he was getting into the spirit of the holiday this year. In the past, he treated Christmas like any ordinary day. It was a day for spending with your family and loved ones and spreading joy. All it did was serve as a reminder of what he didn't have anymore. However, this year it wasn't an option for him to wallow in his own self-pity with a very excited little girl now living with him. It was safe to say the daughter of Zeus was beyond excited for Christmas. With Hester's help and guidance, the pair decorated his home into a Christmas haven with a big tree standing tall in his living room. Uncle, he heard and turned to smile at Talia, who dashed over and jumped in the air, only for the blonde to catch her mid-jump. The dark-haired girl giggled as he bounced her in his arms. How much longer until we can go home? Not long, Talia, he replied, smiling at being referred to as uncle. You and Aunt Hester are heading home first, and I'll be home in another hour. I have to tidy up, AWW. Can't Mel do it? You always have to do it, she asked, a pouty expression on her face. Now, I wouldn't be a good boss if I left it for Melano to do alone, would I? With that said, the door to the kitchen pushed open and out walked the goddess of ghosts, dressed in mortal clothing and a bright Christmas jumper on her person. It had taken about 2 weeks and a lot of prodding by Hester before finally caving in. The daughter of Hades wasn't the jolliest of people, preferring to wear only the color black. He watched as said goddess walked to her customer's table and placed 2 small wrapped boxes next to an elderly couple. Both contained mince pies, though one was traditional, and the other was a pineapple and rum variation he concocted. Here are your orders. Have a Merry Christmas, and we'll see you in the new year, she said in a sickly sweet voice that was slowly decaying her insides for even performing. The young goddess was very rough around the edges during her first month, and more often than not, Naruto would find customers sprinting out of the Fox's Den for fear of their lives. It took some time and training on appropriate customer service until he was confident he'd drilled the do's and don'ts into her skull. Once the customers were out of the building, her gloomy expression returned. Thank my father that's over with, she muttered and turned to look at her employer and his charge. Please tell me it's almost over, 10 more minutes, and that's it, thank the gods for that. Uncle, why is Mel always grumpy? Talia asked, turning to look up at the blonde. That's a good question, Talia, he replied, looking at the little girl in amusement. I don't think she gets enough sleep. She stays up long past her bedtime and listens to music that's too loud. There is nothing wrong with my choice of music. It's not my fault you and Aunt Hester only listen to oldies. Who listens to Chubby Checker these days? Across the years, as music evolved, the best friends had enlightened themselves with music from each generation, from Chubby Checker to the Supremes, from Elvis Presley to David Bowie, from The Who to Aretha Franklin. If there was one thing the pair could praise Apollo for, it was the evolution of sound over the recent century. There was nothing like it back in Naruto's time in Konoha. Nothing closed. On Friday evenings after the den was closed, the immortal shinobi and the goddess of the hearth would find themselves in his living room with a bottle of wine and music from all decades playing. Sometimes Talia was fast asleep, and other times the daughter of Zeus was shaking her little booty alongside the two. The other night Hester showed her niece how to do the twist, Motorhead, and Black Sabbath. Now that's music. It's rude to question someone else's taste in music with such negativity. Melano, the younger goddess, nearly jumped in the air before turning to find Hester staring at her from a couple of feet away. Her ever-present smile was on her face, which only served to frighten Melano more. She dressed in winter gear, with a long coat with a fluffy hood. It was a light pink, which Aphrodite would have approved. A bag of presents was in her hand, all of which had Thalia's name written all over them. Tomorrow was the 21st of December. That meant it was almost time for the winter solstice. Such an important event meant little to Naruto and even Hester, who saw it as little more as a meeting for her siblings to bicker amongst each other. In particular, Hades would be visiting, which meant there would be a small queue of people looking to pick a fight with the god of the underworld. She would put in her time there to play peacekeeper between her family as she always did, but this year, she was more invested in the 22nd, the day after the winter solstice happened to be Thalia's birthday. and Hester had already retrieved the little girl's birthday presents, as well as Christmas presents. The whole week, the daughter of Zeus was going to be spoiled rotten. Together, Naruto and herself were working on her birthday cake, all 5 layers of it. It might have looked over the top, but it was a memorable birthday. Even Zeus, who'd been kept on a very tight leash by Hera since the summer solstice, managed to subtly give her a present to give to his daughter, without the other gods noticing. She said he was welcome to join them, but the king declined the offer. If the other gods caught him breaking the rules, he'd never hear the end of it. Just because we don't share the same taste in music doesn't make that a bad thing. It's good to have variety, I know. I completely agree. She waved her hands in the air to reason with the older deity. Behind her, Naruto and Thalia looked at each other before the dark-haired demigod started giggling. She jumped down from the blonde's arms and grabbed Melano's free hand. It's okay, Mel. I know Auntie Hester can be scary sometimes, but Uncle says she's a big softie at heart. He says she's like a big bowl of pudding. A nervous chuckle escaped Naruto's lip, feeling the eyes of the goddess turn in his direction. A big bowl of pudding, am I? Her eerie smile strengthened. I'll try to remember that piece of information the next time I decide to make us a family dinner. Maybe I'll throw in some spice for next time. A real fire breather. It was a jest, that's all. Thalia knows I was only kidding. The daughter of Zeus shook her head. Ah, then Uncle said that when Auntie gets mad, make her some tea, and she calms down. Did he now? The blonde grumbled and shot the little girl a dirty look. All he received was a big smile in return. You're lucky you're adorable, he muttered and ruffled the girl's hair anyway. Are you girls heading home? Both looked dressed to leave, with the goddess eyeing the weather conditions. We are. I assume we can expect you home in an hour. She crouched down and pulled up the zip on Thalia's coat. She didn't want her niece to get cold. Then, much to the daughter of Zeus's displeasure, grabbed a woolly pink hat from her pocket, neatly putting it on her head. It wasn't so much the hat that bothered the girl, but the color. Pink was a no-no color, but Thalia would have to endure it for now. Yeah, that's the plan. The blonde shinobi rubbed the back of his neck. 2 more days before he would be closing his doors for the remainder of the holidays. The Fox's Den wouldn't be reopening until the 2nd of January, leaving him with time to spend with Hester and Thalia. He was sorely looking forward to the time off. All right, don't push yourself too hard, Hester told him. He worked far too hard, in her opinion, and didn't take enough time to himself. She took her niece's hand. Come on, sweetie, let's get your backpack from the office, and we'll head home. Okay. Chuckling at Thalia's eagerness as the pair walked to the back, Naruto turned his attention to the room. There weren't too many people left, most having left over an hour ago. It was doubtful he'd get any more customers. Most people wanted to be with their families since it was so close to Christmas, and he couldn't fault them. Scanning the people, he turned his attention to the young woman sitting at the back of the room with his back to him. If he remembered right, she ordered an oolong tea and a small piece of carrot cake. That was 30 minutes again. Straightening his shirt, he walked over to find the woman looking out the window with her chin resting in her palm. After almost half a minute passed, Naruto let out a short cough to get her attention. The reaction was instant, and the woman jolted awake and turned to look at him. Oh, I'm sorry. Did you say something? She asked, an embarrassed expression appearing. My head was elsewhere. Naruto smiled. I just wanted to check if you wanted anything else. I think you finished your tea a little while ago. Would you like a top up? The woman looked down into her mug. No, I'm okay thanks. The woman started to say. Naruto watched as she turned her attention outside and noticed her staring at another woman walking along the pavement. A young girl no older than Thalia holding her hand. Both looked happy, with bags likely filled with presents in the woman's other hand. A sigh escaped her mouth, and her fingers tightened around the handle on the mug. Naruto didn't need to be telepathic to know something was on her mind. Something on your mind, I take it, she nodded, something like that. It's kinda hard to explain, she told him. Actually, wait, it's not hard to explain, it's just something I wasn't expecting. The blonde shinobi frowned, tilting his head. She started as if trying to find the words. I hadn't been feeling too good these last few days. I thought it was just a bug, but it turns out it was morning sickness. I'm pregnant. Oh, congratulations, he replied and noticed her uneasy expression. That's good, right? She didn't look too sure. The woman looked down at her mug. I think so, she said, before looking unsure again. I don't know. Having a baby is supposed to be a joyous moment, you know. It's meant to be one of the biggest moments in a woman's life. She shook her head, causing her dark brown hair to wave across her face. I'm sorry, I shouldn't be saying all this to someone I don't know. Naruto waved his hands in front of him. Don't worry, it's good to vent. Keeping it all locked in usually doesn't end well. He held out his hand to the woman. I'm Naruto. I'm the owner of the Fox's Den. The woman eyed him for a moment before tentatively shaking his hand. Sally, she replied, and eyed him curiously. I've never met a Naruto before. I'd be surprised if you did. It's not a name you find on this corner of the world, he admitted, before turning back to the previous subject. So, I guess your pregnancy wasn't planned. Sally's hand returned to her mug. Not at all. I always knew I wanted children, but I didn't think I'd be starting so young. I only turned 22 a month ago. 4 years later. Are you sure this doesn't feel too small? Naruto asked, leaning against the glass cabinet and holding a slim black book in his hands. He toyed around with it, running his fingers across the smooth leather, feeling the tiny indentations in the material with the tips. Was the old menu really too big for the customers? I thought people like variety. Behind him, the goddess of the hearth gracefully moved between the tables where customers were enjoying their drinks and snacks. A tray rested between her left arm and her side, coming to lean against the side of the counter with him, dressed in clothes similar to Naruto's. A white dress shirt with an orange apron tied across the front. The deity had made some not so subtle touches in the past couple of years to the Fox's Den. Truthfully, he was beginning to wonder if it was such a good idea to let her work here. Not that he'd ever say that to her. Naruto, we've been over this, I know, but still, the blonde started, looking back and forth between Hester and the new menu. I liked the old menu. There was nothing wrong with it. An exasperated sigh left the goddess's lips. The menu was growing out of control. You kept adding too much into it, and you weren't taking anything out in return. The old menu, while nice, had grown to the point where Hester had to put her foot down. When she started working at the Fox's Den, she originally agreed she wouldn't micromanage the cafe. Admittedly, she did point out a few areas where the Fox's Den could improve, and the small changes she made had been for the better. Naruto was happy to work alongside his best friend, but there was a line in the sand. The condition of the menu proved how stubborn both parties could be when they disagreed on something. Hester wanted to downsize the menu, and Naruto felt it was fine as it was. Inevitably, Hester's persistence defeated Naruto's stubbornness, and the blonde conceded to make some changes to the menu. Now half the size, the new menu was much more customer-friendly and didn't leave customers at a loss of what to order from having too many choices. They kept the special of the day, of which Naruto and Hester would take turns in choosing and making. More often than not, the pair would find themselves competing with each other, keeping track of how many were bought and eaten by customers and comparing who got more by the end of the week. They would tally up the result on Sunday, the one day a week the Fox's Den wasn't opened, and the loser would have to cook Sunday dinner. Yeah, I guess I did, he admitted. Melano, was the menu too big? Yes. The goddess of ghosts was still working as a waitress for Naruto, though she wasn't showing open disdain for the job, nor was she scaring customers away, at least, not as often. Melano had fallen into the role as a waitress rather well in the last 4 years, and despite Naruto and Hester telling her she didn't have to keep working there, the younger goddess continued to appear. Hades had confided in his sister 2 years after finding out about the blonde. He'd dismissed his daughter from keeping watch over him months earlier. She didn't need to be there, but it appeared the reclusive daughter of the underworld enjoyed being in their company. Not that she would ever admit it out loud. The old menu was big enough to be a life raft for someone lost at sea, she replied, appearing amused as the blonde's shoulders dropped. The new one is far superior, much more classy while remaining affordable to the masses. The customers like it more too. No one wants to read a menu the size of a novel. A triumphant look washed over Hester's face. Fine, I concede. The new menu is better. That was hard for him to admit since he'd solely create the original, but he'd concede the new one made more sense than the previous. But no more changes, please. I like my little cafe just the way it is. Hester giggled and pinched his cheek, only serving to get a pout from the blonde. All right, you big baby. No more changes, thank you. The door to the front of the Fox's Den chimed open, and Naruto was ready and waiting as someone barreled into him. His clone had dispersed a minute ago, alerting him to their arrival as he found the blue eyes of Talia Grace looking up at him. Hi uncle. Hello, Talia, he said while patting the top of her head. How was school? The 9-year-old didn't answer immediately, first turning and embracing her aunt, whose arms were open and ready to wrap themselves around the form of her darling niece. The little girl that was abandoned at his doorstep so long ago had grown so much. It was okay, I guess. I have to read chapter 4 of Matilda tonight and discuss it with the class tomorrow. Miss Carter said she'd be asking everyone in the class questions tomorrow, so she'll know if anyone hasn't read it. Then we'll go over it tonight before your bath, Hester offered, happy her niece was informing them of the work set. At one point Talia had been hiding the fact homework was set for the class, mainly when focused on reading. It wasn't all surprising Talia had an aversion to reading. Minds of the demigods that came from her pantheon were wired for Greek rather than English and caused a great deal of struggle for a demigod of Thalia's age. It took years of practice to get a grip on reading in the common tongue of the country. They spoke with Talia privately in the space of their home and promised to help her with her homework, her reading in particular. Okay, Talia replied, shrugging her shoulder, though not appearing happy about it. There had been some tantrums in the past when it came to Thalia's reading, but the little girl knew she couldn't get away with anything when her aunt was around. A moment later, another pair of eyes were looking up at Naruto and Hester. Instead of blue, they were tiny pools of sea green, reminiscent of the Mediterranean Sea. Hi, uncle. Naruto smiled and picked up the small child before plopping him down on the counter. Hello, Percy. The little boy then turned to his aunt. Hi, auntie. A giggle escaped Hester's lips as her hand smoothed down her nephew's jet black hair. The son of her brother, Poseidon, looked very much like his godly parent. The same eyes, hair, and even his nose were the same. Hello, Perseus. You two didn't leave your mum behind again, did you? The door jingled, and a voice replied, they did. Walking into the fox's den, Sally Jackson appeared, looking out of breath, likely trying to catch up with her 3-year-old son and his 8-year-old cousin. Percy, what did I tell you about running off? She asked, taking off her jacket to reveal a similar uniform to Hester and pulled out a black scrunchie to tie back her hair. Not to, and what did you do? Run off? Percy tilted his head to one side, making him look cuter than he usually appeared. Sally's expression softened at the look, as did Hester's, while Naruto patted his head. Naruto wasn't a betting man, but he had a feeling the young son of Poseidon was going to be a real heartbreaker when he was older. Sally sighed. What am I to do with you? She asked, softly running her fingers through her son's dark hair and kissing his forehead. Much to his delight, you're going to stay with Aunt Hester and Talia while Mommy works. Be good. I will. I'll get my jacket, and then we'll be on our way. Hester disappeared with the two demigods trailing close behind, with Percy quickly grabbing onto his older cousin's hand. The act was enough to make Naruto and Sally smile. The pair looked more like siblings than cousins. You know, Melano and I can handle things today if you wanted an early night. You look tired, Sally. The brunette mortal waved off the worry. I'm fine. I was up late trying to finish a report that's due this morning. It took longer than I thought it would. A lot had changed for Sally Jackson in 5 years, ever since that fateful meeting during the Christmas holidays. Finding out she was pregnant with the father absent from her life, a job that wouldn't support her financially with a new baby and no family to call on for help, she'd never felt more lost in her life. She'd wandered through New York aimlessly for what felt like hours before eventually ending up the fox's den. Unbeknownst to her, she'd wandered into the right place and met people that ultimately helped her get her life in order. Naruto had been, for the lack of a discretion, a guardian angel to her. She was never religious by nature, but a small part of her felt like some unknown power had guided her to his doorstep that day. He changed her life for the better. Through him, she met Hester, Melano, and of course, Talia. Said little girl had been a constant presence in her life as she grew heavy with her son and seemed to find some kind of fascination that a baby was growing in her tummy. Needless to say, some of the questions she ended up using left the blonde a spluttering mess and looked to Hester to solve the issue. Sometimes the goddess of the hearth came to the rescue, while other times, enjoyed watching the blonde squirm under the gaze of the 5-year-old and her endless curiosity. They were with her every step of the way. They helped her get an apartment near where they lived in the West Village. They gave her a job and financial stability to support her and Percy once her son was born, and even helped her apply for courses at the local community college. When she was away studying for her business management course, either Hester or Naruto would keep an eye on Percy for her. The blonde even went as far as to teach her some of his recipes, with the goddess occasionally adding her 2 cents in. She couldn't help but wonder how those two had stayed friends for so long. Sally was no expert, but she was sure she sensed chemistry there. Even Melano looked after the pair a few times, though often found her son and his cousin in very precarious situations. A few weeks ago, when she arrived to collect Percy from Naruto's home, she found her son being held by his ankles in the air by Talia while his head was dunked in a fish tank, babbling nonsense to the goldfish. She almost had a heart attack, though her son's grinning face when he spotted her was enough to tell her he was fine. Naruto's hand rested on her shoulder and guided her to the kitchen. Come on, let's head to the back and see how well you remember the triple berry Nutella cupcakes recipes. On the building across from the fox's den, perched on the edge of the roof that looked down over the streets, two sets of eyes watched the interior with keen looks. One stared inquisitively, while the second looked longingly. Two birds sat motionlessly, one a beautiful brown feathered owl, the other a hawk of similar coloring. This is stupid. Why are we even here? This is towing the fine line father set up when he forbade us from visiting. SSSHHH. Stop talking, or we'll be spotted. I think we both know that's not going to happen. Unless mortals can climb up vertical surfaces like a spider monkey, I'd say we're safe. The grey eyes of the owl stared in the silver ones of the hawk, and if she didn't know any better, could have sworn a bead of drool was slipping through her beak. You have a problem. You know that, right? Inside the fox's den, they watched the blonde immortal walk across the interior and place down a small tray of cupcakes in front of the customer. Artemis let out a short gasp and a groan of longing. Double chocolate peanut butter filled cupcakes. Oh, that mortal is so lucky. What I wouldn't give to be them right now. Your stomach is truly made of celestial bronze, Athena replied. Although, deep down, she had to agree. They did like delicious. In the last 5 years, the goddess of wisdom would like to say she'd followed her father's commands to the letter and stayed far away from the fox's den, but that would be a lie. It took 6 months, impressive in her own mind for having the willpower to stay away, before she inevitably found herself spying on the cafe and carefully watching the blonde owner. Naturally, she was full of questions. We could sneak in, right? We would be caught the moment we walk through the door. Aunt Hester would recognize us immediately, as would Melano. Naruto, her grey eyes gazed back through the window and watched the blonde as he brought out another tray of yummy goodness. Well, there's no telling what would happen, but I imagine he would know it was us too. A sigh escaped Artemis. It's not fair. I might be angry at the blonde fool for lying to us, but I still miss the food. I overheard Aunt Hester mention that they've created a new menu together. Could you imagine what those two have cooked up together? Naruto and Hester double teaming in the kitchen were enough to make Artemis go weak at the knees. There was no telling what kind of scrumptious goodies they were cooking up in the kitchen. Knowing she couldn't reach out and devour them was torture. I'm still surprised Hester went to work there. She's spent more time at the fox's den and Naruto's residence than she does on Olympus these days. Now that she doesn't need to hide her friendship within him, we hardly see her. All of the other gods on Olympus noticed the lack of the hearth deity. Zeus, in particular, would grumble about his beloved older sister spending time with that uncouth blonde in the mortal world. Honestly, who said uncouth anymore? Their father could get jealous easily, and seeing Hester enjoying the company of someone that wasn't one of them felt otherworldly. He didn't like it but wouldn't voice it unless he wanted to earn his sister's ire. Poseidon, Hera, and Demeter were less put off by it, but still, the absence of the gods of the hearth had been felt by the siblings in particular than the rest. Only Hades didn't appear to be putting up a front about it. Then again, Artemis was sure Melano was transporting precious cargo back to the underworld for their uncle and occasionally Persephone when it was time for the goddess of spring to take to her second home. I know, it's so unfair, Artemis whined, trying not to glare at the mortals leaving Fox's den with boxes of goodies secured comfortably in their grasp. Just imagining what might be in the box was enough to make Artemis's stomach growl. Before either could say another word and before Artemis could swoop down and steal the mortals' boxed baked goods from their hands, a shroud of warmth appeared from behind them. Athena and Artemis felt something warm grab them by the scruffs of the neck and hold them in the air, unfazed by their attempts to wriggle out of the grasp. They found the warm and curious eyes of their aunt staring at them, one eyebrow raised. A soft glow of fire illuminated around her body with two tendril-like arms sprouting from either side and responsible for grabbing the sisters and holding them in the air like grapes on a vine. What are you two doing here? Hester asked, her voice calm, though with a hint of annoyance clear for both to hear. Aunt Hester, fancy seeing you here. What brings you to this part of the city? Artemis stammered out. Hester's face didn't change but did turn to Athena rather than Artemis. I know you're not going to pretend to be stupid. I know how beneath you that is, niece. She felt the goddess of the moon deflate in her grasp at her words. You both know you're not supposed to be anywhere near the fox's den. If Zeus catches wind that you're here, there will be trouble. I don't particularly want a thunderstorm hovering over the city. Not when I'm about to walk home with the children. Their father was constantly reminding everyone of the rule in recent memory. It wasn't just Athena and Artemis that tried to sneak a peek, but the others Olympians too. with Apollo and Aphrodite being the two biggest culprits. The god of the sun tried to sneak in the early morning in disguise, covered head to toe in clothing he'd never be seen in that covered up his dashingly handsome good looks and masking his godly energy. Twice this year Zeus came down from Olympus, grabbed his son by the scruff of his neck and dragged him back home. Apollo would end up grounded for a month, only allowed out to drive the sun chariot across the sky. Aphrodite, on the other hand, had been trying to sneak into his home, morphing into a dove and sprawling herself out across his bed in not-so-subtle lingerie, hoping to seduce the hunky blonde into her awaiting arms. Instead, all she found was the goddess of the hearth waiting for her, grabbing her by the ear and dragging her back to Olympus. The goddess of love was persistent in her attempt to try and seduce Naruto. I know, but the only reason I'm here is to stop Artemis from breaking the rules. The rules don't state we can't watch from a distance, Athena replied, trying to hold her ground against her aunt but feeling herself wither at the glance she got back. We're not technically doing anything wrong, I think we both know that's pushing it. Hester snapped her fingers. Artemis and Athena both felt their forms shift and return to their normal states. I suppose I should be impressed you managed to last this long. Unlike your brother and Aphrodite, the glow around Hester vanished. Don't lump us in with those buffoons, Artemis muttered. Gods, she didn't want to be compared to those pair of airheads. Hester shook her head and rubbed her forehead. Go home, both of you. I don't like splitting my essence like this when I'm meant to be watching over the children. Thalia and a look of distaste washed over Athena's face. Poseidon's boy. I'm still surprised that child and his mother ended up in Naruto's care. It's almost as if the fates are trying to align the paths of the children of the big three to him. Well, if there's anything I've learned since knowing Naruto, it's that he has a habit of attracting people from all walks of life. Both have flourished with him around and taking an active role in their lives. Hester moved towards her nieces and looked down at the shop below them. He's started teaching Thalia to bake, you know. She's quite good at it. We both think she has a knack for it. The daughter of Zeus has a preference for cupcakes with lots of icing. They had to be careful they didn't let her eat too many. Otherwise, the girl would find herself bouncing from wall to wall with the electricity across the block going crazy. The last time she had a sugar rush, all the electrical appliances in their home and the next two homes blew up. That's nice and everything, but I think there's a conversation we haven't had since news of Poseidon's son became public to Olympus. Athena crossed her arms and hardened the look in her eyes. Is it wise for Thalia Grace and Percy Jackson to be allowed to remain so close to each other when their scent alone attracts the biggest and most dangerous monsters that plague our children and descendants? I have yet to see Naruto's skills in actions and have yet to see how he would handle such a foe. Hester remained tight-lipped about the capabilities of the blonde. Neither could get their aunt to answer many of their questions, nor the other gods for that matter. Both of them, as warrior deities, wanted to know how well he could handle himself. To be able to put himself between their father and their uncle and walk away alive was a featuring in itself. What they had managed to piece together was the fighting capabilities of the old ones. The men of gold that reigned during the era of the Titans were far greater than that of mortal in this day and age, with powers and skills that few could dream of. It would be like something out of a fable or comic book. But he was a man of gold like no other. Someone Gaia herself visited to aid the Titans in defeating the Olympians during their rise to power. They knew he was strong, but how strong? Both wanted to learn that answer, none more so than Athena, who hated seeing a puzzle she couldn't solve. To their surprise, Hester merely smiles and let out a low chuckle. Trust me when I saw this, sweet niece. There is no one on this planet more capable of fending off the monsters that plague the children of the gods than the man currently teaching Sally Jackson the correct way to make triple berry Nutella cupcakes, Hester informed. Naruto was an iron wall between Thalia and Percy and the monsters that might try to harm them. They wouldn't be able to go over, beneath, around, or through said wall. They would merely be blocked every time and sent to their doom for trying to reach the children. He was a protector, a guardian. How sure are you? I'd bet my essence on it. Every last drop of it. The statement was enough to make the sisters look at one another. Now, go on. Hester made a little shoe notion with her hand. I'll keep this little visit our secret, but next time I will inform Zeus. Rules are here for a reason, and I won't always bend them for you. Leave it be. Giving one last smile, Hester walked away in a swirl of fire, leaving the sisters alone on the rooftop to ponder everything she had said. It was the elder of the two who acted first. Come on, Athena huffed, grabbing her sister by the sleeve of her shirt. Let's go before Hester makes good on her promise. I don't feel like getting confined to my temple any time soon. You are aged. Fine, Artemis groaned but followed along. Do you think we can convince Hera to make us her famous shepherd's pie? at the same time as the goddess of wisdom and the goddess of the moon were making their way back to Olympus. A very different immortal also found themselves in New York City, though this one was visiting for a different reason. Knowing New York was technically under the jurisdiction of the Olympian pantheon, he didn't appear to care as he teleported his way to Midgard and threw himself into their backyard. He wasn't afraid of any Olympian, but he ensured his arrival was subtle, lest he wanted to face the wrath of his father and mother. They were far more frightening than some puny god like Zeus or Ares. Ha! Their arms were twigs in comparison to his own. A deep, bellyful laugh broke the calm silence as men and women peacefully going about their afternoon through Central Park were caught unaware. All stopped and couldn't help but marvel at the sight they were seeing in front of them. Come on, one more. No, 5 more. Better yet, 10 more. Let me show you my great strength. A pair of large and meaty hands ushered a woman forward, soon followed by a squeal as he hoisted her up and placed her on his wide and powerful shoulders. I'm sure I came here for a reason, but I'm having such fun with you, young mortals. Some laughed at the exuberance that vibrated from the man, while others looked at him as if he wasn't human. Was he one of those strong men that competed in lifting competitions? It would explain the physical strength he was displaying to everyone. He had the body for it, with arms like tree trunks and standing somewhere around 6.5 feet tall. 4 women sat on his enormous shoulders, 2 on each side with his arms extended out. It looked as if he wasn't even trying, and all 4 girls looked as if they were having the time of their lives, with one being so bold to run her hand beneath his vest. There wasn't even sweat on his brow. His shoulder-length red hair wasn't even sticking to his skin. You Majordians are so light, it's like I'm lifting little more than feathers. He tried to usher another woman over, claiming he could fit another one on those wide shoulders of his, but none dared to step forward. There are none who can match my strength throughout the 9 realms. Just who in the world was this guy? A few more minutes passed before the jovial man appeared to have enough as a look of recollection appeared on his face. Letting the 4 women of his shoulders, he gave one last laugh and eyebrow wiggle before a determined look was on his face. He swept his hand through his long hair before asking, I'm looking for a place known as the West Village. I'm in search of a man who runs a shop of sorts. He calls it the Fox's Den. He fumbled around in his pocket and pulled out a piece of paper. A crude drawing of a blonde man with whiskers was on full display, though it looked as if it was drawn by an 8-year-old, rather than a grown man. He looks like this. Everyone looked at him funny as they stared at the drawing, though none dared to voice a joke about the man's lack of drawing talent. By chance, one of the girls that were on his shoulder had visited that very afternoon and was good enough to point him in the right direction. You're sure? Yeah, I'm pretty sure. That's the guy behind the counter. The red-haired man gave a loud laugh and surprised the woman by planted a big kiss on her lips, leaving the woman swooning and baffled at the same time. He was overjoyed and didn't remain for much longer before everyone watched as he took off at speeds that should have been possible for one as large as himself. The last thing any of them saw was the man reached for his waist and pulling up a hammer with a large trapezoidal-shaped iron slab. He waved it in the air as he pursued his target. Naruto tapped his chin as he inspected the cupcake, taking everything in over its form, smell and taste. Smell? Check. The wave of chocolate wafting around his nose was perfect. Not too overpowering, nor was it too sickly. The ratio was just right. Texture? Check. Nice and fluffy, just how they were meant to be. It didn't want to fall apart with the slightest bit of pressure and wasn't too hard that it became uncomfortable to eat. The most important part, though, was the taste. Everything rode on how well the cupcake tasted in his mouth. The last batch Sally made was passable, but that wasn't enough to serve their loyal customers. A standard was set by the blonde, and later on, Hester when she officially joined them. Some could say it wasn't fair to put such pressure on Sally's shoulders, but it wasn't like they were asking her to master a dozen recipes in a short time frame. Sally had asked for them to teach her a thing or two about baking, and by Olympus, they would do just that. Speaking of said woman, she stood a few feet to the side, ignoring the clones at work around her and gazing nervously at her boss. If she was to work at the Fox's Den, then Naruto had to warn her about some of the strange things she would see. It wasn't every day a mortal, even a clear-sighted mortal like Sally, came across a dozen or so carbon copies of the man who employed her, working around the kitchen. To her credit, she took it on the chin and fell right into the craziness, as if she belonged there from the very start. One of her hands gently pulled on her sleeve, trying to take a calming breath as the blonde lifted one of the cupcakes up to his mouth and took a bite out of it. She tried not to look too visibly nervous, but she didn't want to let Naruto nor Hester down. Both had shown her on multiple occasions how to make the cupcakes and felt she was getting closer and closer to perfecting them. Was it strange that she wanted to make them proud? She didn't think so. They'd done so much for her that she wanted to show them every day that their time and effort had been for nothing. She heard him say aloud, licking his lips as he tried to gather up any loose crumbs. I gotta say, Sally. He turned and looked at her and smiled. They're perfect. Sally's eyes lit up. Really? They are, yep. I can't taste a single fault with them. If I didn't know any better, I'd say Hester or myself made these. Rubbing his hands together, he took a step forward and rested a hand on Sally's head. Good job, Sally. I'm proud of you. Why you are? The former lover of Poseidon asked, doing her best not to get misty-eyed at the compliment sent her way. Of course. Whatever Hester, myself or the world for that matter has thrown at you, you've adapted and worked hard. You never stop trying to better yourself, and it shows in the food you make. He picked up the tray with the rest of the cupcakes and handed them back to Sally, who grasped at the edges eagerly. I think these deserve to go in the cabinet, and make sure you tell people who made them. I'm sure they would all be very pleased to eat anything made by your hands. Sally was very well loved by the regulars who dined at the Fox's Den. For many of them, they'd watched Sally prosper into the confident young woman she was today. Even better for Naruto, who got to watch her blossom as an incredible mother to young Percy. He'd been there in the waiting room at the hospital when she was giving birth to the son of Poseidon. According to Hester, Sally kicked childbirth's ass, all 19 hours of it. He still didn't understand how women did it all these years later. Kudos to them. Minutes later, the back door that led to the alleyway swung open, with Naruto walking out with a trash bag gripped in one hand. Whistling a jaunty little tune with a slight skip in his step, he moved to the nearby bin and threw the bag inside. I wonder what Hester's making Percy and Talia for dinner tonight. I know Talia has her hopes on burgers, but I doubt she'd make them 2 nights in a row. He laughed, imagining a patient-looking Hester with her arms crossed as Talia stomped unhappily in front of her, her fingers in her ears and trying to hold her breath. The daughter of Zeus had certainly inherited her father's stubbornness, and often tried to get her own way by acting out, but Hester was no stranger to such dramatics. If she could handle one such as Zeus, she could handle a young girl. He didn't know what the record was, but Hester was overwhelmingly in the lead, whilst Talia only had a victory or 2 over the past 4 years. Found you. Blinking in surprise, Naruto had little time to react as he jumped high in the air, using his chakra to stick to a nearby wall as a large object flew past the spot he was previously standing. Turning his head to the entrance of the alleyway, he fought back a groan when he spotted a familiar deity blocking the way, his hand outstretched. Thor, what are you doing here? A jovial laugh escaped the god of thunder as his hammer, Mjolnir, flew back into his hand in the blink of an eye. A grin was plastered on his face and swept his long red hair back as his intense blue eyes stared down the blonde with unfavored glee. My old friend, I've spent the better part of a month trying to track you down until I finally got the word you were in this city. He swung his hammer in the air, his smile turning into a grin. I've come to challenge you. It's been centuries since we last fought. Let us shake the heavens with our fists one more time. Naruto wanted to groan. We are not fighting in the middle of New York. The answer he got was another laugh from the god of thunder and watched as he jumped high in the air with his hammer held high. He meant to crush it into the blonde's skull but instead found himself getting drop kicked square in the chest and forced higher into the air. In the blink of an eye, Naruto landed and pushed himself back into the air and grabbed Thor before his body could exit the alleyway. When they landed, Naruto didn't give Thor a chance to act and promptly dragged him over to the nearby trash can and threw him inside. He threw the lid down with a loud resounding echo and flashed away with the bin and Thor in tow. A bitter chill ran across his face as he landed on the steep mountainside of the Matterhorn, in Switzerland. This would do for the time being. As I said, you idiot, we're not fighting. I like New York. I'm not leveling another city with you. He blinked away, leaving the god of thunder groaning inside the bin as he tried to gather his bearings. Naruto flashed back again, twice. We did that twice. He flashed away again, returning to the Fox's Den to hurry his customers home and abruptly close his business for the evening. This was not how his day was meant to end. Lifting the ladle from the pot, Hester brought it halfway to her lips when she stopped as a flash of yellow appeared out of the corner of her eye. After years of seeing the technique used, she recognized the user instantly, though was understandably confused why he was home so early. Turning to face him, she found he wasn't alone, with Sally stood by his side along with Melano, though the mortal woman looked visibly confused as well as her niece. Her blonde bestie, however, looked visibly irritated. What's going on? It's far too early for you to be home, she asked. What about the customers? I'm equally as confused, Sally admitted. 1 minute I'm serving customers, and the next thing I know, Naruto is ushering them out of the building and locking all the doors. It was all very sudden. He hasn't told me what's going on. I wouldn't mind an answer myself. You made me spill coffee down the front of my apron. She motioned to her apron with her hand rather dramatically. None of their questions got answered right away, though the three curiously followed him as he peeked his head into the living room. Inside, Talia and Percy were present, with Percy drawing a blue dinosaur while Talia watched television. That was good. Naruto, what's going on? The blonde shinobi turned to look at Hester. You haven't felt a new power signature arrive in New York recently? He looked at Melano and asked the same question. Melano shook her head, and Hester replied with a resounding no. Nothing out of the ordinary beneath his breath. They heard him curse. Damn, he's gotten better at hiding his energy. Who has? Naruto sighed and looked at Hester. Thor is in New York. He stopped by the Fox's Den about 10 minutes ago, but I managed to throw him in a trash can and teleport him to Switzerland. It should get him out of our hair for a little while. Hearing the God of Thunder's name, Hester's eyes initially widened before her face dropped and a rare scowl appeared. Oh joy, back up a moment. Melano put her hands up, a look of panic on her face. What do you mean Thor's in New York? I thought gods from other pantheons weren't meant to trespass on each other's turf. The last thing Mino wanted to witness was the famed God of Thunder duking it out with gods of her pantheon. Why is he here? And you put him in a bin, in Switzerland? I have an idea why he's here. The tone of disapproval was evident in Hester's voice, so much so she almost sounded like Hera. He's here because he wants a fight, doesn't he? Naruto nodded and sighed. Yeah, the next thing he knew, he felt Hester slapping his arm repeatedly. Ow. Quit it. I told you centuries ago it was a bad idea to let Thor goad you into a fight, but you had to let him get under your skin. It went on for a few more seconds before Hester relented, though her stern expression didn't leave. Does he know this address? I don't think so, to be honest. I was more focused on getting him out of the city than asking 20 questions. Thor isn't the subtle kind, and I don't need your brother or any of the others knowing he's in the city without the permission of Olympus. Hold on, hold on. The three immortals turned and looked towards Sally, whose arms were in the air, a look of panic and disbelief written all over her face. Thor, as in the Norse god of thunder, son of Odin and Frigga, an Aesir god. Do you know anyone else by that name? Melano asked, leaning against the wall with her arms crossed. But they're real too. I thought it was only the Greeks that were real. The goddess of ghosts turned her head to look at the older pair, with an eyebrow raised. You never told her about the other pantheons. We may have skipped over a few details, Naruto admitted, rubbing the back of his neck. It was a conversation we were going to have for a later date, Hester revealed. Given New York is under Olympian jurisdiction, the gods from other pantheons have to inform us when they'll be stopping by. It doesn't happen often, so we didn't see the need for that topic to be brought up yet. Then again, we didn't take Thor's idiocy into account. Do you know him well? Melano asked, but quickly went silent at the irritated aura she could feel around her. It didn't look like the goddess of the hearth was the biggest fan of the Norse god of thunder. Aunt Hester, they all heard and watched as Talia appeared through the doorway. The 9-year-old stopped and stared at the 4 adults huddled together in the hallway. Huh? Uncle, when did you get back? I didn't hear you get home. The TV remote was still in her hand, and behind her, Percy followed after his cousin. A big smile lit his face when he spotted Sally and was quickly moved around the older demigod and clutched his mother's legs. Hi, Mama. Sally smiled, picking him up and placing him on her hip. Hello, Percy. Her face looked a little pale. She tried not to give away that anything was wrong and put on a brave face for the kids. We just got back, Naruto replied to Thalia's question. Is something the matter? There's some weird guy outside running up and down the street waving a hammer around, Talia revealed, making the 4 adults look at each other. He keeps shouting to come out and fight. Who do you think he's talking to? Oh boy, Naruto muttered before he and the girls all made their way to the window and looked outside to the front of the street. Just as Talia said, there was Thor in the middle of the street. The god of thunder was looking a little grubbier than usual, likely on account of being shoved in a bin and left on a mountain in Switzerland, and didn't appear happy that Naruto had duped him. Come out and face me. Face the might of thunder, he bellowed. People walking past hurried past the scene as quickly as they could. Cars passing nearby slowed down to get a view of his wild actions, though one found themselves an unlucky victim of Thor as the red-haired god climbed atop and stood on the bonnet of the vehicle. Let us duel to Helheim and back. That's Thor, Sally asked. staring intently at the man. Naruto sighed. Yeah, that's him. I always pictured someone blonder. She tilted her head. Though, physically, he's everything else I imagined. He's as big as Poseidon. Melano hummed with a hint of disapproval. I can't say I've ever met the guy before, but he acts is exactly how my father described him. Hades met him centuries ago. Though I don't think Thor left a good impression on him. Then again, who does when it comes to my father? There was a scream outside, and everyone winced as Thor lifted his hammer and tapped the bonnet of the car with his hammer. The effect was instant, with the front half of the car suddenly buckling under the force behind it and became little more than a crushed piece of debris pancaked on the road. The driver said nothing except scream as he stumbled out of the car and ran in the other direction. Oh, geez. Naruto ran a hand over his face, annoyance growing as the god of thunder continued making a scene. The last thing they needed was someone calling the police. That would make matters far worse. I should probably go out and sort this out, even if this going to be a real pain in my ass. He turned away from the window before voicing his surprise when he noticed someone was missing. Hester, Melano and Sally both looked at where the goddess of the hearth had been standing moments ago before everyone heard the front door open. The three of them turned back to the window and watched as the eldest member of the Olympian family descended the steps and made her way over to Thor. The blonde couldn't see her face, but judging by the way she was walking, almost like a female Terminator zeroing on their target, she wasn't happy. Eventually, they all saw Thor turn in her direction, and the man had the decency to stop his distraction and appear pleased by her presence. He threw his arms in the air and jumped beside her. However, before he could say a word, Naruto, Melano and Sally all winced as the right hand of Hester lit up in fire and slapped the larger immortal in the cheek. The connection of palm to face was loud, and the god of thunder had the decency to stumble back a step before finding Hester's hand locked around his ear and dragged back to the house. Ouch, that hurt a sting, Melano muttered, looking in disbelief that the kind and sweet Hester had it in her to slap someone like Thor. Who knew she had it in her? Unhand me, goddess of the hearth you may be, but I am the mighty Thor. Oh, shut up, you buffoon, before you cause any more damage. Footsteps reappeared in the hallway as the front door closed. The voices drew the attention of the two demigods, who turned and looked at the hallway. Talia made to head out and find out what was going on, but instead found herself being lifted by Naruto by the scruff of her neck and deposited back onto the couch. Hey, stay here, Talia. Aunt Hester and I need to have words with an old friend of ours. Closing the door behind them, he made a beeline for the kitchen and was treated to the sight of Hester still with her hand locked around the god of thunder's ear and pushing him into a chair. Unhand me, woman. One does not pinch the ear of the son of Odin, lest they wish to feel my wrath. When the blonde walked into the kitchen, the Aesir's annoyance appeared to leave him, excitement washing over his face. Aha, my friend, that was a sneaky trick you pulled, but dropping me on a mountain is not something I haven't survived before. Come, let us battle. Though he tried to stand up, the larger man found himself releasing a high-pitched squeal as Hester twisted his ear in a position it wasn't meant to go. What did I just tell you? Hester barked back. It was uncommon to see Hester get riled up, but Thor had a knack of doing so to calmer immortals. Naruto sighed, rubbing his forehead with his palm. Look, Thor, it's good to see you, but I'm not fighting you. New York isn't exactly a place built for a battle like ours. A bit of warning would have been nice too that you were coming, but my friend, our battles are legendary. When our fists collide, the very foundations of the 9 realms shake in anticipation. You can't tell me you don't wish to feel that again. Naruto made a face and shook his head. Sorry, but I'm not interested. I only fight when I have to, not to satisfy the whims of a god who constantly loses his hammer, which also happens to be one of the most powerful weapons in all creation. Like a child, Thor let out a whine and blew a raspberry. You're no fun. I came all this way expecting you to indulge me. This is incredibly disappointing. Thor crossed his arms and winced as the tightness around his ear remained. Please let go of my ear. He turned and looked up at the goddess. I'll behave. There was a glumness to his voice. Do you promise not to cause total mayhem and not pick a fight? Yes, yes, I promise. The hand left his ear, and he brought his own up to gentle soothe it. I really can't tempt you in a bout of fisticuffs. Nope. Tough luck. Go pick a fight with a giant, or something. We both know they're not nearly as fun. Then go pick a fight with a fire giant. Those guys are always looking for a good fight. That's right up your alley, Bah. This is the god of thunder? Sally asked, leaning over and whispering in Melano's ear. He's not exactly what I pictured. Are all gods from the Norse pantheon so idiotic? Whose knows? We mostly keep to ourselves. Gods don't normally mingle with other pantheons unless it's strictly business. She looked at Thor and watched in distaste as he picked something out of his ear. This one though, he's an idiot of the highest order, Melano replied, appearing less than impressed at the Norse god. Her father's description of the man was on point. No wonder he didn't have a good thing to say about him. Hearing their voices, Thor looked past Naruto and Hester and found the younger goddess and the mortal woman staring at him. His eyebrows shot up and Naruto and Hester watched as he hung his hammer back on his waist and stepped forward. Sally barely had a moment to react before she found herself under Thor's gaze, the god towering over her and placing his arm above her as he leaned on the wall. A tiny smirk was on his face. So, tell me, mortal, aside from being drop-dead gorgeous, what do you do for a living? And do you by chance like the gun show? The muscles in his arms flexed, showing off his powerful arms. How about we get out of here, and I'll show you how the god of thunder treats a woman. Oh gods, Melano wanted to gag, and the expressions on Naruto and Hester's faces weren't any better. Sally didn't appear to know what to do with her face flushed from his comments and found herself stepping back in surprise as the goddess of ghosts got between them. Back off, she's not interested. Sparkplug, who are you? He looked Melano up and down. I don't recognize you though, you smell of the underworld. He rubbed his chin. Someone connected to that old fart, Hades, I assume. You're as pale as he is, though you're much better looking. He shrugged, before saying, I suppose you can come too. I have energy plenty for both of you. Behind him, a hand wrapped in flames grabbed his ear and yanked him away and made the god of thunder bellow in agony as he was forced back into the chair. Hester stood behind him, looking positively wrathful at the comments he made, to the point where Naruto had to stand behind her and keep her from melting Thor's face off. You really can't help putting your foot in your mouth, can you? Naruto muttered. They're not interested, so don't flirt with them. That was also the cheesiest pickup line I've heard in years. I think every love goddess in existence would be hunched over in agony. I thought it was pretty good, Thor whined. It took a minute for Naruto to calm Hester down before she finally let go of Thor. Though the man's ear was red all over with burns, your grip is still like an iron claw after all these centuries. Hester, would you smile if I said it was good to see you? No, oh, well, no matter. He turned and looked at Naruto. So, really no battle? Naruto shook his head. Afraid not. Thor visibly deflated but ended up shrugging his shoulder. Oh, well, maybe in another century. Thor stood up, back up, idly keeping watch of Hester to ensure she didn't grab him by the ear again. He extended his hand towards the blonde, and after a moment of hesitation, Naruto shook it. It's been a long time, my friend. It has. You haven't visited Asgard or Vanaheim in centuries. I know many in my pantheon would love to see you again. Thor nudged his elbow into the blonde. Lady Freya always asks for you. She says she misses your presence in her halls. I'm sure she does. Naruto rolled his eyes and caught Melano looking at him. What? You've been to Asgard and Vanaheim? She asked, looking visibly surprised at this new piece of information. And you know Freya, when were you going to share that with the rest of the class? Naruto shrugged. Now, I guess. Honestly, he hadn't thought to mention it. The two pantheons tended to stay out of each other's way, although he heard a few confrontations and interactions occurred over the years. The only Greek god who had any interaction with them was Hester, and that was through him. I lived there for a century, Vanaheim I mean, but I visited Asgard on occasion. Melano let her jaw drop while turning to look at Sally. This guy, can you believe him? Sally didn't appear to be baffled by the revelation. I mean, is it that surprising? She looked at the blonde. Vanaheim is the Vana version of heaven, right? She didn't know much about Norse mythology, but she knew some things. Deciding to learn all she could about the Greek pantheon after finding out one of its gods knocked her up, she dove deep into the lore surrounding them. Sometimes her mind wandered and she wondered if any of the other pantheons existed too. It appears she was correct. What's Freya like? Freya, she's nice enough. We got on well, though she wasn't very pleased when I chose to leave and return to Earth. Naruto scratched the back of his head. I haven't really heard much from her since then. Freya can be quite petty. She reminds me of your love goddess, whom I've never had the pleasure of meeting. She doesn't take people rejecting her very well, Thor added. At least, she's not as persistent as Aphrodite is, Hester muttered from Naruto's side. Honestly, the Olympian goddess of love didn't understand the concept of being rejected. Yeah, tell me about it. He was thankful he hadn't had a run-in with the love goddess since the pantheon got barred from visiting. He was well aware of her sneaking into his home and his bedroom, but Hester dealt with her accordingly. Since you're here, do me a favor and don't destroy anything. Do you not trust me, my old friend? Is that a serious question? Before Thor could answer, the door to the kitchen swung open. with Talia walking inside to join the rest of the adults. The little girl was rather confused with everything that was going on. She could hear raised voices coming from the kitchen and decided to investigate. "Uncle, Auntie, what's going on?" she asked, and found herself staring up at the large red-haired man who'd been shouting fighting words in the street. Talia had never seen someone so massive before. He was even bigger than her uncle. The god of thunder's attention turned from the adult to the young girl and started smelling the air. A scent he was familiar with floated through the air, one he recognized as the scent of the ozone. He'd smelled it faintly when he got dragged into the house by Hester, but it was overwhelming when the girl appeared, attacking his sense of smell. So she was the source of it. He pointed towards Talia in a rather dramatic fashion. "A child of Zeus." He looked over at Naruto again. "Are you taking in more strays, my friend? Don't call her a stray. Don't forget, the last demigod I took care of was your daughter, and I am forever grateful." He sniffed the air and looked at the stove. "Do I smell food? Are you cooking?" Naruto sighed and rubbed the back of his neck. "No, that's Hester who's cooking tonight." He gave Thor a look. Why, all Thor did was give a slightly pleading look and patted his stomach. He hadn't eaten since that morning and was overdue for his next meal. He didn't feel like waiting until he returned to Asgard, and plead with his darling wife, Sif, to cook him up something. Hester and Naruto turned to look at each other. Naruto held up his hands and shrugged, trying to ask the goddess of the hearth to be reasonable. Her dislike of the god of thunder was evident for all to sense, even for said deity. The staring contest went on for a few moments, with Hester trying desperately to convey how unhappy she was with the idea of Thor staying for dinner. Eventually, her shoulders slumped, and she released a huff. "Fine, but only for tonight. You leave as soon as your plate is clean." Thor let out a chant of success while Naruto put his arm around his best friend's shoulder. "It's just one evening," Hester pouted, putting her hands on her hips. "It's better be." At the same time, the Norse god of thunder was visiting the Uzumaki home. Another had followed her father as he trekked through the 9 worlds, using the world tree, and narrowly avoided the overgrown squirrel that took up residence along its branches, and landed in Central Park just as Thor had earlier that day. "This world has changed much since I was last here." The figure was female, though she stood out compared to the Majordian women who walked past her, looking up and down her form. It was as if they'd never seen a Valkyrie before. Standing 6 foot in height with pale silver blonde hair tied in a braid, the young woman looked no older than 18, though her eyes and the way she carried herself spoke of a person far older than she appeared. A leather set of Valkyrie armor adorned her body, though she visibly looked uncomfortable wearing it as a sheen of sweat quickly covered her brow as the June sun shined down on her. A golden necklace with a hammer emblem sat comfortably around her neck, and strapped to her back was an extendable spear and a shield. Her pale blue eyes looked around the area. She didn't remember such large buildings existed in Midgard. They were almost as high as the clouds, though her gaze did rest on the Empire State Building that stood off in the distance. She could feel the thrum of power that came from the Olympian pantheon, making the girl somewhat uncomfortable at being so close to a pantheon that wasn't her own. Mixing with other pantheons wasn't encouraged, though sometimes it was known to happen. None sought out these instances more like her foolish father, who loved nothing more than to poke and prod the other gods when he got bored. Sometimes she wondered if fighting was his true love and not the goddess of war that awaited him back home on Asgard. Her father sometimes infuriated her, but she could say confidently she knew him like the back of his hand. "There is only one man father would have sought out for a fight after all this time," she muttered to herself, groaning as the image of Thor getting chucked around by a familiar blonde appeared in her mind. Her father was not the only reason she was in Midgard though. There was another reason she was in New York, and it required the man that raised her all the same. "You there? Answer thy question." Grabbing a nearby mortal, she held the unsuspecting man by the collar of his shirt, his eyes going wide as he was held by the large blonde woman. Yes, I'm looking for an establishment known as the Fox's Den. It's run by a man known as Naruto Uzumaki. Give me its location, or feel the wrath of the daughter of Thor." She tightened her grip on the inn's collar. The man blinked and looked at her funny. "The Fox's Den? I think that's a place in the West Village." "Which way is the West Village? And why there is a village in the heart of a city? That seems counterproductive for all you've built here." He looked at her funny. "It's not an actual village. Are you an idiot?" The next thing the man knew, he was finding himself getting thrown into the air and dangling from a tree, flailing around as his pants got caught on one of the branches. "You there? Where is the West Village? And have you heard of a man known as Naruto Uzumaki?" This series of questioning went on for a good 5 minutes with more people men and women finding themselves thrown into trees or a nearby bush when they questioned the blonde woman's intelligence. One girl even made fun of what she was wearing and soon found her very lacy thong pulled so high in the air she started seeing stars. Mortals are useless, the girl commented with a huff. I know where you can find Naruto. Uzumaki, turning around at the voice, her eyes widened as the most beautiful woman she'd ever seen looked back at her. Her blonde hair fell past her shoulder blades and hauntingly beautiful green eyes one could get lost in. She was dressed for the weather in a frilly pink summer dress that stopped just above the knees and a pair of high heels that looked impossible to walk in. Her smile was coy and spoke of giddy mischief. With her heels on, she was the same height as the daughter of Thor. Gunilla stopped and stared at the beautiful woman. She could sense the divine energy rolling off her body. The smell of fresh jasmine was all around her. She couldn't help but swallow thickly. She was mesmerizing to look at. She could have sworn her appearance would shift with each blink, and long tresses of black hair and emerald green eyes would flicker into being. Remembering where she was, she approached cautiously. Why, you are an Olympian, aren't you? Of the Greek pantheon? The woman smiled and held out her hand, showing her knuckles. The goddess of love, Aphrodite. What's your name? Young Valkyrie. Gunilla, trepidatiously. Gunilla took Aphrodite's hand and kissed the knuckles, getting a widened smile from her. You said you know where Naruto is. I do. I believe I saw him entertaining your father, Thor. At least, that's who I believe he is. The scent of ozone lingers around him much in the way it does around Zeus. The woman walked around Gunilla, her shoes clinking as she moved. You have the same scent, though it's not as potent. It was very bold of you to come here when you haven't gained our permission. Then again, your father did the same. Gunilla grimaced. My father does not always think things through and does things on a whim most days. However, I'm here on behalf of Lord Odin to ensure my father doesn't cause trouble and to meet with Naruto. Uzumaki might ask why. I'm rather fond of him, even though he's managed to avoid me these last few years. I'm not at liberty to say anything. Oh, you won't even tell little Olmi? Aphrodite fluttered her eyelashes, and Gunilla felt her willpower take a hit. Swallowing thickly one more time, she crossed her arms and held her own. Even you, I can be very persuasive. Aphrodite looked Gunilla up and down again. I've never been with a Valkyrie before. I can't help but wonder. Gunilla didn't say anything, half expecting to be blown away by the Olympian. She was surprised to find the goddess shrugging her shoulders with her smile still present on her face. Very well, I'll only find out in due time. Elegantly spinning on the thin tip of her heels, Aphrodite skipped off, ignoring the looks of hopeless dedication rolling off the mortals she moved past. Come along, young Valkyrie. I'll show you the way. Gunilla didn't need to be told twice and quickly followed after the goddess of love, hoping no one else from the Greek pantheon showed up and caused a problem. Then again, she couldn't help but feel uneasy being led away by the Aphrodite. She knew the stories that floated around the beautiful deity and knew what a tricky individual she could be when things didn't go her way. She couldn't help but wonder what kind of connection she had to her blonde target. Haha, she's so tiny. Are you sure she's a daughter of Zeus? Thor asked, looking jovial, as he held Talia in his hands and dangled her in the air. Said girl was looking unimpressed, her arms folded and cheeks puffed out. She has his eyes, I suppose. But does she have his right hook? He put her down on the ground and crouched in front of her. Punch me right here, little one. That appeared to get Thalia's interest as her earlier disapproval disappeared. Okay, she clenched her fist and readied to land a punch on the awaiting deity. There will be no violence in this house, thank you very much, Hester admonished, guiding her niece away from Thor and leading her to her seat around the table. Dinner was being served up, and the god of thunder had invited himself for dinner. Go sit down in your usual place. I'll be serving up food in a moment, okay? Aunt Hester, the daughter of Zeus, marched to the table like a good girl while Hester directed a huff Thor's way. You've been here all of 5 minutes. Behave, or you'll be out, she reaffirmed. Just because Naruto was okay with Thor being here, that didn't mean she was. Oh, she and the god of thunder had met numerous times, and each time she was reaffirmed why they were like oil and water. Throughout the millennia, the duo of herself and Naruto would constantly get interrupted by a small number of deities who were aware of the blonde's existence, but none more so than Thor. They were the polar opposite of each other. She was quiet, he was loud. She was gentle and patient, he was violent and brutish. He reminded her too much of Ares. Ares was her nephew, therefore she had some amount of love for him. Thor, on the other hand, was a member of another pantheon, who seemed to enjoy getting on her nerves. Wherever he appeared, he caused a mess and didn't appear to care about the consequences. Hester didn't openly hate anyone, barring her own father, but she could say with confidence she didn't really like Thor either. Tolerate was likely the best way she could describe it. She tolerated him because, for some reason, Naruto was friends with the man and enjoyed his company when he wasn't trying to swing a hammer into his skull. Go take a seat around the table, Hester told him. A ladle appeared in her hand and pointed at him. But one whiff of trouble, and you're out. Gods, she sounded like Hera. For once, Thor had the sense not to say anything stupid and merely gave a salute as he wandered into the dining room. Sally and Percy were already in the room, with the said boy taking a keen interest in the large man he'd never seen before. He gave the god of thunder a small wave. Hello in response, Thor waved back similarly. Hello, tiny human, I'm Percy. Who are you? I'm Thor, god of thunder. He pulled out Mjolnir and showed it to the son of Poseidon, and this is Mjolnir, one of the mightiest weapons in the known universe. He grinned, giving it a quick spin and feeling the air push against his skin. I have killed many monsters with my hammer, some as large as mountains. Percy looked up at him in awe. Whoa. He reached his hands out. Can I hold? Of course, Thor started to say before feeling two sets of eyes bearing into his skull. Sally and Milano looked at him as if telling him to think twice and choose a different answer. The hammer was already halfway across the table when he pulled back. Perhaps when you're bigger. No. Percy pouted and stuck out his lower lip. Please, Percy Jackson, Sally said next to her son, looking at him with a stern expression. It would be much too heavy for you. No means no. As Sally spoke with her son, the god of thunder looked in Milano's direction, but quickly turned away as the goddess of ghosts leveled him with a dark glare. Perhaps it was best not aggravate the daughter of Hades. Thor could have sworn there was a dark aura floating around her body, but he was sure that was a trick of the light. The chill running up his spine. Yeah, that was probably her. Feeling a tug on his shirt, he turned and looked down at the seat next to him. Talia was next to him, her big blue eyes looking up at him full of curiosity. Yes, do you know my dad? Thor made a small humming noise. Of sorts. We've met a couple of times. What's he like? You've not met him. Talia shook her head. Uncle and Auntie said there are rules that stop him from seeing me. I don't really get it. Talia scrunched up her face. Does he not love me? Thor's mouth opened, yet no words came out. As much of a blockhead as he was, how in the world was he meant to answer that? It was like getting pushed between a giant and a hard place. What was he supposed to say? What was he meant to do? Naruto and Hester were still in the kitchen while Sally was talking to her son. The daughter of Hades appeared to hear the question, but was merely watching him in mild amusement. Her coal-like eyes sparkled in sick glee. Was she enjoying the fact he was squirming beneath the questioning gaze of this little girl? Like daughter, like father I suppose, trying to come up with an answer as quickly as possible. He let out an audible groan of relief when the sound of the doorbell rang through the house, distracting Talia and making the girl hop out of her seat. She made a beeline through the dining room and ducked beneath Naruto's arms as she raced to answer the front door. She didn't appear fazed as she heard her aunt call her name as she reached for the door and swung it open. Hello Talia, Naruto said with a hint of sternness in his tone as he came up behind her. His mouth opened, but before words could come out, a strangled noise appeared. Aphrodite, the blonde-haired beauty gave him a dazzling smile. Hello, you hunky man, you. Long time no see. She walked straight past Talia, whose only thoughts was who the heck is this lady. The sound of Aphrodite's heels clacked against the hallway, and Naruto soon found himself just inches from the divine goddess. You look more delicious than the last time I saw you. Then again, I didn't think my window of opportunity with you was an eternity. Naturally, the blonde did the only thing he could think of in this situation and called out, Hester, get out here. What? He heard from the kitchen as Hester's head appeared from around the corner. Her eyes zeroed in on the goddess of love. Oh, for goodness sake, what is it with you all today? Hester stormed out of the kitchen, face showing how unamused she was as yet another deity visiting during dinner time. Aphrodite proved quick as she skirted around Naruto, using the blonde as a shield to avoid Hester's hand as she released it in Kerbal-like giggle. Don't be like that, Hester. I'm merely visiting, she replied, narrowly dodging one of Hester's hands. You've been keeping Naruto all to yourself for so long. I just wanted a little peace. That's all you know as well as I do. That's not the kind of relationship we have. An uncommon growl escaped from Hester. Will you hold still? What's going on out here? Melano's head popped around the corner. Oh, she was soon followed by Thor, Sally and Percy, who appeared from behind his mother's leg. Oh my god, she's beautiful, Sally whispered and turned to Melano. Is she a? You know, yeah, that's Aphrodite, goddess of love and the most irritating woman in my overly large family. Wow, I wouldn't compliment her too much. Her ego's big enough already. Sally couldn't help it, but when she looked at Aphrodite, her eyes kept flickering from blue to sea green. She wondered why that was. Even her hair was going back and forth between blonde and black. The god of thunder, to his credit, didn't linger on the Greek love goddess. His focus shifted when another figure appeared by the door. Daughter, did you follow me all the way to Midgard? Naruto's eyes widened as a familiar young woman came into view, awkwardly standing in the door. Gunilla, hi uncle. She gave a short wave as Naruto steadily made his over to her until he was a foot away from her. Sorry to come on, and the blonde Valkyrie didn't get to finish her sentence as the shinobi brought her in for a tight hug, his arms resting around her shoulders. Very quickly, whatever awkwardness Gunilla had vanished, and a beaming smile lit up her face. You know you're welcome here anytime you like. You'll never get turned away. He gently cupped her face. I haven't seen you in almost 50 years. You haven't aged a day. I could say the same. It's one of the perks of being a Valkyrie and living at Hotel Valhalla. Aging isn't much of an issue. A downcast look appeared. I'm sorry it's been so long since I last visited you. With my duties as the leader of the Valkyries, it doesn't leave me with much free time. The blonde shook his head. That's okay. You're here now. That's what matters. He put his arm around her shoulder and led her forward. Let me introduce you to everyone. You remember Hester, right? For one as formidable in appearance as the daughter of Thor, it was a surprise for all to see her act in such a shy manner. I do. It's nice to see you again after all this time, Lady Hester. She gave a polite bow but was waved off by Hester and once again embraced. It's lovely to see you again, my dear. Hester gently cupped her face. It's nice to see you didn't inherit much from your oath of a father in terms of appearance. Hester's smile widened when she heard Thor grumble behind her. You must stay for dinner. We're about to serve up. I would like that, thank you, she replied before Naruto introduced everyone else. That's Melano, the daughter of Hades and Greek goddess of ghosts. Melano gave a nonchalant wave. And that's Sally. The little boy next to her is her son, Percy. It's nice to meet you, Sally greeted. Percy merely gave a small wave, poking his head out from behind Sally, acting all shy all of a sudden. Aphrodite, you already know, Naruto muttered and leaned in close to whisper. Dare I ask how you met? I ran into her at the Park of Central. She offered to show me the way here, though I did feel like she had an ulterior motive. She gave the love goddess a side glance, with the said woman being scolded by Hester, who hadn't forgotten her fellow deity was there. She wants something from you, Naruto snorted. Of sorts. He wasn't going into any detail before gently pulling Talia to stand in front of him with his hands resting on her shoulders. And this is Talia. She's been under my care for 5 years now. She and you have a lot in common. The daughter of Zeus didn't say anything. She merely looked up at the blonde girl with widened eyes, her expression showing off an AWW'd look. Who was this girl, and how did she get so tall and strong? She looked like she could bench press a car. Talia had never seen another girl look so tough. Gunilla could feel Thalia's eyes resting on her and knelt on one knee, getting a good look at the girl. Her hands came up and surprised the younger demigod by taking her hands into her own. A kind expression, one she only displayed to those close to her got to see, took over on Gunilla's face. When I was a little girl, Uncle looked after me just as he looked after you and showed me right from wrong. Talia tilted her head to look up at Naruto before quickly returning to Gunilla. Really, you huh? Gunilla gently squeezed her hands. Are you happy here? This time it was Talia who nodded, conviction written all over her face. Uncle is the best. Talia looked up at Naruto again, who smiled back happily. If Uncle looked after both of us, does that make us sisters? Ah, the innocence of a child. Gunilla laughed as did some of the adults. Melano even let out a small AWW sound, though would readily deny it to anyone. In a way, I guess it does. I think I'd like that. I think I'd like that, too. She gave Talia one last squeeze before standing back up. When Naruto looked at her, her expression changed again, this time into one more serious. I wish I could say I came here for personal reasons, but I'm afraid I'm here on business. Lord Odin has asked me to come and find you. Naruto blinked in surprise and felt the eyes of everyone else in the room on him. Find me? Why? We've run into a small problem. A problem on Yotunheim. Ah, Naruto rubbed the back of his neck. The problem being who I'm thinking of. She nodded. That's right. One of them is picking fights with the giants and running amok. Gunilla explained. I tried to stop him myself, but he doesn't listen to me. Lord Odin tried to reason with him, but was promptly ignored. Gunilla pouted. He still just sees me as an annoying brat. Yeah, that sounds about right. You'd think after all these millennia, he'd have calmed down some of his more extreme tendencies. The blonde sighed. Well, it's not really a question if I'm going or not. I'm the only one who can reason with him. I guess I'm heading to Yotunheim. That damn idiot. Whoa, I'm not sure I like this. Naruto lifted his head and looked at the goddess of the hearth. He was down on one knee, his hands toying with the laces to Thalia's shoes as he made the bunny ears. She didn't appear overly pleased. Her arms were crossed over her front and held the posture of someone who wasn't happy, but her expression told a different story. Her face appeared apprehensive. The reason she was worried, because Thalia would be traveling with Naruto and Gunilla and visiting Yotunheim for the first time. According to Naruto, he'd been thinking about taking Thalia to visit his old friends once she was old enough, but with this new situation, there was no time like the present. Plus, he'd introduced Gunilla to them when she was not much older than the daughter of Zeus. They were standing outside his home. Gunilla was right there with them, having stayed with them for the past couple of days, waiting for the weekend to come. They wanted to go earlier in the week, but they didn't want to take Thalia out of school, so they waited. Thor kept his promise to the goddess and left after dinner, though he did help himself to most of the cooking that evening, devouring everything he got his hands on. Melano was at the fox's den, running the ship that morning until Hester went in later in the afternoon. He made sure to leave a few clones in the back to help them with the kitchen duties. Sally and Percy, meanwhile, were visiting Montauk for the weekend, having some mother-son bonding time away from the craziness they'd witnessed earlier that week. He couldn't blame them. It was a lot to take in. The blonde stood up, ruffling Thalia's head, and stepped forward towards the deity. He put one arm around her shoulders and gave her a quick squeeze. Don't worry, nothing's going to happen to her. I'll be right there with her. And so will Gunilla. I know, but still. Hester bit the side of her lip. Isn't she too young for this? Not to mention, she has homework. We finished her homework last night, remember? It was rather amusing to see Hester's worry, but Naruto wanted to alleviate her worries and ushered Thalia forward. Thalia, can you tell Aunt Hester the main rule while we're away from home? The little girl scampered forward. The golden rule is that I'm not allowed to wander off. I have to stay with Uncle or Big Sis Gunilla at all times. The blonde gave Hester a proud look, watching as her face was a mishmash of thoughts and emotions. Are you sure I can't convince you to let her stay? He gave her shoulder another squeeze. She will be fine. I'll be right there. It's not like the others will do anything, and any giant will run a mile if they see Gunilla. Hester gave a little hum but still didn't appear convinced. For someone who claims she doesn't have a motherly bone in her body, you sure are worrying like one. There is nothing wrong with having a little apprehension to the notion that my niece is off to another world, Hester replied in a matter-of-fact tone. It's not like it's a place I'm able to visit on a whim should something go wrong. Only the Norse pantheon had access to the other 9 worlds that sat connected thanks to the Yggdrasil. The world tree was so ingrained within the Norse pantheon, it became rare, if not impossible, for a deity of another pantheon to gain access to it. She'd seen it once, back in the early days of the Greek pantheon, long before any of Zeus's children came into being and first made contact with the Norse. It would be correct in thinking the relationship between the two were frosty at best, with both sides keeping to their own, except for a few instances when either side met by chance while out in the world. Well, it's a good thing nothing will go wrong. He grinned and let out a silent laugh as Hester gently pushed him away and started smoothing down the jumper Thalia was wearing, muttering something about not getting the creases out of the fabric. Hester could be such a worrywart. Leaving Thalia to be fretted over by her aunt, Naruto stood next to Gunilla, who was staring at the pair. You okay? Gunilla nodded. I'm fine. I guess I'm still just a little surprised at your new situation. I know it's been some time since we last saw one another, but I didn't think you would accept another demigod into your care, especially one not from the Norse pantheon. The older blonde shrugged. Well, it wasn't planned. When I came to New York, it was under the guise of keeping a low profile. I figured I could stay here for a decade, maybe 2 if I was lucky. He chuckled. I didn't expect the fox's den to become so popular with the divine. He nodded towards Thalia. One day, Thalia's mother visited, and when she left, Thalia fell into my care. She walked away and didn't look back. I still don't understand how a parent can do such a thing. Gunilla's lips thinned. Where is her mother now? I don't know, he answered honestly. I don't think Hester checks on her anymore. She has no reason to, now that Thalia is here. I think she would have some choice words to give Beryl Grace if they ever met again. I think there are a lot of people who would say the same thing. Thalia is very loved. She has only benefited from her mother's abandonment. Think what state she could be in if she was still under her care. I try not to. He put one hand on Gunilla's shoulder. But you're right, she's happy here, and that's what matters. He looked up at the sky. I only wish her father would come down from time to time and visit his daughter. He turned back to Hester and Talia. Are you finished mothering her yet, Hester? Oh, shush. You, she stuck her tongue out at the blonde before kneeling and wrapping her niece in a hug. Be good. I want to hear all about your trip when you get back tomorrow. She kissed her niece's forehead. I've put a few sweet treats just for you in your backpack. Don't eat them all in one go. Okay, Auntie. And don't worry, I'll be fine. The goddess of the hearth sighed while standing back up. I know you will be, but I worry all the same. She gave Naruto and Gunilla each a look. Both of you keep a close eye on her, please. When both blondes nodded, she brought both of them into a hug. In that case, enjoy your time in Yotunheim, and I'll see you when you get back. I've packed some food for you all for when you get hungry. Naruto, there's a thermos with coffee inside and another with hot chocolate for Talia. You're the best. Hester, Gunilla held a hand out to Talia, which the girl promptly clasped onto. We should get going. The sooner this mess is sorted out, the better. Agreed. Where is the closest point to the world tree? Hester asked. In order for the trio to make their way to Yotunheim, they would need to travel across the branches of the Yggdrasil that connects the 9 worlds. They could have taken the Rainbow Bridge or the Bifrost as it was also known by, but that would alert Zeus and the rest of Olympus that someone not from their pantheon had entered their territory without asking. Boston. Gunilla answered. Lord Odin hoped to have an access point created in New York centuries ago given how integral this city is to the world, but your council vetoed that decision when proposed. He didn't want to ruffle any feathers by creating it without their consent. Luckily, I have some of my Flying Thunder God technique markers set up in Boston, so we can get there in a flash. Naruto added. You couldn't set up a marker in Yotunheim. I do, but I can't flash between worlds. The technique doesn't let me dimension hop. In a sense, when we get to Jotunheim, I can flash us to where we need to go. Naruto tied the strap of his backpack around his waist. We have a meeting point for when I visit. I'll flare out my chakra, and they'll head over. They'll sense it immediately. Taking Thalia's hand in his own, he felt Gunnilla's hand rest on his shoulder. We'll be gone for no more than a day. We'll get this whole mess sorted out. See you tomorrow, Auntie. Goodbye, Lady Hester. Before Hester could say a word, the trio was gone, leaving the goddess behind. She released a small sigh before turning around and walking inside. She noticed the sky seemed to darken and gray. The weather over New York typically altered with her brother's ever-changing mood. She couldn't help but wonder what was causing Zeus's mood to fluctuate so much. With her circle of privacy, she doubted he was spying on her. He knew better than to try that. He'd made that mistake once and promised he would never do it again. Closing the door behind her, she rested the back of her head against the wood. Well, at least it means I get a night to myself. Whoa, this place is so cool, Talia yelled at the top of her lungs, perched on the back of the daughter of Thor, looking out across the vast void the world tree occupied. It's bigger than the Empire State Building. The trio didn't linger when they flashed into existence into Boston and made a beeline for the nearest entrance to the world tree. Naruto's marker brought them straight to the Kendall Square roof garden, where the hidden entrance sat written in the bark of a tree. It took Gunilla a wave of her hand and muttering a few words beneath her breath before a portal, no bigger than 7 feet high and wide, opened up in the air, revealing a mishmash of colors awaiting them. Walking through, they found themselves standing on one of the branches of the Yggdrasil. The branch alone was the size of a freeway and stretched on behind them as far as the eye could see. Gunilla turned her head to look at the dark-haired girl. The Yggdrasil is likely the biggest object of power within the 9 worlds, she told her. Her lower arms were wrapped tight around Thalia's legs to keep her in place. Naruto and Hester had both informed her that Talia was not a fan of heights, making walking across the branches of the world tree far direr in the little girl's eyes. It connects the 9 worlds, creating a bridge between them and allowing those of the Norse pantheon to use its branches to move from one to another. How did it get so big? No one truly knows. Well, Gunilla stopped for a moment, a thoughtful expression on her face. Perhaps Lord Odin might know. If he does, he keeps such information to himself. As the god of wisdom, there is little he wouldn't know. When the 9 worlds was born, so was the Yggdrasil. I have no idea which is older. They're both older than the gods of our pantheons, older than those that came before them, as old as the primordials that make up the first stage of immortals. A loud explosion rang above them. Something heavy soon collided with one of the branches on the right side of them. Talia frowned, peering over Gunilla's shoulder. The Valkyrie didn't appear the slightest bit bothered by the sound and kept walking forward as she headed for one of the entrances that would take them to Yotunheim. What's Uncle doing? Talia asked. her index finger coming around to poke the blonde Valkyrie on the cheek. He just took off when we arrived. Is he not walking with us? Oh, I'm sure he would walk with us if he could, Gunilla soothed, patting Talia on top of the head. You see, there's a creature that lives on the world tree known as Ratatosk. Think of squirrel, but one that's bigger than a truck. Thalia's eyes went wide at that, urging her to continue. Ratatosk's goal is to bring down the Yggdrasil, and he's been trying for a long time. No one knows why he wants to bring it down, but to those who use the world tree to get around the 9 worlds, Ratatosk will always intercept them and try to cause mayhem. He also spends his time spreading lies and rumors between the dragon, Nidhogg, at the roots of the tree and the anonymous eagle and Vidrifalna at the top. Oh, so that's what Uncle Naruto is doing. He's keeping us safe by drawing Ratatosk's attention towards him. He and Ratatosk have met previously, and I don't think he's overly fond of him. How come? I'm not sure, but I think Uncle Naruto might have stolen Ratatosk's nuts on more than one occasion. The mighty squirrels of the world tree never forget a face, nor any slight made against him. As she said that, the very person they were talking about landed next to them, making spiderweb cracks appear on the bark as he landed. You too, okay? Naruto asked, wiping his brow as looking the two over. We're fine. I was telling Talia about your history with Ratatosk and why he dislikes you so much. Talia looked up at him with all the innocence of the world residing on her face. Did you really steal the big squirrel's nuts, uncle? The blonde snorted. I didn't steal anything of his, Thalia's. His nuts did go missing, but that's because Thor stole them as a joke and blamed me for it. Now, that damn overgrown furball goes for me every time I use the Yggdrasil. Admittedly, I don't use it often, but still, he shrugged and turned to look at a neighboring branch a few hundred feet away from them. It's still annoying. Soon enough, Talia found herself fixed at the furry beast running along the thick branch next to theirs. It was massive in size and appeared larger than how Gunilla described it. Its thick grayish-brown fur stood on end with a bushy tail almost as big as the rest of its body. Its eyes were beady and black like coal, and the daughter of Zeus could have sworn she could feel it glaring in their direction. It opened its mouth, and all that came out of it was a series of barks that made the air around it waver and shimmy. His language is appalling, Gunilla said, shaking her head as the blonde shinobi frowned. If Lady Hester came with us, I fear she would burst a blood vessel if she heard his words. I'm glad they've never met. You and me both. I dread to think what would happen if that day ever came. He made a familiar hand sign, and half a dozen cones sprung to life and dashed across the branches and towards Ratatosk, who scurried across his branch to intercept the incoming pests. I'll see you shortly. He patted their heads, much to Gunilla's mixture of amusement and annoyance. A moment later, he took off after his clones to join in keeping Ratatosk entertained. The two girls ideally watched from afar as the clones jumped on the giant squirrel, before the blonde shinobi skidded to a stop, threw his hand back and allowed Rasengan to swirl to life in his palm. It grew and grew until it was the size of a small truck and threw it forward to collide with Ratatosk squarely in the abdomen. The effect was immediate, and Ratatosk found itself flying through the air, launched off his feet. He soon smashed into a higher branch with a resounding impact. Talia scrunched up her face. Doesn't that hurt the big squirrel? She asked, watching closely as the giant squirrel shakily started standing back up. The expression on its face made it appear angry as it glanced down at its burnt fur. I wouldn't worry, Ratatosk is incredibly durable. I've seen him take a lot worse and get back up. On cue, the furry beast wobbled to his feet, the fur on the front of his body scorched from the impact with an incensed look upon his face. See, he's fine. What if he falls off the side? Talia didn't dare look down, but the younger girl pictured it being a long way down to the bottom. Does the world tree have a bottom? There is no bottom, Gunilla explained, but if someone fell from the branches of the Yggdrasil, they would fall through an endless void until eventually falling through a gate that led to one of the 9 worlds, like Midgard and this Yotunheim place we're going through. That's right, the last thing you want is to fall into worlds like Muspelheim or Niflheim. One is a world of fire and lava, while the other is an endless winter of unbelievable harshness. Both are inhabited by giants of the elements of their world. They are prickly to outsiders, especially Muspelheim. Gunilla turned her head to look at Talia. And then you have Helheim, the realm of the dead. I do not know much about that world, for I have never had to venture there in my 500 years of life, but it's controlled by the goddess, Hera. She does not take kindly to the living scouring upon her realm. I've heard she can be difficult to reason with, so most tend to avoid her. Another explosion and both girls watched as Ratatosk sailed over them and impacted another branch far off to the left of them. The squirrel of the Yggdrasil was taking some heavy punishment. Though both girls ignored him and carried on their way, even as their blonde protector pounced over, drop-kicking said beast square in the jaw. Yotunheim man, that was irritating. I forgot how much crazy stamina that squirrel possesses, Naruto muttered, stepping through the portal in the bark of the Yggdrasil. He dusted himself off, ridding himself of pieces of bark and debris that came from his tussle with Ratatosk. Once done, the first thing he did was take a deep breath. The air in Jotunheim was cool and clean in a way that reminded him of home. Untainted by the technological advancement of humanity and the constant growth of cities, the world of the giants remained untouched. Great mountains and forests stretched across the world for as far as the eyes could see, nature untouched and lakes untainted. It was as if he'd stepped back in time when the earth, or Midgard as the Norse would call it, was once the same. He stood there for a moment, taking it all in and letting his mastery of senjutsu weave the power of nature across his body. It made him feel strong, it made him feel alive, rejuvenated. Perhaps coming to Jotunheim was a blessing in disguise. Wow, he heard a few meters in front of him. Gunilla and Talia stood side by side, the young daughter of Zeus now on her feet, and eyes full of wonder as she stared at the various mountains that surrounded the land. They'd arrived moments earlier before the blonde stepped through the portal into Jotunheim, and Talia had been quick to jump off Gunilla's back and stare at the new world around her. He and Hester had taken her away to spots around the United States in the past 5 years, but they couldn't compare to the lands of Jotunheim. That was my first reaction when I saw Jotunheim for the first time. Of the 9 worlds, it's one of the most beautiful, the only ones that surpass Asgard and Vanaheim, though many may disagree. Naruto spoke, putting his hand on Thalia's shoulder as he came to stand next to them. The mountains are so high. Everything is so big here, even the trees were enormous, standing as big as the tallest buildings in New York City. Now that we're here, where do we need to go to meet your friends? The answer she got back was her guardian pointing towards one of the mountains off in the distance, which happened to be one of the larger ones. We're heading right there, Naruto pointed off in the distance, towards a tall solitary peak that sat away from the rest. It was so far away that if Talia held out her thumb, it would be no bigger than her fingernail. That's kinda far, isn't it? Talia asked, before feeling herself getting hoisted onto Naruto's back. If we walked, it would take us 2 or 3 days to reach the mountain. That's why I'm going to run and carry you. He grinned and looked at Gunilla. I can make a clone to carry you too if you like. Gunilla adamantly shook her head. No, why not? You loved it when you were little. I'm not some child you can throw on your back all willy-nilly. Besides, Talia watched in amazement as a set of wings sprouted from Gunilla's back, golden like the sun and each side bigger than Talia in size. I can just fly there, myself. Naruto nodded, impressed at the little showboating Gunilla was showing. Well, okay, if you're sure. We'll be waiting for you at the top. Before Talia or Gunilla could say another word, the blonde shinobi took off from the ground like a bullet and sped across the branches of the trees, his form barely more than a blur. All one could hear was Thalia's screams becoming more and more distant. Gunilla didn't hang around and took off into the air, her golden wings gliding her across the air currents with the grace of a swan. Midgard goodness, it sure is quiet without those two around here, Hester muttered to herself, flicking on the lights of Casa del Uzumaki as she quietly closed the door behind her. Her day at the Fox's Den had been largely uneventful. The usual busy periods came and went, with Melano not so subtly making off-handed comments about her boss and manager gallivanting across Jotunheim. If Hester didn't know any better, she would have thought her brother's child was jealous. Not that the younger goddess would ever admit to such a thing. Making her jacket disappear into her closet up in her room, Hester found herself standing in the hallway, unsure of what to do. Normally, she'd be getting dinner ready by now for Talia and Naruto, and afterwards, ensuring her niece was ready for bed. She'd developed a routine since taking up part-time residence, but now, she wasn't sure what to do with herself. I suppose I could head back to Olympus for the night, she muttered to herself before hearing another crash of thunder booming across the sky, the lightning lighting up the city. On second thought, I think I'll stay here. It sounds like Zeus has been in one of his moods all day. The weather progressively got worse as the day went on. Despite wondering what was causing her brother to have such a hissy fit, her main thoughts were with the blonde and dark-haired little girl, currently a world away. Kicking off her shoes, she stretched out her arms and climbed up the stairs. How about a nice long bath with candles and bubbles, she told herself, smiling at the prospect as she removed a hairpin and let her long and luscious hair flow down her back. I think I've earned an evening to pamper myself. She didn't do it often, but she liked to treat herself when time afforded it. With Naruto and Talia away, why not spoil herself? Minutes later, As the bath began to fill up, Hester found herself walking through the first-floor hallway in a white bathrobe, her hair swept down one side. A book was in her hand, one she'd been reading over the past fortnight. Before bed, she spent 30 minutes reading as a way of calming her mind and letting her body relax into the bed. It was a little habit she picked up from Athena. A thought hit Hester that made her stop. There's no one around. I'm the only one home. Her free hand came up and played with the robe that covered her body. A playful smile was on her face. I mean, who would ever know? Biting her lip and waving her hand, forcing all the shutters and curtains to cover the windows in the house, Hester undid the knot that kept her robe tight on her person and dropped it to the ground. Oh my, look what happened, she feigned surprise, one hand cupping her chin with an innocent look washing over her face. My robe came loose. How terrible. Standing in the hallway, her body uncovered and bare for no one but herself to see, I'm standing in the middle of Naruto's home, naked. A glass appeared in her hand, steadily filling up with wine. I'm about to drink wine in the middle of the hallway. I'm naked. She took a sip and smiled before heading back to the bathroom. Now, I'm skipping to the bathroom, still naked. She laughed and closed the door behind her. Yotunheim landing on top of the single peak that was her destination, she was unsurprised to find Naruto and Thalia already there waiting for her. It was peculiar to see Naruto was sitting in the middle of the peak, his hands together forming a hand sign, bluish energy rolling off him like flames. What was rather comical was seeing Thalia clutching the ground like a lifeline, almost as if she was hugging the earth. Land. I'll never leave you again, she heard the little girl say. She had to assume the daughter of Zeus was not a fan of Naruto's form of travel. So, Thalia is not a fan of the way you travel by foot, Gunilla stated. I can't blame her. You never knew the meaning of restraint. I'm surprised her hair managed to stay in shape. She patted the younger girl's hair down and took a seat on the ground beside her, looking out across the vast world of Yotunheim atop of the peak. Are you giving them the signal? I am. I should only be a moment longer. The aura of chakra around Naruto increased for a split second, tripling in size and making the peak crack and rumble from the sudden intensity. A moment later, it cut off entirely, the aura around the blonde disappearing. That should do it. I imagine the first will be here within the next hour. The big blue eyes of Thalia looked up at him as he came sat on her other side. You still haven't told me who we're meeting. Why ruin the surprise? Naruto replied to her, giving her a wink and took off his backpack. It's been a long day. I can't believe how quickly it's flown by. Unzipping the top, he reached in and pulled out the thermos Hester prepared for them. How about a hot chocolate and a sandwich? Thalia nodded and watched as her uncle took off the cap and poured the warm contents of the thermos into the lid. The scent of the chocolate quickly tickled her nose and she couldn't help but hum in delight. Taking it in her hands, she took a quick sip, and her shoulders slumped in joy. For most children, being at the top of a mountain would have been seen as the coolest thing in the world, but she wasn't one of them. She didn't like heights, and there was no way she was looking over the ledge. She didn't want to think about how she was getting down. She didn't fancy the idea of getting a piggyback from Naruto again. Once was enough for a lifetime. What do you think Aunt Hester is doing back home? A thoughtful expression appeared on the blonde's face. You know, I'm not sure. She's probably enjoying the peace and curled up in bed with a book. Uzumaki residence. Oh, love ya, baby, the goddess of the hearth sang, still without clothes and holding a hairbrush in her right hand. Her shoulders shimmied one way, while her hips went another in rhythm with the song currently playing throughout the house. Oh, love ya, baby. Yotunheim. Yeah, you're probably right, Thalia agreed and hurriedly gobbled up one of the sandwiches sitting on the napkin in front of her. The young daughter of Zeus turned to Gunilla, who sat on her other side. So do you come to Jotunheim often? The daughter of Thor shook her hand in the air. Occasionally. Most of my duties pertain to Hotel Valhalla or Midgard. It's rare for me to visit the others' worlds unless ordered to by Lord Odin. Being offered a sandwich, she graciously accepted. Thank you. So we just wait here? Thalia asked. Naruto nodded. That's right. We wait here until they arrive. Olympus haul ass, Hermes cried, running through the streets of Olympus and narrowly avoiding a lightning strike, scorching the ground and forcing all those in the nearby vicinity to run for cover. Everyone on Olympus knew something was off when the skies began to darken earlier that day, the air heavy with tension as they all looked upon the temple of Zeus that sat atop the peak. Rumors and whispers were quick to circulate, everyone throwing in their 2 drachma on what was causing Zeus's mood to sour, which only got worse as the day went on. Everyone, seek shelter where you can. No one needed to be told twice. Deities teleported away returning to their temples, while nymphs and satyrs took refuge wherever they could find it. Hermes' hand grabbed the collar of his uniform and felt his body get swung through the air, narrowly avoiding another strike of lightning. Rolling along the ground, Hermes inevitably came to a stop, pushing himself up and finding the person who inadvertently helped him from getting struck by lightning. Athena, Hermes cried, stepping forward and clutching the collar of her dress shirt. From the way the goddess of wisdom was dressed, one would think she'd just attended a business meeting, wearing a dark grey suit and heels. Thank the gods you're here, Hermes. What the hell is going on? Athena cried, her black hair whipping around her face as the wind started to pick up across Olympus. I don't know, none of us do. He pointed up the peak, towards the temple of Zeus where the storm was pulsating from. Everything was fine this morning. And then around noon, the storm appeared. It's just gotten bigger as the days went on. It's the worst I've seen in centuries. Hermes and Athena ducked as another stray bolt of lightning hurtled towards them. Grabbing her younger brother, Athena dragged him towards the nearest temple. In that case, it happened to be the golden monstrosity that belonged to Apollo. Banging on the doors, Athena yelled, Apollo, we're coming in. She'd barely finished her sentence when the doors pushed open, offering them entrance. Bolting inside for safety, they closed with a heavy thud. Gods, this is worse than I thought. Come to think of it, where have you been? I haven't seen you all day. Hermes puffed out, his back to the doors. I was at a meeting for most of the day with the four winds. Irritation washed over her expression. Something our father was supposed to do, but informed me last minute to take his place. She held her hand in the air. Now, I understand why. Apollo, damn you. Do you have any idea what's going on? Athena bellowed. She wanted answers. Clearly, the goddess of wisdom had missed something important. She didn't like not having an answer to a problem. And in this case, there was a giant red question mark hovering over her father. Well, both Athena and Hermes turned their heads, spotting a head of blonde hair poking out from behind one of the many golden statues the god of the sun kept of himself in the main foyer of the temple. It's only a guess, but I did see someone head towards father's temple. 10 minutes later, this storm appeared over our heads. Who could piss of our father this much? Hermes asked, recoiling in fright at another boom of thunder. He could actually feel the golden temple shake from the intensity. Apollo gulped, his hands gripping the golden posterior of his statue in comfort. Hera, oh yeah, that'll do it. Hermes gulped, but what could she do that's angered him to the point that he might destroy Olympus? Athena looked thoughtful, her heels tapping against the floor. I think that's the wrong question, Athena replied, drawing the attention of both her brothers. We shouldn't be asking what Hera's done to upset Zeus, but the reverse. What's our father done to upset his wife? All three children of Zeus looked at each other. It took less than a second for them to realize what the likely motive was for Hera's rage and why the thunderstorm was forming overhead. Each had a different reaction. Hermes facepalmed. Apollo shook his head while resting his forehead against the golden posterior of his statue, and Athena cursed in Greek, stamping her foot angrily against the floor. Her father was impossible. Yotunheim. Thalia knew something was approaching the moment she heard her uncle and protector cease talking and watched his head snap up and look towards the sky. Next to her, Gunilla reacted moments later the same way, her blue eyes gazing up at the clouds. The two blondes pushed themselves to their feet, prompting Thalia to do the same. Out of the 9, I shouldn't be surprised he's the first to arrive. He's always been the most punctual. Naruto spoke aloud, a hand coming to rest on Thalia's shoulder. Are you ready to meet some people even older than I am, and a lot bigger? Bigger? Thalia asked, her face scrunching into a frown as Naruto and Gunilla focused on the sky. Doing the same, it wasn't long before the daughter of Zeus spotted what they were looking at. At first, it was a tiny black dot off in the distance, no bigger than her thumb. It was only as the seconds ran by did the object get bigger and bigger until Thalia found her jaw dropping and eyes widening in disbelief. By the time the figure arrived before them, it dropped from the sky and impacted the earth with a shockwave that almost made Thalia lose her footing. The only way the little daughter of Zeus could describe it was that of a giant beetle with 6 insect-like wings sprouting from a 7th tail colored a pale green. It was bigger than anything Thalia had ever seen. It was as big as a New York skyscraper and spied an orange glow coming from behind its armored face. The eyes, perhaps, 6 smaller arms with 3 on either side grew from its main body with horn-like protrusions sprouting from its shoulders. Thalia, I'd like you to meet Chomi, Naruto introduced, smiling up at his old friend. He's known as one of the Biju, or tailed beasts as they're commonly known as. Chomi is the 7-tailed beast. Naruto gave a small salute to the giant entity. It's been a while, Chomi. A distinct buzzing sound resonating from Chomi began to cease, and Talia felt the hairs on the back of her neck stand on end when the enormous creature leaned forward until it stood barely a few meters from them. Naruto, the voice called, surprising Talia and gaining a new look of wonder. The voice was deep, but there was a softness to the voice that the daughter of Zeus hadn't expected for one so giant. You haven't visited us in some time. Where have you been? Sorry about that, Chomi. I've been a little occupied. I figured the Biju wouldn't want me hounding them all the time, so I gave you guys some space. The blonde scratched the back of his head and chuckled. Has everything been well? Chomi shrugged. I can't complain, though that fool, Shukaku, is causing trouble again. Yeah, I heard. Gunilla came to Midgard and informed me what he was up to. Naruto replied. Has Kurama or the other tailed beasts not tried to speak with him? A loud grunt left the Biju's mouth. You'd have an easier time drawing water out of a stone if you think Kurama cares for anything the Tanuki does. All they do is bicker when they run into each other. Slowly, Talia felt the orange glow of Chomi's eyes shift and fall upon her. Who's this? Moving to stand behind Talia, both his hands steeled on her shoulders and gave her a pat. This is Talia. She's a demigod, the daughter of Zeus. She came under my care 5 years ago and I thought it would be a good chance to introduce her to everyone. A deep hum resonated from the Biju. Say hello, Talia gulping. Talia tried to steel her nerves. Hello, she gave a short wave. There's no need to feel uneasy, child. You're a friend of Naruto's, and therefore a friend of mine. Chomi reassured and looked at Gunilla. It's good to see you again, Gunilla. I hope you're keeping well. The same to you, Lord Chomi. A deep sigh escaped the Biju. I'm no lord, lest I need to always remind you. He then looked back to Talia. You took another one in, huh, Naruto. I thought you kept to yourself these days with that little goddess following you around from time to time. Times change, I guess. That's the thing about immortality. Gives you plenty of time to think and adjust. Both turned their heads and Talia looked off in the direction they were facing. Much like moments ago, a large figure made its way towards them, leaping from mountain to mountain with bluish hue engulfing their body. Our next arrival. The rest will be here shortly, Naruto said, smiling as the Talia began to realize the next entity coming towards them was a giant cat, twin tails flickering from side to side. Uzumaki residents knock 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 blinking in surprise. The quiet interior of Naruto's home was interrupted by a series of knocks at the front, alerting Hester as she pushed herself up from the couch. Her peaceful night had been going blissfully. So well, in fact, she'd summoned a bottle of wine from her personal collection back from her temple on Olympus. She didn't indulge often, but for tonight, why not? Outside, the thunder had finally begun to cease but was replaced by a heavy downfall of rain. Whatever was eating her younger brother all day seemed to be dying down, though. It left the king of the gods in a melancholy-like state. She would leave him be for now, but if his mood continued to fester into tomorrow, she'd have no choice but to visit and ask what was bothering him. He could be so dramatic when he wanted to be. Humming to herself as she moved, she threw open the door, half expecting to find Naruto and Talia standing there. Instead, she was visibly taken aback by who stood on the other side. She was drenched from head to foot, her dark hair mats to her forehead and her chitin sticking to her like a second skin. An emotionless expression masked her face, her eyes lacking its usual fire. Hera, Hester spoke, unease laced in her voice. What are you doing here? Hera started but her voice was stuck in her throat. It took a moment to gather herself before anything came out. I wasn't sure where to go. I looked for mother, but she's gone off the grid again. Her expression turned pained, her lip trembling. I know you spend them most of the time here. I didn't know where to go. Hey, Hester closed the distance and wrapped her up in a hug. It's okay. She felt her sister sob into her shoulder. Just tell me what happened. Something happened with Zeus. It would explain the crazy weather over the city. She felt her sister nod against her shoulder. She heard her sister mumble something, but Hester couldn't make out her words. I'm sorry, Hera, but what did you say? Hera lifted her head and spoke the words Hester never imagined her sister would ever say. I left him, Hester. I left him for good. My marriage with Zeus is over. Hester wasn't sure how long she was stood there looking at her sister. The only thing that came out was a word she very rarely used. Oh fuck. Of course, he was the last one to arrive, but then again, Kurama was never the most punctual of the Biju, ground shaking as he moved and tails narrowly avoiding mountains as he lumbered towards their meeting location. Naruto tilted his head up at his old partner. He looked the same as he always did, wearing his usual bored expression that could have given Shikamaru a run for his money. Those two would have been good friends if his role as a Jinchuriki had been reversed with the Nara. Granted, nothing would ever get done with the pair staring at clouds all day, but still, when the fox finally came to a halt, he let out a loud yawn, strong enough to sweep away nearby clouds into oblivion and scratch the back of his head. "It's about time you stopped by, brat." Kurama's voice was deep, hitting a low octave that would send shivers down the backs of those without their courage. "I'm nearly 6,000 years old. I don't think I can be classed as a brat anymore. If anything, I'm an old man." The blonde shrugged and held out his fist towards the strongest member of the 9. "Then again, you're even older than I am. If I'm an old man, what does that make you?" Irritated. "Because you woke me up from my nap earlier." Message ahead. Next time, Kurama moved his neck from side to side, loud cracks, reminiscent of thunder echoing across the land. "You know I can't talk to you in our shared mindscape when we're in two different worlds." The mountain-sized fox snorted but lifted his fist and met Naruto's in the middle, their bond reconnecting after decades apart. "Good to see you again, buddy." "You too," Kurama replied, a rare tone of sincerity in his voice before asking, "You're here to prevent that idiot from going too far?" "Yeah," Naruto sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. "I got word from Gunilla that Shukaku has been pushing his luck recently. He's taken over Utgard Loki's palace." "When did this happen?" Kurama shrugged. "About a fortnight ago. Shukaku kicked him and his cronies out and they came running to Sun for help. As far as I heard, Sun couldn't convince the idiot to leave and let the Jotuns be." Naruto turned and looked at the enormous form of the four-tailed beast, his crimson hair displaying a sheen courtesy of the Jotunheim sun. "Is that true, Sun?" The great Biju blinked and turned his head to look down at Naruto, pausing his conversation with Gunilla. What's that?" "Kurama said you tried to talk Shukaku out of Utgard Loki's palace. Is that true?" Sun hummed, nodding his head. "That's right. I did what I could but Shukaku refused. He's grown bored in the last century and regularly tries to pick fights with the Jotuns. Most won't go near him, though. A rare few try their luck with little success." His enormous hand scratched beneath his chin. "Utgard Loki has been less than pleased by the disruption. He may try to make a move against Shukaku, though I doubt it would do much good." "What a pain in the ass," Naruto muttered. Shukaku had never been the easiest-tailed beast to get along with. The enormous calamity of chakra and sand loved pushing people's buttons and goading them into a fight. In a way, he was a battle maniac, but it was only ever to sate his boredom. It was no wonder Tsunagakure had so many problems with him back in the day. Things got better once the Fourth War ended and he and Gaara struck up their unlikely friendship, but there was always a fear Shukaku might resort back to his old ways. He would have to talk with Shukaku and get him to leave Utgard Loki's palace peacefully. Above them, the once blue sky of Yotunheim was beginning to darken, colors of red, orange and yellow washing over as night began to rear its head. It wouldn't be long until the stars were out. Unlike Earth, where light pollution from humanity had obscured the stars, making them impossible to see, it was not the same for Yotunheim. Thousands of tiny silver dots would be visible, like tiny lights on a black canvas forming different shapes and patterns. "We'll go talk to him tomorrow. Hopefully, we can coax him out," Naruto told the two. "Where are Utgard Loki and the other giants residing at the moment?" "In the forest just outside the palace. I think they're hoping Shukaku will get bored and leave on his own volition," Sun replied, with Kurama snorting in amusement. "Clearly, they don't know our brother the same way we do. Probably need to see him first then." Naruto put his hands in his pockets and felt a chill run over him as he felt the temperature begin to decline. "Best you guys come with me in the morning. I can handle Shukaku, but I'd rather have company. Strength in numbers and all that. I don't want to take any chances with Talia around." "Speaking of said girl, you're so warm and fluffy. I could stay like this forever," Talia voiced. The front part of her body was resting against the paw of the two tails, arms spread wide and putting her whole body weight against the flamed fur. Said tailed beast didn't appear to mind. Rather, she seemed highly amused by the actions of the daughter of Zeus, watching curiously as Thalia's face nuzzled against her. "I could stay like this forever. You are a most peculiar human." Even Gunilla was not as overly friendly and familiar when she first met us. She wasn't. Thalia's big blue eyes stared up at the mismatched pair of Metatabes. Despite the giant cat's body being made of blue fire, the flames didn't hurt her at all. She had a hard time believing it when Metatabe sat down next to her, towering over her like a mountain. It took some convincing and a brief demonstration by Gunilla, after the Valkyrie put her hand on the enormous paw for Talia to give it a try herself. "Oh no." She was so defiant, the two tails explained. She would puff out her chest and announce to everyone that she was the daughter of thunder and that she would bring out heads to her father as tribute. The cat laughed. Her face would go all red and she'd stomp her feet around in a tantrum when we ignored her. She tried to come across as threatening, but all it did for her was appear cute. Gunilla, who was in earshot of the conversation, blushed from embarrassment. That was hundreds of years ago. A lot has changed since then. I remember once she challenged Seiken to a duel and in response, Seiken created a bubble around her and left her to float away through the sky. It was hours by the time she came down and returned to land. A deep laugh escaped the biju. The picture in Thalia's head that formed made the little girl laugh voraciously. It was hard to picture Gunilla, this large, beautiful and strong person once being tiny and being trapped in a bubble of all things. We could recreate the moment the voice of Seiken joined in the conversation, his two beady eyes staring down at Gunilla with a tilt to them. It would take only a moment and no thank you. Seiken shrugged, his tail swishing in the air and causing the forest behind him to tilt back and forth like a pendulum. I could try with you. He looked directly at Talia, who nervously shook her head and buried her face into the Metatabe's paw. Did I say something wrong? Talia has a fear of heights, Gunilla revealed, watching as the enormous head of Metatabe lowered down to nuzzle against the young daughter of Zeus, seemingly making any fear she had from ending up in a bubble many feet off the ground melt away. The biju that were listening all appeared surprised. I know. It's ironic given she's a daughter of the Greek god of the sky. Irony sure can be a bastard when it wants to be, Jayaki added, shuffling over beside his siblings, only to find his face momentarily engulfed in bluish flames, shaking his head as the flames quickly dissipated. Though a stinging sensation remained, he found his sister looking at him with annoyance on her feline face. What was that for? Mind your language. Don't curse with her around. She doesn't need to hear that kind of vulgar talk. Mismatched eyes bore a hole into Jayuki. The last thing anyone needs is for her to start swearing like Shukaku. I won't have it. Someone's a little protective, already, Seiken muttered to Chome. The seven tails merely nodded his head. Ignore those fools, Talia. You just stay innocent and sweet, Metatabe encouraged, appearing delighted as Talia nodded her head and snuggled closer to the large feline. She was growing rather fond of the little demigod, even quicker than the time she'd met the daughter of Thor. New York City. This wasn't her bed. That was the first thing she'd thought about when her eyes finally opened from an exhausting night of falling in and out of sleep. She wasn't sure when her sister had moved her from the front of the house after turning up as a sobbing mess, but Hester had somehow worked her out of her soaked chiton and into a pair of comfortable pajamas. Normally, her choice of attire for bed was a nightdress of varying lengths, but she'd only worn those out of the request for her husband. Nimble fingers running across the top of the covers, the brown eyes of the goddess of marriage stared aimlessly at the ceiling, arms and legs spread out like a starfish, one foot hung over the side of the bed, hair swept down one side in a mess of ringlets and frizzed. She didn't dare look at herself in the mirror. With her blotchy red eyes and messy hair, she must have looked a mess, far from the perfect queen she always tried to present herself to be. I'm not a queen anymore, though, she thought to herself. It was a realization she hadn't had until that morning. 5,000 years as queen, down the drain. The events of the day before were fresh in her memory. The day started as well as any other, spending the morning in her gardens tending to the plants and the animals she allowed to call their home. Roses were some of her favorites, and at the back of the garden was a beautiful bush of peach-colored roses she continued to fawn over even after all these centuries. They'd been a gift from Zeus and one she treasured. Any gift from her husband she treasured and held close to her heart. His gifts over the years had been numerous, beyond the capability of counting, but the roses were one of her favorites. She took special care of them. Former husband, when she thought her day would continue to grow better and better, Aphrodite had skipped into her garden and whispered some gossip she'd heard from the nymphs that routinely tended to her. A rumor she heard one too often and ended up coming true. Her blood froze and her joy turned into an ice-cold fury. How quickly a good day could turn into a bad one. Zeus had fathered another demigod, a mortal woman. Zeus had fathered another demigod with the same mortal woman from last time. She and Zeus had fought many times before, but rarely had they come to blows. If she was blunt, it took a major fuck up for such a thing to happen, but for the first time in a very long time, Hera could say she'd truly lost it. All the anger, the frustration, the pain, the sorrow, it all came out, and once the pressure valve on that container was released, there was no way it was being sealed until the contents were gone. Zeus was in the wrong and he took her blows. All the while the weather across New York spiraled into a storm of epic proportions. It was hours later, after she screamed until her voice became hoarse and her throat began to sting, that she'd thrown the final blow his way. This one wasn't physical, but verbal, and it did the most damage. "We're done. Our marriage is over after that." She teleported away in bright golden light. The last image of her husband was his body sinking to its knees, his face stunned in a way she'd never seen before, an expression that would forever be cemented in her mind. Afterwards, she tried to find her mother, but in typical Rhea fashion, she was nowhere to be found. So she went to the next best person, and under the roof of the one place Zeus would never think to look for her. "Hello world, there's a song that we're singing." Hera blinked and readily pushed herself up into a sitting position as the sound of music from the floor beneath her started playing. Looking to the side and towards the alarm clock stationed on the bedside cabinet, it read 9:04 a.m. That was a lie-in for the goddess, who usually got up around the crack of dawn to enjoy the sunrise and get a start on her day. Hester had most likely been up for a while and left her to sleep in. The music was undoubtedly her attempt at telling her younger sister that she'd slept enough and now it was time to get up. Not wanting to be scolded by the elder goddess, Hera threw the duvet off her body and steadily stood up and grabbed the fluffy purple nightrobe hanging from the door. Next to her bed, a pair of slippers were sitting, with Hera soundlessly slipping her feet inside before making her way out of the bedroom. Walking down the staircase, Hera couldn't help but stop every few steps. The wall on the left was filled with framed photographs of all shapes and sizes. Many looked modern, with her sister present in most of them. 3 people were usually present, each with a young-looking blonde man, who she assumed was the one known as Naruto, and Zeus's mortal daughter. One look at the girl and she could see her husband on her face. It wasn't just the blue eyes but the shape of them too, as well as the nose. One picture was of the 3 of them sitting on the Bethesda fountain in Central Park, a cone of ice cream in their hands and smiling at the camera. The one next to it was the same trio, but Talia was being held in one of the blonde's arms. Her face indicated she was half asleep, and Hester had one hand resting on her back and forehead gently pressed against her niece's. She spied one with Naruto and Talia sitting next to a Christmas tree, presents and wrapping paper everywhere. There were even a few with only Hester and Talia, the most prominent being the one where both goddess and demigod had their backs to the camera and were stood over the kitchen counter. A large mixing bowl was between them, with Hester's hands working whatever ingredients were inside, while Talia, standing on a kitchen stool, was looking up at her in wonder. Hera wasn't sure how long she was standing there. A couple of minutes at the most, if the song in the background changing was a telling sign, but she simply couldn't bring herself to look away. Her eyes gained a familiar sheen to them. They looked like a family, she thought, and felt a lump begin to appear in her throat. Her sister, the one that swore to never marry nor have any children, had a version of exactly that. Sure, the blonde man wasn't her husband nor were they romantically involved, but the way they appeared in the photos didn't portray that. The photos portrayed a husband and wife showering their daughter with love. It was the perfect little family unit. She didn't want to feel bitter or jealous, but the feeling wove its way in there anyway. "Which one are you looking at?" She snapped out of her thoughts and looked towards the bottom of the stairs. Hester stood there with one hand on the banister, dressed in similar attire to herself, with her long hair swept down one side in a ponytail. Thinking quickly, she pointed to a picture, though didn't know which one. Hester climbed the stairs and stopped on the step next to her and smiled when she saw the photograph. The picture featured Naruto and a 6-year-old Talia sitting on the beach, a bucket and spade in Naruto's hand as they attempted to build a sandcastle. A look of concentration was worn on the little girl's face, while the blonde was smiling. Hester hummed contentedly, "I remember that day well." Her mouth widened and turned into a smile. "That was a good day." One of her hands gently grasped Hera's elbow. "Come on, let's go have some breakfast." Hera didn't say anything, though she did nod and allowed her sister to gently guide her down the stairs. She looked over her shoulder and took one last look at the pictures on the wall before they disappeared from view. Hester had prepared a full spread for them, laid out across the table with care and precision. She spied toast, bacon, scrambled eggs, numerous condiments, pancakes, waffles, and even a plate of hash browns. One would think Hester had cooked for a small army or the men of their family. Taking a seat, she wordlessly looked across the table and started putting a little bit of everything on her plate. "How did you sleep?" Hester asked, taking the seat opposite her sister and copying her actions. "The bed was to your liking." "The bed was fine. I slept as much as I could." Given the circumstances, plate full, she picked up her fork and plucked away at the food, taking a little bit at a time. As expected, it was delicious. Hester nodded and poured herself a glass of orange juice. "That's good." Deciding not to beat around the bush, Hester had to ask the glaring question, "So, what's the plan now?" "The plan?" Hester gave her sister a look. "Hera, don't play dumb. It doesn't suit you. Hera swallowed a bite of her scrambled egg before answering. The plan? I don't know. I don't have one. Rhea briefly appeared in her mind. My initial goal after leaving Olympus was to find Mother, but she's gone off the map again. I don't know where she's gone. So I came here, beneath the table. One of her legs jittered and her foot tapped against the floor. I didn't know where else to go. I couldn't go back to Olympus. Then, I remembered you spend most of your time here. A thought crossed her mind. Is it just you? Where is that Naruto person? And she paused as she tried to say the girl's name out loud. Talia Hester reminded her, giving her sister a look. Her name is Talia. Hera made a face before it returned to being neutral and unsure. Yes, Talia. She clicked her tongue. Speaking of, where is the girl? I haven't seen or heard a peep from her or this Naruto since I've been here. Naruto and Talia are currently away for the weekend. They should be back either later today or tomorrow. Hester leveled a concerning look towards Hera. If they were here, I'm not sure I would have allowed you to come in. Your emotional state was a mess when you arrived. Hera knew she should have been offended, but her sister was wrong. She wouldn't openly harm the girl, despite how much she loathed the fact she existed, but her emotional state from the night before had left her hanging by a thread. If she had seen the girl, who knew what might have happened? Do you want me to leave? No, Hester replied with sparsely a moment between the question and the answer. You are my sister and I love you. I will support you and help you in whatever way that I can. You can stay here, but I don't know for how long. If it was just Naruto and I living here, it wouldn't be a problem. He would welcome you regardless. But it's not just the two of you living here. No, it's not. This is Thalia's home and I won't put her at risk. You don't trust me when it comes to my niece. No, I don't. Hester leveled a look at her sister. Your record with the children of Zeus isn't stellar, Hera. You have to understand that you've done some terrible things to children who had no control over their birth and who sired them. Hester brought her glass to her lips. You can wait until Naruto returns or you can make your way before. It's up to you, but you know what my stance on the matter is. Hera nodded. Fair enough. A hand reached from across the table and patted the top of her own, her elder sister smiling at her. I will help you through this, sister. I promise. Warmth spread through her body and the former queen of Olympus couldn't help but close her eyes and smile. I know you will. Thank you, Hester. The two settled into their breakfast, the younger goddess enjoying the fruits of Hester's morning labor. By the way, Demeter will be coming over shortly. Cutlery clanged against the table and a groan escaped the goddess of marriage. Why, Yotunheim, I don't care what you have to do. Just get him out of my palace and as far away from my lands as possible. The voice of Utgard Loki was leaving little room to argue as the blonde shinobi felt the giant's gaze leer down at him. Normally, the giant was fairly laid back and confident, but having been kicked out of his home by Shukaku for over a week, his patience was beginning to fray. It was understandable. He wouldn't like it if he was kicked out of his home either. I'm Utgard Loki. I shouldn't have to deal with this shit. A deep hiss came from behind Naruto that made Utgard Loki flinch. Resonating from the mouth of the Metatabi language, she glared at Utgard Loki. Not wishing for Talia to hear such language coming from his mouth, said girl was resting next to one of Metatabi's paws, her last sandwich that her aunt had packed for her in her hands. The demigod Biju pair had stuck close together since their meeting, with Metatabi taking it upon herself to keep an eye on the young girl while Naruto dealt with her wayward brother. The blonde shinobi put his hands up and placated the giant. I will get him out of your place. I give you my word, you'd better. None of this would be happening if you didn't send these damn creatures to Yotunheim. Damn you and damn Odin for allowing it. A short distance away from Naruto and Utgard Loki, Kurama opened one eye as he lazily sat on his side. Keep talking, see where it lands you. As if to prove his point, he showed off his pearly white teeth, each one as big as a person. One less giant around here might make it more peaceful. The most powerful sorcerer native to Yotunheim gave Naruto a look, before stalking off to join a small band of giants, who clustered together in a group a sizable distance away from the gathered tailed beasts. The giants and tailed beasts preferred to keep separate company, which was of little concern to the nine. Initially, upon their arrival to Yotunheim, some of the more presumptuous and egotistical Jotuns thought it would be a good idea to try and bend the Biju to their whims and desires. Utgard Loki had been at the forefront of that movement. Naturally, things didn't go as planned when they realized how powerful said beasts were and the Jotuns were sent running with their tails between their legs. Some still tried it, but the result was always the same. After their early years of having the likes of Hashirama and Madara to contend with, the Jotuns of Yotunheim were of little concern. Boy, he sure hasn't changed his tune after all these years, has he? Naruto commented. watching as Utgard Loki joined his fellow giants and sent a collective glare his way. They've never enjoyed our presence here, but they wouldn't dare go against Odin, Kurama told them. It's a love-hate relationship at best between the Biju and Jotuns. No doubt they'd like to see the back of us. Let's see how this meeting with Shukaku goes, and maybe that won't be a reality. Naruto took a deep breath and looked over his shoulder. Matatabi, please look after Talia for me. This shouldn't take long. Shall do. Alright, let's get this show on the road. He looked to Kurama and Son. Let's head in. The palace of Utgard Loki didn't look like much of a palace. In truth, on the outside, it resembled a wooden shack, with the key difference being its sheer size. It ran so high in the air it dwarfed even the Biju, who was off a height with the front door. To Naruto, he must have resembled an ant walking through the door of a human home. The inside, however, was completely different. With Kurama pushing the door wide open, the inside resembled a supersized bowling alley that stretched on for miles. Couches and lazy-boy chairs dotted the landscape, each one the size of a New York apartment complex. Chips the size of cars dotted the floor, with streaks of old melted cheese and jalapeno scattered everywhere. It looked like Utgard Loki had been having a boys' party when Shukaku knocked on the door and kicked them out. Son wrinkled his nose as they made their way through. It smells awful in here. His red fur bristled as his hand rubbed his nostrils. Well, Jotuns aren't known for their hygiene. At least, not the ones I've met. Clang woohoo baby. Strike. I know that voice, Naruto replied, looking off in the direction the voice came from. Pushing chakra into his feet, he jumped high into the air and dashed across the top of the couch and tables until he found himself standing at the opening of Utgard Loki's bowling alley. Stood in front of one of the mile-long alleys with bus-sized pins toppled on their sides was none other than the one-tailed tanuki he was looking for. Like the rest of the 9, he didn't look any different than the last time he'd seen him. A large bowl of nachos was grasped in his long tail, and every so often was dipped into by the Biju. Shukaku. Shukaku, what are you doing? Mid-swing, Shukaku turned around and groaned when he saw his 2 elder brothers and the Jinchuriki that once housed all of them. No. Why are you here? Don't spoil my fun. Go away. Stop acting like a child, Shukaku. You should have known Naruto would be summoned here eventually, Son told him, shaking his head disapprovingly. Give the Jotuns their home back. No. Why should I? It's not my fault they couldn't hold on to it. It's their fault for being too weak. We agreed to give each other space and not poke our nose into the other side's business. I have no desire to relocate because of your nonsense, but I'm bored all the time. That's not our fault, Son roared back, causing Naruto to sigh and shake his head. Shukaku, out of all of the Biju, could be notoriously difficult to reason with. Not to mention, he grew bored far too easily. He was like a child in a sense. You give him a new toy, he'd play with it for a few days and then look elsewhere for something else to play with. Yotunheim had been the best option for the tailed beasts, and initially, none of them had any issues with calling the realm their new home. All 9 had their section of the world that was theirs and used it how they saw fit. However, over time, the only one who began to grow restless was Shukaku. As great as the peaceful setting was, it could be sourly boring for someone such as the One Tail and spend the next few centuries poking and prodding the locals. Shukaku, you have to give them their home back. Naruto reiterated what Son said. But I'm so bored, Shukaku groaned, dropping the enormous bowling ball in his hand and letting it roll across the ground. You have no idea. It's been torture. Kurama let out a snort, causing Shukaku to whip his head in his direction with a scowl on his face. You got something you want to say, Furball? The ruby eyes of the 9-tailed fox narrowed. I was merely thinking how you're still a whiny Neanderthal after all these millennia. Kurama let out a long drawn-out exhale. Once a whiny bitch, always a whiny bitch. You take that back. I'd rather eat stones. That can be arranged. Naruto sighed and palmed his face. Maybe bringing Kurama with him wasn't the best laid-out plan. 9 and 1 were known to openly antagonize each other, with Shukaku acting out something that Kurama labeled as stupid. They were like oil and water, chalk and cheese. Poking fun at the other was like breathing for them. Shukaku would get wound up and Kurama would merely act like he doesn't care. Shukaku, Naruto shouted, drawing the Biju's attention to him. I know you don't have much patience and you're easily distracted, but you can't barge into someone's home and kick them out. You have to leave, otherwise, there's going to be serious repercussions. Odin may decide it's time for you to leave and go elsewhere. A loud humph escaped Shukaku and crossed his arms. Then I'll go. Anything's better than this boring world. His tail swung back and forth. Maybe send me to that fire world, or the one made of ice. I'll have fun fighting the idiots that live there. Naruto palmed his face. That's the last thing we need. Stop trying to pick fights, you fool. Sun spoke once again, marching up to his brother and getting in his face. Can't you see reason for once? You're not a child anymore. He hasn't been a child for millennia, Kurama added. He didn't bother looking in the direction of Shukaku. The bloated sand tanuki was an eyesore. Instead, he stared at the ugly decor that covered the walls of the interior of Utgard Loki's home. Were all the Jotun's homes this ugly? I will drag you out of here if I have to. I'd like to see you try. Go pick your damn fleas. Hearing enough, Naruto took his bag off his back and unzipped the top. Reaching inside, he pulled out a moderately sized tea kettle and held it out in the palm of his hand. Coughing, he drew Shukaku's attention and watched as the Biju went bug-eyed at the small device. Why do you have that with you? If you don't leave here willingly, I'll be forced to open the lid and seal you back inside, the Shining told him, giving him a look that told Shukaku he wasn't bluffing. You wanna bet? You don't have the stones to put me in there. You don't know me very well. Shukaku puffed out his chest. You fools won't let me have any fun. You'll have to take me kicking and screaming. He grabbed another bowling ball with his tail and threw it in their direction, only for Kurama to catch it with one of his own. Shut him up already, before I make him. His voice is beginning to grate on my nerves, Kurama told him, receiving a nod from his old partner. Naruto jangled the teapot in front of Shukaku and gave him one final warning. Well, what's it going to be? The reply he got was the Biju blowing a raspberry in his direction. Fine. You asked for this. He removed the lid of the teapot and watched as Shukaku instantly began to regret his decision. 5 minutes later, the group of Biju and demigods watched as the door to Utgard Loki's home swung back open and noticed Naruto, Kurama and Sun making their way back over to them. At first, the group of 8 tilted their heads in confusion when they noticed a certain tanuki was missing from their group. The silence didn't last long though, as a loud laugh from Jayuki caught them off guard and watched as he pointed towards the blonde shinobi. As soon as the other Biju realized what had happened, they started laughing as well. Ha, Talia asked, frowning and looking towards Gunilla for an answer. Why are they laughing? You'll understand in a moment, the older demigoddess answered before looking at her approaching mentor. You had to use the tea kettle? Naruto nodded. He wasn't leaving me with a choice. He was extremely stubborn. The last thing I wanted to happen was Shukaku scrapping it out with another member of the 9. That just leads to unnecessary destruction. He ushered Talia forward. Talia, there's someone I'd like you to meet. The daughter of Zeus watched as Naruto placed the tea kettle on the ground and gave the top of the lid a few taps. Come out and say hello, Shukaku. A low rumble came from inside the kettle as Talia knelt in front of it. She didn't have to wait long as a small beige-colored head appeared beneath the lid, soon followed by a pair of tiny arms and legs and finally, a long tail. The smaller version of Shukaku looked significantly cartoonish compared to his titanic state, barely reaching up to the blonde's knees. He didn't appear pleased by his current situation and looked one thread away from losing his mind as his siblings laughed around him. I hate this so much, Naruto shrugged. You've only got yourself to blame. I did warn you. Shukaku's pride would always be his downfall. Shukaku, this is Talia. Talia, this is Shukaku, the reason we came to Yotunheim. Shukaku looked up at the little girl, who was staring wonders at him and then looked back at Naruto. Who the fuck's this? Naruto was about to answer but found the gigantic face of Matatabi suddenly appearing next to him, giving Shukaku a look that promised death. Cuss in front of her again? I'll end you. Shukaku's face contorted. You can't tell me what to do. His tail poked upwards towards his sister. Fuck, fuck, fuck. Naruto shook his head while Talia laughed, her giggles causing Shukaku to turn around and face her. He's funny, uncle. Shukaku blinked, mildly surprised that the young girl found his cussing amusing. Funny, huh? I could work with that. You wanna learn some cool words? I got a lot more stored up you'll love. His mouth turned into a grin, while Matatabi's looked downright horrified. Here's a good one to know. Someone messes with you, you just call them a coup and that's enough out of you. The lid to the kettle slammed back down, causing the tiny Biju's head to disappear along with the rest of his limbs. Hester finds out about this. I'll be a dead man. He stood back up and made his way over to the Utgard Loki and his giants. Shukaku has been removed. I'm returning your home to you. A grunt left the giant king though. No words left his lips. He merely looked down at Naruto, then to the tea kettle and then back to Naruto. After a short stare down, Utgard Loki merely turned, followed after his fellow giants and disappeared back into the house, slamming the door shut behind him. The blonde sighed, thankful the Jotun king didn't decide to take things physical. It wouldn't have ended well for the Jotuns. Now, he had to figure out what to do with Shukaku. My poor baby sister, come to big sister, let her push away whatever negative feelings you have, an exaggerated voice echoed through the Uzumaki household. The neutral face of the goddess of marriage could do little, as the side of her face found itself resting against the bountiful chest of her sister. A few steps away, Hester leaned against the wall, staring in amusement as the goddess of agriculture fussed over their younger sister. The best way to describe her sister was a combination of Aphrodite and Athena. 1 minute meant she could be a cool and collected goddess who was all business. The next minute, she'd be all smiles and acting like the perfect mum and trying to mother everyone. Of the three of them, she was by far the most free-spirited, enjoying the splendors of life and not above lying with mortals. She loved her sister, but she could be too much sometimes. Please, let go of me, Hera muttered, trying to fight against her sister's grip. I couldn't believe it when I heard. I never thought you'd find the Gojones to leave that bum, but look at you. You did just that, Demeter sighed. I love our brother, but he's not what I'd call husband material. I did warn you all those millennia ago what would happen. Demeter released Hera from her grip. Hester too, if I remember right. I don't think now is the time to be saying such things, sister, Hester replied, giving her middle sister a look when she nonchalantly kicked her shoes off to the side. Yes, yes, of course, Demeter waved off before putting her arm around Hera's shoulders. Jokes aside, are you alright? A concerned expression appeared on the goddess's face. I tried to find you, but it's pretty hard when you cloak yourself. I wouldn't have found you if Hester didn't inform me you were with her, here of all places. Hera shrugged, as well as someone can be after separating from their husband of 5 millennia. I don't know how to describe it, other than feeling numb all over. Hera pursed her lips. It's like, I put all this effort into making our marriage work and finally having the realization that it was all for nothing. I had this moment of clarity when I was screaming at him that years of being faithful and loving were all going nowhere. Demeter gripped her shoulder tighter. Well, I hate to say I told you so. She got a glare in response from her younger sister, but I won't. I'm surprised to see you out of bed though. You're taking this way better than Zeus is. You've seen him? Demeter shrugged as Hester led them all into the living room, where a silver tray sat waiting for them with a freshly boiled pot of tea ready. I have. How is he? Not great. Spent the rest of the night moping around his temple. This morning he was just lying in his bed despondent. I think Apollo and Hermes tried to rouse him, but got bolts of lightning thrown their way. Hester poured the tea. It might be best to leave him be for a while you, she looked at Hera, keep a low profile. I know. I've already decided I'll be staying clear of Olympus for a little while. Hera pursed her lips. Once mother lifts her circle of privacy, I'll go and stay with her. Until then, she turned to look at Hester, which in turn, was copied by Demeter. Oh, you're going to be staying with Hester and her boy toy. He's not my boy toy, and he's older than I am. Still, Demeter leaned over with one hand resting against the cushions of the couch. I've seen him from afar and he's such a hunky dish. It's no wonder Aphrodite has been pining after him. Demeter's hair shimmered in soft waves. Maybe I should take a crack at him. I'd warmly welcome him to my bedroom. Can we please not talk about who you'd welcome to your bed? Hester replied. You've been spending too much time with Aphrodite. She's rubbing off on you. Demeter shrugged. Hey, we're all women here. Men aren't the only ones who have needs. She looked at Hera. Who knows? Maybe now that you're not married, you should take a shot. Hera gave her a look. What? You're single now. You're not breaking any vows. Live a little and show some lucky mortal the goods you're hiding behind those clothes. She pinched the fabric of Hera's gown, only to get swatted away by the said goddess. I'll pass. I'm not looking to jump from one marriage to another. Hera fell back, her shoulders engulfed by the couch as she sank into its warm embrace. Right now, all I want is something to cheer me up and not think about my failure of a marriage with Zeus. She gave her sister a dry look. Any ideas? Or did you just come here to make fun of me at my expense? Oh, I have a few ideas. An hour later, I have to admit, I was rather dubious of this idea, Hera said. Her mug of tea was long gone and in its place was a long cocktail with a pineapple wedge hanging from the rim. A pink straw rested inside connecting to the goddess's mouth. But this does make me feel better. I told you, Demeter said smugly, holding her cocktail in her hand, before she leaned forward. Don't believe him, honey. He's only gonna bed you and leave you high and dry. At the other end of the couch, Hester could only release another sigh. It felt like all she'd been doing was sighing today. I can't believe I let you talk me into this. The three goddesses were all sitting on the couch, ankles crossed and resting against the coffee table with cocktails in their hands all the while, dressed in wedding gowns. Each had gone with a separate design, from the more conservative Hester to openly flaunting her curves in Demeter. Hera, meanwhile, favor a more classy kind which towed the line between the two. On the television was one of those trashy reality shows Aphrodite was obsessed with. "Don't deny it, sister, you're enjoying this," Demeter replied, giving her sister a look. Hester's facade lasted a moment before a look of acceptance appeared. "I'm enjoying the company, sure, whatever you say." Demeter's mouth turned into a smirk. "You know, you look good in a wedding dress, sister." Hera silenced them both before Hester could say anything. "SSSHHH, he's making a move." Minutes later,